This is Taesung, the guy who destroyed his enemies without needing much strength. With his debuff ability, he weakens them, and with a single touch the monster is already down for a nap. His master at level 999 has one single rule: 2 hits have no style. You must take down the enemy with a single blow, and that's exactly what he learned. With the hidden class debuff master, he can reduce the enemy's strength, shatter their defense, lock their reflexes, cancel their resistance, and amplify every point of damage until the enemy just can't take it anymore. No matter how strong the opponent is, after the debuffs stack up, anyone goes down with a single hit. Raid bosses that tried their luck against him got hit by the debuff and always ended the same way, wiped out. But before becoming this monster, he was just a guy who spent years fighting monsters and has the strongest guild in the game. On top of that, he owns the most expensive item in the game, a staff worth $75,000. During a war against Guild Genesis, his own members betrayed him, stealing and handing over his staff straight to Guild Genesis. Without his members and without his items, all he can do is run and try to survive the war. Hiding behind a tree, he realizes he's in deep trouble. With his guild destroyed, the guy breaks down. He cries, believing his fate was already sealed. The traitors who betrayed him find him hiding, holding the stolen magic staff. They say it's just business. One of them points the staff at the protagonist and fires a lethal fire blast. That should have been the end, but the explosion never hits him, because a mysterious old man appears out of nowhere blocking the attack. With a single shockwave, he destroys all 3 enemies. Taesung, in shock, uses his perception rune on the stranger and finds out he is level 999. He's like, what? Is that even possible? He also finds out the old man is an NPC. He says he's been watching the boy for a long time, and that he admires his determination. A system prompt appears saying that if he wants to be trained by the old man, he has to bow down. He hits the floor without hesitation. He receives the temporary class Disciple of God, and they both get teleported to the top of Mount Kowloon by a crystal clear and peaceful lake without any warning. He kicks Taesung into the water. Underwater, the system warns that the purification has begun, and he feels an indescribable pain. He even thought about disconnecting, but then the memories of his miserable life came rushing back, the traitor smiling with his staff, so he swallows the tears and holds on. 1 hour later, the boy comes out of the water feeling invincible. The problem was when he looked at his status panel and found out his level had dropped from 220 to level 1. He panics. But the old man explains that his old attributes were rotten and were holding him back, so everything had to be reset. Now as a reward he will gain 20% more XP than any other player. Taesung is thrilled to hear that, but the moment he finds out he's going to have to go through all of that 100 more times, the guy freezes. Taesung spent 99 days getting beaten in the snow, being stabbed with needles, and going through torture after torture to complete the trial. On the last day, the old man gives a gift to the boy. He's no longer a disciple. His new secret class will be Debuff Master, and his new name will be Siegfried. On top of that, the old man gives him a mission to defeat the 7 successors of his master's ancient enemies. The old man teleports Siegfried into a forest, where the protagonist comes face to face with a level 25 mutant tiger charging straight at him. Then he notices the tiger is carrying a hamster inside a cage in its mouth. Siegfried grabs the only weapon available, a sharpened stick, and hits the tiger right in the skull. The attack did 0 damage, so he activates his debuffs on the tiger and strikes again, and this time the tiger drops to the ground. Siegfried goes from level 1 to 15 in the blink of an eye. When the hamster is freed, this chubby little rat starts trash-talking Siegfried. The boy turns his back and walks away, and the rat panics and starts begging. Lucky for him, the system forces a bond between the two where levels are shared. The pet will grow alongside him. And since Siegfried is the boss now, he gives the majestic Great Spirit of the Woods the most humiliating name possible, Ham Ham. The creature is furious.
What did you say, nigga?
The human asked the pet to relax, claiming that they both needed to gain more power first. Later on, inside a building in the domain, the receptionist of the mercenary guild, who was an NPC named Jericho, welcomed our hero and asked him for the reason behind his visit. The young man explained that he was here to get a license, what she thought would be vital seeing how he needed to climb the levels once again. The receptionist claimed that despite knowing that the hero was one of the immortal players, he still had to test him to see if he was worthy of the license, suggesting that the debuff master go hunting the low-leveled mutants nearby. Yet the hero presented an item as a proof of his worthiness, which the receptionist quickly recognized as the claw of a mutant tiger, which is sometimes used for creating low-level weapons. The adventurer began to brag about how he had killed the white TVs on his way to the village, which proves that he is worthy of the license, leaving the man amazed. Even so, he expressed his doubts regarding the young man killing it alone. Hearing this, snapped back the one with poor clothes back to humility. With that being said, the receptionist asked the hero to follow him in order to give him the license. Later on, the protagonist received the mercenary license. Yet just as he thanked the NPC, the receptionist asked him if he would like a job, which piqued his curiosity. Jericho explained how a giant pack of mutants were heading towards their domain. with some of them having attacked a while ago, leaving the civilians terrified. As the protagonist understood that more monsters had been appearing, the NPC recalled the tiger that he had slain recently, claiming that such a monster had never been seen in this domain, and that it wasn't the only one, as new threats like mutated wolves and buffaloes had also appeared. The debuff master, who grew intrigued by the presence of a level 20 monster in the beginner area, realized that something odd must be going on. With that being said, the normal quest of protecting the domain of Birman for 100 gold had been proposed to the protagonist, who pointed out how low the level of the demand was. So the ashamed man explained how he was the only one in the entire town able to kill a tiger. He realized how backwards this region is, as the man explained that they will need to wait a week for backup, as they didn't have communication circles. The player, who had a habit of not accepting quests with bad rewards, decided to make an exception, feeling that this one would greatly boost his level. With that being said, and to the receptionist's excitement, the adventurer accepted to take on the quest. At the same time, in the domain nearby, inside Shurier Castle, where a carnage had occurred, the crawling man began to beg to be spared, to be chopped off by the weapon of a creature that ordered the humans, that he found stupid, to bow their heads. Even so, it claimed that as the one from a higher race, it shall become the new ruler. Shortly after, back at the Barman domain, the protagonist exited a shop, thanking the owner. He was quickly left irritated by the hamster, who pointed out how he now looked less like a homeless person, so he explained how he had to abandon his training outfit at some point. The warrior was also excited to put his new mace to the use, as the pet proposed to have a meal. This pissed off the hero, seeing how the hamster just had a magic stone for lunch. But the creature, who sustains itself by eating this item, explained how such a low-quality stone couldn't satisfy its hunger, angering the hero, who paid a fortune for it. Yet just as tension began to rise between pet and owner, the protagonist was approached by three men, who recognized him as the one who had killed the mutant tiger. The third one immediately presented himself as Manbok Jang, someone who will be taking part in this quest as well. Before presenting his friend Thompson, and his other ally Ruji, who couldn't help but find the spirit adorable. Meeting them made him realize that those were the other players mentioned by the receptionist. With that being said, the protagonist decided to shake hands, while introducing himself as well. But to his shock, he was suddenly appointed as the leader of the raid. The man affirmed that Siegfried should take the lead, seeing how he was the only one able of killing a tiger, making him surprised by their honesty towards weakness. So that being said, the four of them were now a party, as Thompson asked for instruction. So the leader explained how, based on the explanation of the receptionist, they should go for the butchery ranch, where a massive attack is occurring. At the said ranch, a great clash was occurring between beasts and warriors. Manbok Jang, who struggled against a wolf, asked Thompson to act quickly. With that being said, the foul beast had been struck with a spear, and while the old fat one began to wish that he was younger, his friend realized that something was coming towards them. Manbok Jang turned his gaze, only to find a level 25 mutating buffalo charging at them, everything in its path, and while everyone decided to get out of its way, the protagonist, who noticed, quickly imbued his mace with heavy strike, before charging at the beast, and smacking its head. With the mutant buffalo having fallen, our hero has managed to reach level 20. The man, who feared being discovered by other adventurers, realized that playing solo would have been better for him, as he couldn't use his nerfing skills in public. His two party members came to check on him, so he affirmed being unharmed, before asking them if they were okay. Seeing how the creature had hit them, the fat one explained that he was unharmed, due to him being a tank. Yet his friend, who was resorting to a potion to recover, wouldn't be able to fight for a while. Manbok Jang praised the hero for killing the monster in one blow, which was expected, as he had killed a tiger. Yet our hero tried to stay humble. Just then, someone ordered the beasts to retreat. All monsters heard the command, and rushed to the woods, making the tank assume that they were fleeing, and that he had completed the quest. Yet Siegfried explained that something was odd, as it seemed like the monsters were being ordered around, due to them all going in the same direction at once. But just then, the hero received the follow-up quest investigation that wanted him to know why the monsters had been acting like a pack, meaning that there was still work to do, and so he stated that he will meet his party back at the barracks, as he was going to scout the location of the monsters, leaving the both of them worried. The young man affirmed that he will be okay, as he was the one with the least injuries, making him fit for the task, as the hamster claimed that he will protect him. And while the tanker was left amazed, his friend was blown away once again by the adorable creature. Later on, while investigating, the protagonist's doubts were confirmed, as all were heading the same way. The adventurer theorized that the monsters were going to attack the neighboring domain, upon seeing their footprints pointing towards it. Just then, the pet grabbed his attention. The debuff master called it out for casually playing away from him, but the creature denied, before pointing its master towards something intriguing, which was none other than a structure, recognized as the Shurier Castle. And just as he began to point out how it was giving him a serious feeling of emptiness, he was left baffled upon opening the door, as he had seen all creatures bowing to a single monster, as it was Gorgo, the boss goblin lord, who can control monsters and who was a fabled golden goblin that only appears once every few centuries. Upon seeing this, the hero was left baffled, having understood the reason behind the monster's odd behavior. The hamster asked him about his next course of action, so Siegfried explained how he was powerless, which is why he was forced to regain the barracks. Later on, at the said site, someone apologized for not introducing himself earlier. The bald man presented himself as the leader of the Beerman army, Bullrich, and as the debuff master introduced himself, the commander explained how he had heard about his exploits from Jericho. The soldier then stated that despite his desire to talk more, the remaining time was scarce, and so he decided to cut straight to the chase, claiming that according to the hero, the goblins had invaded the neighboring domain, before asking if they were the ones controlling the mutants. The player clarified, claiming that it was but a single goblin lord, with brainwashing power, who used the monsters to take Schreier for himself, and that Beerman was its next prey. One of the soldiers claimed that if the hero had spoken the truth, they were practically doomed, as they were powerless in front of a goblin lord. The adventurer urged them to evacuate every living soul within the domain, which made the commander think. Just then, the tanker decided to interrupt, asking them about their ignorance regarding the defeat of their neighbor. Despite it being close, the bald one explained how the two backwater domains who lacked communication circles had never truly kept in touch. The young man explained how they couldn't also look into the matter, as they must have been busy fighting off the creatures, which was all part of the Goblin Lord's plan, as he had meant to cut off this domain from the outside by creating this scenario. The idea of their 300-year-old domain being destroyed by goblins filled the commanders with frustration, as they couldn't find the courage to inform their lord. But just then, the hero explained that there was a solution, making the bald one grow eager to hear it. So the protagonist explained that with enough time they could potentially get the opportunity to fight back. Siegfried stated that it will be necessary for him to rise through the levels. The plan was simple, as it consisted of the commander making a team of his quickest men, and use them to scatter the beasts to a maximum. The soldiers would then make the monsters follow them to somewhere near the hero's location, before letting him handle the situation. The debuff master explained that he will join the main battle force after reaching level 30, so the commander explained that despite the adventurer evolving quickly, the boss of the monsters was of level 50, meaning that it will still be 20 levels stronger than the adventurer. The hero affirmed that he wouldn't have the advantage. Yet, seeing how he took on a level 25 tiger when he was just level 1, he had a good chance of defeating the Goblin Lord, and even if he loses against it, he would have bought the necessary time for the backup to arrive. So after thinking for a small moment, the bald one decided to go with the hero's plan. As Siegfried received a new quest to slay the boss monster, his pet decided to ask him something, but he told it that he didn't have the money to get it food. The angry hamster affirmed that he wasn't thinking about his stomach, leaving his master intrigued about his question. The summoner was surprised to see his pet realize that he was hiding something from the commander, and demanding to know what it is. So the creature quickly began to brag about how great spirits like him were blessed with great observation skills. The adventurer explained that he will get a new power upon becoming level 30, a skill named Supreme Contempt, that should help against the Goblin Lord, despite not ensuring victory. The hamster asked the master for the reason behind him hiding his powers, so the hero explained how he wanted to keep them a secret, so explaining that players were nearby, and that they will quickly spread the news of his overpowered powers. But while the Great Spirit called him out for not thinking of it, in a simpler way, he affirmed that it was necessary, in order to avoid being betrayed. When just then the tanker asked him if he was down conversing with the bald one, so he apologized for making the plan around itself. As he apologized, yet they had no objections. Thus the swordsman explains how he will log off in order to rest, and calling out the hero for playing too long, so he explained how he will also go rest as well, with the two of them going offline. The hamster asked the protagonist if he was going tourist, which he confirms, before giving him the money to buy himself a treat. And this unusual kindness overjoyed the creature, since it quickly realized that its master claimed to have no money. Meanwhile, the one logging off affirmed that he'd been lying to him all along. With that being said, the player regained the real world, though as he got up from the capsule he felt pain itching in his back. But the hero wanted to get himself some food, yet upon recalling that he was on the clock decided to content himself with some sleep. Now that he had time to reflect, he realized that many events had occurred, for Beamer had been destroyed, and he was now on the on. Then he also began to recall how he had acquired a heading class after encountering Deus, before thinking of how he was now tasked with protecting Beerman. At first the young man only entered Brave New World for the sake of profit and revenge. Yet now he was enjoying himself, which left hand pleased, as he had realized that his inner kid was still alive, and just as he hoped to quickly get back in the game, in order to have fun while leveling up, he who missed his bet decided to skip the sleeping part and go back straight to the game, in order to ascend levels before the ultimate fight. When just then someone knocked on the young man's door and asked for him, so the very one slightly opened the door, seeing how he wasn't expecting any visitors, since the two workers explained how they were here to assemble his new capsule, which led him into seeing how he didn't buy anything as such. However, the worker explained that they had his name and address on the order, but just as he was about to argue, Then the man claimed that he didn't know much, seeing how you are just following orders, before handing the hero a piece of paper on it. He was being praised for unlocking code 007, making him realize that it had to do with his job of Deep of Master, since according to rumors hidden classes gets various benefits, which made our hero realize that Hive must have been the one gifting him this capsule. Thus this filled the young man with happiness, as he opened the door widely for the two of them, before inviting them in and offering refreshments, which was a change of attitude that surprised the workers. Meanwhile, the entire scenery was being watched by a man in a costume hidden in a corner. Then Mr. Lee was thanked by his boss for confirming that the capsule was now being installed in the young man's apartment, and when asked for the reason behind gifting a complete stranger a new VR capsule, the boss had a hard time explaining himself, so he claimed that he felt some kind of kinship towards the hero, as they both possessed a hidden job, and the player had seen his new set in commercials that starred the Guildmaster of Genesis. Having recognized it as Ogre, a prestigious and expensive VR capsule, player wouldn't even dare to think about purchasing. Therefore this fancy new gadget was now present in the protagonist's home, with the boy drawling over new toy, still amazed by the fact that Hive gifted him something that even when used cost tens of thousands of dollars for code 007. And with that being said, the hero decided to skip his nap and put it to the test. Upon signing it, he realized that the capsule itself was much more comfortable than old models, offering clarity, even better than reality itself. Thus the knight also noticed that his perception had been refined, for he could sense the heat, the burning stuff. Yet upon the realizing that these weren't what he should be perceiving, he grew intrigued only to find himself in front of a burning Burman. To his astonishment, and the beasts were overwhelming the soldiers, as the goblins took joy in stabbing them. Then upon seeing this, the hero couldn't understand, when just then, someone screamed for help. It was none other than our hero's, who was running for his life, from a mutated wolf. Since his legs were about to give out, he affirmed that a Saguaret beast like him shouldn't receive such a death. Yet before he could become food for the wall, for the hero intervened and smacked the hound on the head with his mace. But the hamster couldn't believe his eyes, since his master had came to save him. Then Siegfried quickly checked on the here spirit, only for it to launch itself at our hero's face and screaming at him, staying in the other world when he was about to die. Though the warrior demanded an update on the situation, yet the hamster affirmed that it was clear as day, because the second he and the other players went offline, then the goblin lord along with his forces charged at the town, and they were so powerful that the forces of the domain were unable to stop them. Thus hearing this greatly angered our hero, seeing how the enemy had attacked while they were logged off. This also made him realize that he was the only player present in the town, which the angry hamster confirmed, stating that it was the reason behind this mess. Yet the protagonist affirmed that it was a relief, as he could now go all out, and the path began to fear the worst as his master was about to give him a task. Meanwhile, the knife covered and blood was licked by a goblin, whom he and his allies were eager for more blood, so they had the soldiers surrounded as they desperately tried to protect the women and the children. Then one of the men realized that they were in a static situation, as not all civilians had fled the city, even though he was unable to find a solution, as there was too many opponents to handle, which left hand greatly annoyed, and just as he think that this was the end of the road, as the goblin charged at him with his giant blade, then a flying mace suddenly struck the creature in the skull. Seeing this left the soldier astonished. Just then something quickly dashed towards it, and quickly grabbed it. This was none other than our protagonist, who then imbued with the skill-heavy strike, before smashing the head of the goblin once again. But the astonished soldier had recognized their savior. Then Siegfried affirmed that he knew about the situation, and so he asked the soldiers to get the civilians out of the town, while he takes care of the monsters. Yet seeing how the adventurer was a mercenary, it would only be just to assist him in battle, according to the man, who was then left baffled, as the young man thanked him for his kindness, before activating his 2 nerfing skills, in order to debuff the monsters, and Tai Sung Han explained that he would rather embrace combat as a lone wolf, while the other manual confused the guard understood him. So with that being said, he gave him a belt filled with potion, as this was the best he could do, burning him the gratitude of the protagonist, since the man claimed that it's hurted his honor as a soldier to completely rely on a mercenary. Yea, even so, he decided to see it through the end. Then Tai Sung Han assumed that it wouldn't cause much of a scandal if the characters within the game witnessed him using his true powers. Suddenly our hero effect alerted, as he quickly used this weapon in order to block the incoming bite of a mutated wolf. Just then the goblin was about to make his move and slash our hero with his knife, only for him to quickly shake off the wolf and dodge the blade at the last minute. Since the goblin was eager to slay him, the debuff master realized that his zone of must be painting the monster, and the green beast unleashed a regular slash after slash. The hero called him out for his miserable posture, before claiming that the goblin should have just escaped the moment he activated his skills. Yet it was only elementary according to the hero, because he grabbed the monsters by the head and slammed it into the ground, claiming that he would have destroyed them even without his skills. Thus upon sensing this moment, the player realized why his new set costed a little fortune, as he could sense the movement of his opponent much better than when he had the old gear, and with his quick reactions being refined by his training with Deus, the protagonist felt like he could avoid any strike coming his way. Then as he began butchering the monster, he claimed that this was the reason behind the success of rich gamers, seeing how all this time they had been using the best set there is. And with that being said, our hero managed to chain 3 heavy strikes. This allowed him to reach level 22, which left him disappointed, seeing how much he had slain, making him realize how hard farming was after level 20, when suddenly the hamster arrived cursing his master, as he was being followed by countless monsters, while running away terrified for his life, and asking his owner if the number was big enough. So, with that the protagonist affirmed that he didn't care about the difficulty of leveling up, since he only had to stay as much monsters as possible, as he activated his skills. Then, shortly after Gorgo pointed out how, and an annoying presence from the outside made its entrance, causing a lot of chaos, and as he stepped on a man, he explained that he was but a minor threat that could become more dangerous if allowed to blossom with power. But the monster then stated that this individual wasn't like the ones he just defeated, and the beaten-up commander quickly realized that the individual in question was none other than the protagonist. Thus he firmly grabbed his sword, Detergent, to give him as much time as possible for him to level up. The bald one was very much determined to keep the golden goblin away from the adventurer. He treated it off coward, and claiming that he shall kill it, yet being insulted as such, greatly amused the goblin lord, as he was being bad-mouthed by someone who wasn't even strong enough to protect his lord. So with that, he decided to give him the fight that he wanted, claiming that him and the one that he serves may not keep their life for long. Seeing this left the man in panic, as he began to pray for the young man to level up quickly. But half an hour ago, the hamster declined the task imposed upon him, since he refused getting eaten by the beasts. While lowering them, you have the hero affirm that they were forced to, in order for him to finally level up, before claiming that if nothing is done, everyone will be wiped out. Even saw the hamster didn't want anything to be dragged in our hero's problem. Yet the protagonist affirmed that it was an issue for the both of them, seeing how they will be fighting side by side. With that being said, he affirmed to the creature that he had placed his faith in it, and so, the little hamster accepted, under the condition of receiving a huge load of nuts afterwards, which out here are accepted. Back to the present. Then, Siegfried tried to apologize to his pouting pet, but Ham despised this strategy, and he didn't want to be taunted by the hero ever again, and so he thanked him for his work, before claiming that they were on the clock. Then the debuff master tried to reassure him by stating that all enemies were taken care of, which only angered the creature first, as it would have been impossible without it. With that being, Siegfried said asked the spirit if it had to fill the other task it was given. So the hamster
explained that despite not knowing precisely the location of the boss, he had a faint idea about it, which over here I wanted to hear.
According to Ham, while fleeing the monsters hunting him down, he laid his eyes on the castle for a short time, only to be left stunned, as a great evil aura radiated from inside the walls of the castle. And while the creature confirmed that such devilish presence could only belong to the Golden Goblin, the hero realized that he did it, as the king of goblins. But the lord of the castle must be unharmed, as the elites will always evacuated first. Even so, he had a bad feeling, as the co-wander was nowhere to be seen. With that being said, he decided to proceed quickly, which surprised the great forest spirit, so the hero asked the path to wait outside, in order to stay safe. Yet upon seeing the head of the monster twitch, the hamster was filled with fear. Thus he decided to go with his master into the domain of the Goblin Lord. Later on, in front of the castle that was on fire, that amazed our hero by its size. Then Taesung Han realized that it would be hast to charge in with no plans. With that matter aside, he asked the hamster for the reason behind its presence with him, seeing how dangerous the castle was, but the terrified animal claimed that he was here to help our hero in this perilous situation, which he didn't quite understand. And with that being said, the spirit asked its owner about its strategy, seeing how he was about to face a goblin lord, who might be immune to his attacks. Yet to the creature's shock, its master, who found reason in its words, claimed that they didn't have time to make one, and that in some cases the only good option was to use your strength and dash forward. As he charged at the castle, just as Ham began to curse his master for his madness, he suddenly broke through the door and entered the castle. So Ham began to scream attempt for forcing the door open instead of entering like a civilized person. But the master asks him to keep quiet. But before seeing something intriguing, as he had laid his eyes upon an injured commander, who claimed that he had predicted his flashy entrance, then the hero rushed to him, concerned for his amputated limb, and asking him for the reason behind not evacuating with the rest. And Bullrich explained that despite his weakness, he was still a knight tasked with protecting his lord, which confirmed our hero's doubt that the ruler of Bierman was still in his domain. When suddenly anonymous present spoke to Taesung Han, having recognized him as the adventurer who had been terrorizing his army. That was Gorgo, holding the hand of the commander, claiming that the hero was the strongest man he had encountered, which explains why the man kept on fighting. Though upon hearing this, the protagonist was left confused, yet the golden monster claimed that he knew very well what he was talking about. Then, the creature accused the hero of sacrificing the soldiers in order to get the necessary time to level up. And upon hearing him badmouth the death of the soldiers, the hero grew filled with rage, yet the World One asked him to not mind his words, as it was their duty to protect this domain. And so the protagonist asked him if the unconscious man behind the boss was the Lord of Byerman, which she quickly confirms. Then, as the protagonist asked the commander to have patience, the injured soldier urged the hero to not fall into temptation, and Gorgo then affirmed that the hero's sanity must have been crushed by his weighing conscience, seeing how he sheathed his weapon, so he tried to end him quickly, claiming that this was the reason behind the human's eternal losing streak. But just then the debuff master activated his speed restriction. That decreased the monster's overall speed, so just like that the monster found himself swinging his X into the air. Now the Goblin Lord began to wonder if he had fallen to the ticks of our hero, seeing how he had lost him, when just then the debuff master spoke to the monster, and ordered him to let go of the commander's arm, which greatly angered the Goblin King, who charged at our hero infuriated that he tried to order him around, while carrying the Lord. Yet the swordsman was quick as he had successfully knocked up the monster with a swift kick. Then the monster realized that the power of the hero was at hand, making him assume that he had fastened himself, but quickly ditched the idea, upon realizing that it was him that had lost speed, while sensing some kind of binds chaining his body. Thus the angry Golden Goblin demanded to know what was happening, since seeing this made the hero realize that this skill was more efficient than expected. And with that being said, the adventure gave the commander back his arm, as it was still in better useless in its arms, then between the claws of a monster. So he asked the bald man to let him take care of the rest, seeing how they were the reason that allowed him to level up. Then the master even asked the pet to come out of its hiding spot and guide the injured ones to the exit, and so it quickly obeyed. With that being said, the commander gently asked the hamster to carry the Lord with more care, leaving it quite angered. Now with the injured one being then only one matter remained at hand, which was to slay the Goblin Lord, that was eager to butcher the young man, and seeing how this was the only problem left for Siegfried to take care of, he decided to take pleasure in slaying the powerful Goblin Lord. While the fierce fight went on with the nerfed Goblin Lord trying his best, then the protagonist quickly evaded his giant axe, before bombarding him with mace hits, which greatly angered the monster, who then put our hero into the wall. So Siegfried realized that it was difficult to fight with such a huge level gap, aside from the fact that the monster was now used to the slowliness. But the Golden Goblin then pointed out how the cockiness of the hero suddenly disappeared, before claiming that he was foolish to not take him seriously enough by thinking that such patty tricks could take him down. And just as the monster began to blabber about how he was going to slowly kill the hero and talk to him in the process, then the adventurer was forced to admit that his speed restriction wasn't all powerful, as it was by the support skill. Yet Siegfried knew very well that he didn't have enough power to back up the skill with another, making him regret not using his ultimate move earlier. So just as he assumed that it would be for the best to deactivate speed restriction, he quickly shook off the idea in search of a better opportunity. As he charged at the goblin, assumed that the protagonist wanted a direct fight. Yet they didn't shake off the idea that this might be another rules of his, and just like that, monster boss and adventure clashed together, while enjoyed seeing the hero in pain. And so as he bombarded the hero with attacks, asked to have quick reflexes for without his tricks he would never defeat him. Then with that the Golden Goblin choked slammed Taesung Han, ultimately sending him flying into the wall, and with that the young man began to cough blood, as the goblin on top of him explained how his race had always been treated as barbarians by humans, which is the fact that he couldn't deny due to the weakness imposed upon them at birth. Yet the Golden Goblin wanted to revolt against the reality, as he seeked to lead his race towards greatness, making it feared by humans, and even the superior races. Then Gorgo claimed that as the Goblin King, it was his self-imposed task, which was something a lowly mercenary could never fathom. Though upon hearing this, the hero affirmed that such but violence would never make him worthy of respect, as goblins weren't but a pack of scared the cats. So the protagonist kept on mocking the goblin, leaving him quite angered, and so he decided to end him using
his powerful weapon.
With that came the long-awaited perfect opportunity that the hero seeked, for the slowing skill had been deactivated, and the weapon of the goblin caused the great destruction. This caused the monster to mislead his strength, as his weight suddenly changed, leaving his weapon to be stuck in the ground, which made him assume that this was the plan of the hero all along, the same hero who Mercedes bombarded him with mace attacks. So the Goblin Lord was now at the mercy of the protagonist. Yet just as he was about to deal the final blow, the Golden Lord suddenly whistled. Then the debuff master noticed something alerting, as the steed charged at him in order to protect its master. And with that, Siegfried was knocked a few feet away, while Gogo explained how he didn't want to cause more damage to the castle, before explaining how this was unexpected from the young human who forced him to demonstrate so much effort. Then Monster affirmed that they had reached the end of the line, as is true strength flight and brainwashing, that he will use in order to wield the greatest mutant he created. And with that, he ordered his steed to charge at the young man. So the mutated tiger was quick and its claws were powerful, as it immediately slammed our hero into the wall. Then Gorgo let out a mad laughter, claiming that the hero must be honored seeing how he will die in a castle. But to the Lord of the Goblins, shocked Siegfried affirmed that he will be the one meeting his end today, since Infinity called how the monster called him a lonely mercenary, who could never understand a greater purpose, which he affirmed to be wrong, and just like that supreme contempt had been resorted to. This reduced any harm caused by the Goblin Lord, while increasing the damage that he takes at the same time, as he was of higher level than Taesung Han. So Siegfried explained that he wasn't an ordinary mercenary, as he attacked the monster while claiming that he was the debuffed master, and upon taking the Goblin Lord and completing his quest down Taesung Han affirmed that he was the one fated to become the one above all. Then with that being said, the sun finally began to set, long day, while the monsters were now freed after that. The Golden Goblin had met its demise, and just then one of his goons was smacked on the head by Manbok Jang, who realized that the quest was completed by the protagonist thought of how all goblins had been slain. Shortly after, those with minor injuries worked alongside each other in order to restore the town. Meanwhile at the barracks, our hero shocked a potion which filled him with joy as it had restored his HP, and all began to look at him oddly, as he loudly claimed that nothing in real life beats enjoying a potion after a tough fight. Yet Siegfried was still amazed by the fact that he took down the Golden Goblin without any help. But he also knew very well that if he didn't have enough mana to activate his last skill, he would have certainly been defeated by the monster. This skill, whose power depends on the level gap, was greatly superior to the other powerful nerfing skills, but due to the reset time he decided to use it wisely. And yeah, just as he began to think of how he couldn't give his powers a secret no longer, he was approached by a man who was concerned for the hero's recovery. This one-handed person was none other than the bald-headed commander. While Bullrich praised the hero for his great energy, as his facial expression showcased his improving state, and when asked if he needed more rest, the soldier explained how he was bored and that his lord demanded him to guide the protagonist into the castle. Then Siegfried asked about the lord, seeing how critical his condition seemed back then, but Bullrich explained that his liege managed to survive due to the adventure's intervention, and that his health had been improving. The commander then began to laugh, claiming his master was blessed with the health of a warrior. Yet the hero had his doubts due to his frail appearance, so Taesung Han and took a look at the place the limb of the warrior used to be, and apologized to him, claiming that he had lost an arm due to his tardiness. But the bald one explained that he only felt thankfulness towards the young man. Since his intervention, I love the salvation of the entire domain, and that's his arm was meaningless, in front of the safety of his homeland. With that, the debuff master affirmed that the bald one was a true knight, leaving him embarrassed, and so he asked him to be quick, as everyone was waiting for his arrival. Then upon setting foot in the castle, they were welcomed by the trembling Baron Bergman, after recognizing the young man as the savior of his domain, and the protagonist was glad to see the old man recovering well. Introduced himself as Siegfried, a name that greatly impressed the lord, so the Baron decided to show his gratefulness by bowing to the savior, what affirmed that it wasn't necessary. Suddenly he was struck by a back pain that left hand to struggle on the ground as his guards rushed to help him. Yet seeing this made the hero recall the words of the commander regarding the great health of the Baron. Then the old one apologized, while stating that he didn't fully recover, before expressing his gratitude towards the hero once more, and Siegfried tried to stay humble, claiming that he was paid to assist the army, and that he wasn't worthy of such praise. But the Baron explained that the drive of our hero was meaningless, as he had saved Bierman by putting his own life on the line, claiming that he had saved their peaceful land from the grasp of the goblins. Then Taesung Han's eyes suddenly sparked upon hearing that the Lord had a thank you gift for him, which he recognized as the quest reward. With that being said, the overjoyed young one followed the old man, hoping that the reward will match the struggles of this long quest. Shortly after, as he followed the noble into the castle, now the hero recognized this chamber as the one he fell in during his fight with the Gorgo, and was left shocked by its actual colossal size. He couldn't help but compare it to an altar, as the old one explained how his ancestor, an antique collector, built this treasury to store his collections, and that only a few pieces of it remained, as the rest had either been lost, sold. Then with that being said, the old man offered the young one left he deemed to have value inside the treasury, so Siegfried quickly opened the box and was left amazed, as this was a coupon for the Mercedes Atelier. Since the time of old, the continent bus subject of a balanced rise in the arts of magic, science, and forgery. For millennials, these three fields showed a steady growth rate, until in each of them began resembling the others, before fusing together, thus leading to the birth of the artifacts, which were the peaks of blacksmithing, magic, and alchemy, with three great workshops monopolizing the world of artifacts. The first being Autonica, recognized for futuristic technology, the second being Bersticarelian, that was well known to create deadly weapons, yet the best among the three was the Mercedes Atelier. Each of these companies were a great year respected throughout the continent, as they became known as the three great workshops. Now the reward for slaying the Goblin Lord turned out to be a coupon to get access to the services of the best workshop in the continent. And upon seeing that this coupon could perfectly enhance any item 12 times, regardless of the levels, the hero was left amazed, as it should cost more than 1,000 gold. Then the old man explained that 7 centuries ago, Mercedes, who had just opened, encountered money problems, and so they began to say coupons for 1,000 gold. Yet back then, this was a high price to invest in a newly formed small atelier. But one day, a particular individual helped the soon-to-be great workshop get rid of its money problems. This was none other than the ancestor of the Baron Count Graham, and despite not knowing if he bought the ticket to make a great investment or out of pity, he claimed that his action brought great profit. So the Lord then affirmed that the coupon had now found someone worthy of it. Yet Siegfried explained that this reward was too big, as it most cost a fortune. Yet the old man affirmed that it was never his possession, since it was destined to become the property of a descendant of the count who would deserve it. Yet they said descendant never appeared, and upon seeing the old man lacking the world to describe the potential of his son, the hero realized how weak he must be. Then the old one decided to demand a favor from the protagonist, which piqued his curiosity. So he explained how back in the battle, he woke up for a short moment, while being dragged outside, allowing him to lay his gaze upon the burning and strong determination present in the eyes of the young man. But Siegfried became embarrassed as the noble began flattering him and claiming that he realized at that moment that he was destined for greatness and fame. Thus the Baron explained that the favor he wanted to ask him regarded aiding his spawn, while the noble explained to the hero that he wanted to make a great investment like the Count and that his good eye made up for his many quirks. And after thinking for some time, the hero finally accepted, as he promised to the son of the noble he acquired a new quest that consisted of meeting the son in the capital in order to repay the kindness of the father. Yet just then the protagonist felt scammed upon realizing that he would have gotten the coupon even if he declined this new quest. Then, after getting out of the castle, the hero began to wonder about the next step regarding the great coupon. For you're right, that selling it would bring him a great fortune, which would allow him to get rid of his dad as well as buy a new apartment for his mother. But with this he also imagined how his master would begin screaming at him for this foolish mistake before beating some sense into him, and so he decided to save it for the laster. Later on in his journey, as there were other ways to make a profit, then Siegfried began to wonder about the whereabouts of his hamster, as he had been missing all day, and the hero deeply desired that his pet didn't fall into some weird business again. At the same time, then the great forest spirit was bouncing his belly before it's working and asking its audience if it was satisfied, as the adventurers were blown away by the cuteness of the creature that affirmed that it didn't dance for charity. With that being said, the little one was given an acorn as a reward, while the overjoyed creature began to think of an extract before deciding to imitate its stupid owner, only to notice that the sad imbecile was standing right behind it, and Thaesong Han called out the creature on shamelessness, seeing how it was ready to do anything for snacks, but affirmed that it was forced due to him being broke. Yet just as they were arguing on how the patch would nourish itself with magic stones instead of nuts, Manbok Jang stated that they had been searching for him. So the hero explained how he was to meet someone in the castle, so the man pointed out how he was yet to receive his reward. Then the hero affirmed that he was here to get it, while the fat one claimed that this was the most money he ever made in game, unlike his friend who ran off at the last minute. Still, Taesung Han decided to not ruin the man's happiness by revealing that he had obtained a coupon for the greatest workshop. And with that being said, the receptionist welcomed the protagonist, who claimed that he was happy to see him well, explained that he was left unharmed due to the hero's efforts, unlike the building of the guild that will cost a lot of money to repair. Yet Jericho decided to give the young man his reward of 5,000 golden coin, which the hero was thankful for, before explaining how he was sorry about the guild. Then the receptionist, who realized that the hero must have received additional gifts from the Lord, claimed that he will keep the secret, which was much appreciated. And with that being said, the hero decided to ask the NPC a question, piquing its curiosity. So the goblin's lair wanted to know the whereabouts of the remains of the golden goblin. Then the man revealed how it was near the lake of the blue man. According to the NPC, his lordship had hung the goblin lord on a stake to serve as a warning for his subjects that ran away. And while Jericho explained that this was a heinous scene, the protagonist realized that the old man, what's colder than what he had imagined. With the quest being settled, the young man decided to depart from this domain, before reflecting on how his short days here allowed him to rise through the levels, making him wonder if Dios brought him here on purpose. Yet regardless, the hero felt thankful towards his master, seeing how wonderful the beginning of his journey was. Then just then, a powerful presence arrived and screamed to her student, while asking if he was inside the building with a voice so high that it pierced the young men's ears, but annoyed by this loud voice who had almost made them deaf. Then Siegfried, who realized that this voice screaming for his student wasn't much alien, began to assume that his master was waiting outside. So a crowd began to form itself outside, and everyone was impressed by the power of the NPC. The hero tried to get closer, then quickly noticed that the old man in front of him wasn't Dios, and the swordsman then claimed that he had finally found his disciple, while looking at the direction of our hero. So Siegfried asked the old man if he was talking about him, which she confirms. Then the hamster assumed that the intimidating swordsman was the master of the hero, who denied, while underlining the power of this one. And upon a resorting to ruin of insight, he was left stunned, since this was the level 361 well-known NPC, known as Wethigus, the Sword Emperor, who was a member of Stellar 5. Then upon seeing the reaction of the young one, the old one assumed that he had been recognized, so he presented himself as the ruler of the one-edged sword, who can cut through anything. And the old one then gave his name, claiming to be the strongest among the Stellar Five, before displaying an insane amount of order. Now the protagonist knew about this group, as all 5 of them were great fighters, well known around the continent, who became masters, and while Taesung Hun was left amazed by the fact that he had met a level 361 in this small town, he recalled how he met his level 999 master in the woods. But just as he began thinking that remote location had a better chance of containing powerful NPCs, the man appeared in front of him, which startled the hero who has the old man. Why was he treating him as his student? The Sword Emperor claimed that if he says it, it must be true, so with Begus assumed that the hero was still unexperienced regarding the ways of the world, and decided to explain his own greatness, as well as the power of Stellar Five. Yet the protagonist explained that there was no need, as he himself began to explain how the members of this group were all terribly powerful, which pissed off the old man, seeing how unfazed the young one seemed. Then Taesung Hun politely claimed that he already had a teacher, and upon hearing this, the Sword Emperor claimed that it wasn't important, as he could just ditch him in order to become his student, leaving the protagonist quite pissed off. So Siegfried claimed that the old one should show respect as his master was stronger than him, making him assume that he was from Sovereign 3, yet the hero affirmed that his teacher was even far more powerful than those 3 who surpassed the 5s, and the Sword Emperor had a hard time believing that there was of destruction. And after training tirelessly for many decades, the 120-year-old man finally became a master. Even so, the sensation of a void replaced the joy that should be inhabiting the man's heart, yet he didn't understand why he couldn't fulfill, seeing how he had realized his long life dream. Well, just then he noticed something nearby. As an experienced swordsman was educating his student on the ways of the sword. Then upon seeing this, the 120-year-old man finally realized that he needed a student. So with Igitu he realized that he should teach someone his perfectly sharpened skills, so the best moment so that they wouldn't die with him, and so he began scattering the continent, while searching for one. Yet many candidates were at his disposal. Some had massive quirks while others were practically dead. But this began to panic. 2 decades to teach a young one. Yet seeing how he was above 100 years old, he could perish way before then. Then the elder realized that he hadn't visited Bierman yet. So the man explained that he had his reasons to come to his domain, and that upon seeing the youth he quickly realized that he was the one destined to inherit his knowledge. Still, even after hearing his backstory, the youngster refused. Thus the old man pointed out how this was the reason behind him proposing the game, and after seeing that words were useless, then the boy was left intrigued about his next action, as he couldn't flee from this powerful opponent. Even this situation came with its own quest. So with that being said, he realized that he was forced to participate in the game, thus he asked about its nature. Now Witegas explained that it wasn't complicated, for the challenger only needed to strike him. Indeed, according to the elder, in order to win, the youth would need to inflict any harm on him, no matter how small it was, using an attack of his choice. Still, he reassured him that due to the power gap between them, he would not resort to mana, but instead defend himself with his armor. And the young warrior began to think of how opposed he was to this idea, as the man bragged about his own strength. Yet he then recalled how the swordsman claimed that he wouldn't be using any mana. Then, just as Witewangas asked the boy if he wanted to back down, the youth asked if he was aware of his name, but the Sword Emperor affirmed that names weren't important, as he could learn it later. So upon hearing this, the young one pulled out his mace, claiming that the man didn't want him for who he was, and that he just needed someone to inherit his will. And as he activated all of his skills, the hero explained that he would never become the student of such a man who considered disciples as something so plain. However, the old warrior affirmed that he only wanted to hear it if the challenger managed to defeat him. Now the determined Taesung Han seemed certain of his own victory. Then he dashed towards the man, affirming that he would win this game, because the swordsman assumed that due to the youth's inexperience, he would focus on nerving a specific part of the body that he wanted to strike. Still, the elder was certain that such tricks could not work on someone as powerful as himself, and seeing how he could easily predict the area that would have been debuffed. Yet just as he was about to detect the weakened part, he realized something was odd, that the nerfed area was already a weak part itself. Then the hungry hero charged at him head first, and before swinging, he raised his mace with all of his strength, suddenly dealing a great amount of pain to the elder. Thus this resulted in a great shockwave. So the crowd was left deaf and confused, as it didn't quite understand what had just happened. Meanwhile, the fat man and the NPC began discussing the great talents of that warrior that allowed him to defeat the Goblin Lord despite being low level. But just then Jericho noticed and drew attention from the others that the member of Stellar 5 had met his end while standing still. So the victorious one confirmed his doubts, realizing that even masters couldn't reinforce their sacred organs. And though not proud of himself, he affirmed that this would be a lesson regarding not playing such games again. Now as a reward was proposed, the disciple realized that he had won the game. Still, Taesung Hen began wishing that the prize would be never seeing this old man again. Then the shaken-off hamster asked the youth for an update on the recent situation, and the owner quickly checked on the pet, who claimed that it was now suffering a headache due to the elder's attack, which relieved its master. So with that being said, the fighter proposed they flee before the swordsman woke up. Yet just then, he remembered that he had something to do before this intriguing encounter, so Ham reminded him about finding the golden goblin. Thus, the seeker claimed that he wanted some of its blood before it got rotten, in order to fetch a good price. And with that being said, the two of them went on their way. 3 decades ago, a level 500 python once appeared in the ruins of Sohoka inside the kingdom of Magellan, and this was also a place reputed among adventurers, who ranged from level 40 to 60. Nearby, even resided a most genetic build. There, many players were searching for new party members, while others were proposing paid services in order to help others level up. So one of them was a frustrated brown-headed girl looking for a new teammate. Then she was approached by someone who was interested in the offer, asking if she wanted a dealer, as he wanted to test out his new weapon. But to his shock, the lady claimed that they only needed a buffer, thus making him leave annoyed, as everyone was searching for someone with this particular job. And the level 48 elemental mage named Gosran was surprised to see that there was no priest or buffers among this giant crowd. Therefore, the lady quickly realized that everyone else was also searching for support-type players and had been at it for hours. But just as she was about to give up, then she suddenly noticed something intriguing, as a new face had appeared in the ruins, which she assumed to be a beginner. So the curious one quickly decided to check his stats by resorting to the Rune of Insight, and upon examining him she was left baffled. Then Gosran quickly stopped our hero, who was left intrigued along with his pet, as a sparkling aura was dwelling around him. Now the lady with red cheeks asked him if he would like to become her party member. Later on we see the protagonist submitting payment using a machine. At the end of this last quest, he decided to settle some problems in the real world, most of them being his dad problems, as he owed $225,000. So this made him realize that the loan sharks who came to bully him regularly hadn't visited in a while. Yet he decided to take it as a good sign, as he walked happily in order to get a meal, hoping to never encounter them again. But just then, he noticed an arrangement in a fancy car with his girlfriend. So the protagonist wondered about the value of the car while thinking of how he had made some profit during his last quest. Yet his fight against the Golden Goblin was sheer fortune, as low-level players didn't have many opportunities to encounter quests with high rewards, and the economic system in Brave New World was just as complex as the real one, since those who are level 200 and above are given highly profitable quests and the opportunity to do piggybacking for the lower levels, and if the gamers excelled at the game, they would have the opportunity to start a professional career. Moreover, talented players could even use their natural charm in order to start streaming, meaning that the hero would have a better chance at making anything once he ascended the levels, and despite not owning anything of value except the capsule, still Taesung Han dreamed of one day having an expensive car of his own, as well as a big penthouse, and the young man was also eager to find love in the arms of a beautiful lady. But just then he was knocked back to reality by his pet, so Siegfried asked Gosran to tell him what she just said, as he had been distracted. Then, after hearing that she was looking for a buffer for her party, the hero realized that she had used Rune of Insight on him and assumed that he was a support, thus leaving the young man embarrassed, having assumed that he was the subject of her interest, and just as he was about to decline, yet Hamming accepted in his place. Now the owner began to scream at the pet, yet the pet didn't want to hear any of it, claiming that his obvious master didn't realize that the girl had a thing for him, and while they argued, the girl looked intrigued upon assuming that the hamster was the hero's pet. So he had no choice but to agree with the hamster, as he had to reveal his skills at some point, so he asked if he could just cast needs from the back. Then Gosran affirmed that this wouldn't be a problem, seeing how they had dealers for the front line, so she gave him puppy eyes as she asked him if he would accept her offer. Meanwhile, a sneaky smile appeared on the hamster, upon seeing the speechless reaction of his master, and with that being said, he accepted to join the elemental mage. Later that same day, in the far west of the ruins, now the hero began to think of his whereabouts, as the ruins were once a giant city that was completely annihilated by Python the lightning serpent 3 decades ago. Even despite the death of the monster, its power contaminated the earth, thereby making the ground a natural spawn point for light attribute monsters. Reading this made the hero realize why monsters here had light powers, while one of the party members asked the elemental mage a question that matter regarded the hero, as the man doubted his capacities, seeing how low his level was, but she affirmed that it shouldn't matter, seeing how he would be their support, while they are on the front line, before stating that she would help in case of emergency. So the man began to wonder if the elemental mage's kindness wasn't making her too naive, before claiming that he was uncertain about the efficiency of a debuffer. And Gosran explained that she couldn't find any of the regular support classes, before stating that they should work as hard as possible regardless. Suddenly the mage noticed something odd, so she quickly lowered the head of her companion in order for both of them to evade a powerful attack. Then Siegfried realized that they were now in front of the monsters infected by the python, upon laying his eyes upon them, as they were none other than laserlings, which were level 35 spirits with light powers who always attack in packs. With that being said, the party leader asked her teammates to brace themselves for combat, before stating that she and Itz would fight in the center, while the tanker parries the monster in the front. She then turned to the protagonist and asked him to cast spells from the back. With that being said, the spirit lizards began their attack. Now a fierce battle broke down between monster and human. Then the swordsman used his weapon in order to deliver a powerful slash, but the party member asked him not to rely on his tankiness and to avoid damage. Yet the man affirmed that he was unharmed, before claiming that they didn't have anyone on the team that could heal their wounds or enhance their abilities. So the man claimed that debuffs were useless against these small monsters, making him irritated by the presence of the hero who would get a share of the rewards. Yet just as he began to claim that they should move on to a bigger target, many dots appeared on him. The man was just baffled as he noticed something coming his way. Still, it was too late to intervene as he had already been struck from all directions. And just like that, the man suffered great damage, ultimately leading to his fall. Then his party member couldn't believe her eyes, as they all found themselves surrounded by countless laserlings. Now the girl affirmed that the lizard pack was too big, and while Gosren urged them to retreat, it was useless as they had nowhere to go. So the elemental mage began to think that she should have been more worried, as the number of enemies suddenly increased, and so she decided to give her 3 returning scrolls to her 3 remaining teammates while she fights off the monsters alone. Yet to her shock, the support came to the front line, claiming that those tickets would be useless. Then Gosren was left shocked upon seeing that the hero had seen through her plan, as he called her out for not using such an expensive item on herself alone. The protagonist affirmed that he uncovered the elemental mage, as such sacrifice would be expected from such a kind person, and he then claimed that people would try to abuse her kindness one day, before asking her to use the scroll for her own sake, leaving her concerned about him. But Taesung Han affirmed that there was no need to escape, seeing how it wasn't dangerous at all. Just then, all were left shocked, as Zone of Mortality and Zone of Frailty had been activated, engulfing the entire battlefield. So the protagonist then affirmed that with his skills now in action, they could freely wipe out the pack of laserlings. And just like that, the party of 4 began once again to fight back. Then adrenaline filled the veins of one of the adventurers, who quickly charged at the enemy, and began eliminating the lizards one slash at a time. He was delighted by how fragile his opponents had become. With that being said, the hero warned that despite the efficiency of his skills, the lizards still have the same stats, meaning that they should be wary in order to avoid death. Now Siegfried was blown away by how little challenging the situation was, seeing how he was gaining EXP just by casting nothing spells, making him assume that he should become a specialized debuffer. Well, just then, someone warned him of an incoming attack, and the elemental mage came at the last moment in order to shield our hero, before quickly checking up on him, as he expressed his gratitude toward her for this quick save. Then upon recalling her quick moves to save the other party member, the hero realized that she had excellent reflexes worthy of archer and rogue type jobs. This also made him realize that she is wasting her potential by gaming as an elemental mage. And a little while later, a level up occurred. So all were left amazed, seeing how everyone had at least ascended a single level, to the point where others might assume that they were hacking. Then someone asked the adventurers if they enjoyed the city experience. Now Siegfried explained how joyful it was to see them happy with his skills, that they had been doubting a little while earlier. Yet the one who was uncertain of his efficiency claimed that he had faith in him from the start, while the girl explained that he was much more useful than other supports. So Taesung Han realized why debuffers always abused their positions, seeing how the man was trying to defend him in order to make his boots. Then the lady explained that she had never encountered a class specialized in nerfing, ultimately startling our hero upon asking if this was a hidden class, so he decided to lie, claiming that if it was a hidden class he would have enrolled in a major league and let them farm his EXP. Yet when asked about the rank of his class, he claimed that it was a unique one that is only good for debuffs. This made the man assume that it must be a new feature added by the developers. Despite classes being categorized in 4 ranks, one would stay hidden on the change of the secondary one. Thus Taesung Han decided to always keep an eye open, thinking that it was a mistake to reveal his powers in order to protect the secret of his class. But just then he was approached by the elemental mage, who quickly offered him all the rewards they got, which were low-grade crystallized lights that are the remains of the python's power, and he tried to argue that this reward was too big, so she explained how they always give the treasures to the support, before thanking him for making the run easy. With that being said, he decided to accept, when suddenly the elemental mage grabbed him by the hand. Then she asked him with an innocent expression if he would stay a member of their party a little longer, and so he claimed that he would stay with them, as it would be a bother to find new teammates for each raid. This left the rest of the party overjoyed, as the talented debuffer was now a part of their party. Now Siegfried expressed how happy he was to have a normal gaming life, while the hamster called him out for only accepting for the sake of the girl. 7 days had passed since our hero joined the party, who just finished its business in front of the Intervention Hotel of Sohoka, even despite not encountering any major quests like the Affair of the Golden Goblin. Still, the protagonist had his small victories, like adding new support skills to his arsenal. Then the pet asked the master if he was going to do the same ritual before logging off, so he confirmed, claiming that he must use his skill to the fullest. And the first step was to gather the crystals he had acquired on his last mission, before resorting to his new skill, Absorb Attributes, which allowed him to ingest the stones and gain 0.36 light attribute resistance, as well as 0.36 light energy. So Absorb Attributes, which was unlocked at level 35, allowed our hero to absorb attributes to increase his defense against them, create the skill after consuming enough. This skill also allowed the user to define his other powers using the attribute energy. Even so, the hero didn't know how much energy he needed, meaning that he didn't know when he would be able to upgrade his powers. And Siegfried also planned to quit the party, as he would unlock Flying Spur upon reaching level 45. Thus he would announce to the others that he would leave the next day upon reaching the desired level. But just then, he remembered the tender tone that the elemental mage used in order to ask him to remain by her side. This made him blush, and so he decided to make up his mind the next day. Now a new day had dawned on BNW. Then Tae-sung-han opened the door and apologized for being late. But just then he quickly noticed that many adventurers were present, so he asked the pet if anything had happened while he was offline, but the hamster was just as clueless. Just then, one of the adventurers recognized our hero as the debuff master. With that, all rushed at him, with each player begging him to party up with them. So just like that, the hero found himself drowning in a pool of annoying offers, when suddenly, a savior grabbed his hand, which was none other than the elemental mage, who used her wind powers in order to make her way through the crowd. And as she pulled out 2 return scrolls, the hero was left confused. Just like that, the debuff master and the elemental mage were teleported away, thus allowing them to set foot in another location. Then Gazran explained that teleportation always made her feel unwell. While the protagonist recognized this place as the location of their first trade together, the elemental mage explained how glad she felt to have set this point for the return scroll she didn't expect to use in order to return to this location. Now Siegfried demanded an explanation for this odd situation, so the girl decided to show him something, which was a video of him using his nerfing powers. Then she explained that this footage had been seen by all gamers in Brave New World, and just as she was about to reveal the name of the recorder, so the protagonist quickly realized that it was Itz who was the only member of the party that wasn't featured in the footage. Then Gazran explained how the man had left the party, and must have leaked the footage online once he assumed himself far enough to be safe from them. And the lady affirmed that she had no idea about his betrayal, so the man explained how he was acquainted with this type who appeared sweet at first, only to betray later, but the backstabbing of his party member made him recall his despicable guildmate. Then Gazran apologized, blaming herself for insisting on the hero to stay with them, yet the hero affirmed that she wasn't to blame. Now the young man expressed his gratefulness towards their pulling him out of the crowd, and when asked about his plans he claimed that he needed to move quick so he will reach level 45 before leaving. After some great hesitation, then the girl decided to gather her courage, before deciding to speak to the young man, as she had a proposition. Now Gazran asked him with a small blush on her face if he would like to team up with just her. Shortly after, the girl pointed out to the young man how the zone wasn't swarming with monsters like their first time, claiming that it was due to the efforts of their party, and particularly their unique support. Yet our protagonist felt uncomfortable, as he had never expected to run a two-man with her, assuming that he should have declined the offer. Yet even so, he found himself unable to refuse upon seeing her angelic smile. And with that being said, the hamster recalled its own words, leaving our hero intrigued, while stating once again that the girl was interested in him. This greatly angered Tae-sung-han, as the hamster was showing arrogance, so it explained how its master was an idiot when it came to girls. Then Ham informed the protagonist that he is on the brink of getting his first skill, and reminded him that Hammond evolves along with him, and unlocks skills as he gets stronger. But just as he was about to check it, now it only got awkward, as the elemental mage suddenly got close to our hero, and explained how amazing this was, as only high-rank pets could obtain powers. So the creature decided to correct the one it called Miss Crush, affirming that it was the great forest spirit who signed an equality contract with the protagonist, meaning that he was no pet. Then with that, she apologized, claiming that she misjudged the relationship due to the pet calling him master. So the creature explained how it was forced to. After looking at the angelic elemental mage, now the hero decided to ask her for the reason behind the great kindness that she was showing him, assuming that it was due to his job as a debuff master, making her reveal that it wasn't the entire reason. Yet Tae-sung-han was left in a state of panic, as the girl explained how his handsomeness played a role in her interest. But to his shock, it turned out that the lady was just joking, as the hamster watched the scene with great interest. Then Gazran explained how she first wanted him for his class, yet she wanted him to stay for another reason, which piqued his curiosity. So she explained how he was simply a mystery to her, and the lady claimed that she wasn't just interested in him in-game, but also in his real persona. Then the embarrassed player affirmed that he wasn't an average gamer, yet she affirmed that he was kind at heart, judging by the actions he showcased during their short stay together. According to her, the support didn't just assist the team with his skills, as he also made sure of their position and the state of their gear and inventory regarding potions. Now the lady claimed that she had never encountered such a considerate support, but in reality, these were just old habits from the time he was master of a guild. And with that being said, the elemental mage revealed that those qualities made her intrigued about the real Siegfried hiding behind his character. Yet the protagonist affirmed that he wasn't interesting outside of the game, when suddenly a crack formed itself on the ground, and the three of them found themselves suddenly falling into it. Both of them couldn't understand what was happening, as they were buried alive out of the blue. Then the system informed the protagonist that he was now unconscious, and that he would wake up after 5 seconds. Shortly after, the hero opened his eyes, startled. Now Taesung-han, who realized that he had lost consciousness, began to wonder the reason behind the ground opening as such, when suddenly someone came in to check on him, which was none other than his party member, and his spirit animal. And the protagonist quickly noticed that the elemental mage had an injured shoulder, yet she tried to downplay it. So Ham explained how she wounded herself while trying to protect him from the falling rubble. Then the girl was apologized to for being placed in such a dire situation, yet she affirmed that she was okay, and that she will heal soon due to a potion she consumed. Now the lady asked the protagonist if something odd also came to his attention, and with the players entering the research center of the Osric cult beneath the ruins, Taesung-han revealed that he was unfamiliar with this cult, but Gosrin affirmed that she was just as clueless, before pointing out that this place was sketchy nonetheless. Then she theorized that the sudden rise of monster numbers in the area originated from this place, seeing how it was filled with the bodies of many dead laserlings, and seeing how such a dungeon shouldn't exist in this region. Now the both of them realized that they had stumbled upon a hidden dungeon, which concealed dungeons with particular quests as well as particular bosses like the Golden Goblin from before. Then the girl was quickly weirded out upon seeing the protagonist's eyes suddenly sparkle as he began to imagine the grand rewards awaiting them. And as Gosrin expressed her doubt regarding the both of them clearing this supposedly difficult particular dungeon alone, Siegfried noticed someone approaching. Now an injured man entered the room, before suddenly collapsing on the ground. Then both of them looked at each other and understood what they should do. Later on, the injured one received a health potion, and expressed his gratitude towards his saviors, who asked him about the reason behind his injuries. So the man explained how he was part of the secret organization known as Guardians, and that he and his teammates were sent due to intel regarding an Osric hideout, yet he was forced to retreat, seeing how the members of the cult they stumbled upon here were far more stronger than expected, and so he began begging the adventurers to stop the cult members in his place. Now upon realizing that this was a hidden quest, the protagonist asked for instruction. Then the guard explained how they should destroy the 5 orbs in the research facility, in order to prevent the resurrection of a great disaster, when suddenly the enemy of the guard spotted him and rushed to end his life. And having recognized them as the member of the cult, the hero affirmed that he will deal with them, while his partner protects the injured man. But the lady affirmed that he would surely die if he only used debuff skills. So the young man explained how he was in her debt for saving him along with his pet. Then he asked her to promise not to record the upcoming events that will occur in this dungeon. Just then, the attackers came really close to the protagonist, and so he gathered his strength, before one-shotting each and every one of them. Then Siegfried affirmed that if the girl doesn't record his actions, he will surely conquer the dungeon. Now the henchman had been slapped into the wall, and you could quickly recognize the man as an adventurer from his outfit. Yet the protagonist affirmed that he only wanted to know the location of the lab, claiming that he won't kill the believer if he reveals to him what he wants to know, only for him to affirm that those of his cult are not afraid of death. Then the man claimed that the protagonist would suffer a great punishment for trying to steal from their lab. Now Siegfried affirmed that he was done being nice, yet in a scaredy tone, the man affirmed that he wasn't afraid of torture. But the protagonist explained that he only wanted to exercise a little, claiming that he grew sore from an entire week without fighting. Then Taesung-han took a menacing tone, stating that he was eager to see if the man would stay loyal to the cult, as he was dying to bash in some skulls. And with that being said, the goon gave precise direction towards the laboratory, earning him a hit in the head for being a coward. Just like that, the location of the lab had been acquired. Then from the interested look on the lady's face, he realized that she was curious about him concealing his true strength, and so he asked her to wait after this quest, in order for him to reveal everything to her. Now Gosran accepted to show some patience, and as they walked away, then the member of the Guardians looked at them in an odd way. At the same time, inside a destroyed lab, where the members of the cult were lying down, now the men were cleaning up the sensor laboratory that was beneath the ruins. Then one of them claimed that the document that he had in hand was now rendered useless, and the High Priest Romulus called out the Guardian for destroying the lab, when they were on the brink of ending their research. But the man firmly affirmed that their goal was to shield the world, and that they will always get in the way of evil plots. Yet as he was giving his heroic speech, then his chest was slashed open by the blade of the High Priest. Now Romulus asked his goons to get rid of the body, and he then asked about the guard that had escaped. So a subordinate explained how many were after him, and that he should be still nearby due to his wounds. So the High Priest began to mock the Guardians, as they did their best, and yet still failed in stopping the evil plan. Now the madman felt overjoyed upon thinking of how his enemies would watch from the other side, as he resurrected the great demon. Just then a powerful fire spell was launched, and it came crashing into the giant egg. Upon seeing this, the high priest couldn't believe his eyes. Then it was affirmed to the madman that what he was seeing was reality. So Siegfried then praised the elemental mage for her great accuracy. But the priest assumed that he had stumbled upon more guardians. Yet the hero affirmed in a mocking tone that it wasn't the case, while Romulus realized that all his henchmen outside had been defeated. With that being said, the high priest ordered the scientists to immediately begin the ritual of resurrection, and so the switch was pulled. Then the ritual began. Massive amounts of energies were delivered. Now the quest was to destroy all 5 orbs in under 5 minutes, in order to prevent the resurrection of the great monster. So Siegfried claimed that he will handle the henchmen, while asking his partner to eliminate the orbs. But this left Gosran worried about him, and he affirmed that he will be fine, as there weren't many enemies. Now the protagonist then began to think to himself of how the high priest might pose a bit of a challenge, and so he charged up ahead, urging the girl to complete the quest. Then Romulus ordered his followers to kill the hero at once, and so the both of them closed the distance in the blink of an eye, ready to take our protagonist down. With that being said, the debuff master blocked the halberd of the first, and he dodged the sword of the second. Then the protagonist slammed his elbow into the face of the first henchman, before directing his mace towards the second, and blowing him away with a single hit. Suddenly he noticed goon number 1 behind him, ready to slash his back, and so he quickly turned around and used his mace in order to block the weapon. But just then green magic had been activated out of nowhere, which left our hero startled. After the spell connected, resulting in a great explosion, just like that the man had been slain, thus making the debuff master call out his boss for casting a wide-range skill when his own worker was in the danger zone, which Romulus found ironic, seeing how the protagonist just used a human as a meat shield. With that being said, the high priest had no choice but to admit that Siegfried was a skillful and powerful fighter that even he couldn't take on his own. Now this made the protagonist think the man planned on giving up, seeing how all of his allies had been taken down. Yet just then, the man cracked a smile, and affirmed that he still had some allies, as a green specter made its way into our hero's neck, so he immediately tried to strike it down. Now Siegfried realized that those entities were wraiths, and Romulus affirmed that he wasn't just a high priest but also a dark priest as well, one that finds strength in the souls of the dead, meaning that as long as he was near a corpse, he would be invincible. With that being said, then the level 55 necromancer, who can control the dead, became eager to add the soul of this protagonist to his unholy army. Now the souls began to attack the protagonist, who tried to run away, when suddenly he turned around, and attacked them with his mace, yet to no result. Just like that, the spirits of the dead passed through the protagonist. Then Taesung Han could feel his health decreasing each time he was attacked by one of the ghosts, meaning that they were a summoning type nothing skill. This also made him realize that if nothing is done he was bound to be defeated, as these creatures were immune to physical attacks, and he also had to act quickly, seeing how they are on the clock. But this made Siegfried realize that the high priest might be trying to distract him until the timer reaches 0. Now the summoner began to laugh as he affirmed the attacks of the hero had no effects on his wraiths. With that being said, the hero dashed forward, and used his skill Heavy Strike, claiming that he only had to attack their master, and just like that, Romulus was sent flying into the wall. Then Taesung Han mockingly praised him for parrying his blow, as his mace destroyed the sword and reached the face. With that, the enraged high priest launched his spirits all at once, now targeting our hero with all his might in order to finally take him down. Yet just as the cultist affirmed that the efforts of the protagonist were futile, as the rebirth of the great calamity was inevitable, then the debuff master leveled up once again, allowing him to obtain the skill Flying Spur, which allows him to direct his thrown weapon towards the desired opponent. And just like that, a blue-like arrow rose from beneath the spirits, so the summoner was left baffled, as the protagonist claimed that he shall be delivering the godly punishment that he deserves. With that, the weapon had been brought down, now upon Romulus, then making him cough blood and inflicting upon him a great deal of the damage. And this new skill was so powerful that it resulted in an explosion as it slammed the villain, with the high priest now out of commission. Then the mace covered in blood began to float away, as its wielder expressed how surprised he was by how easy it was to control it. This made him regret not using the skill earlier on, and with that being settled, only one problem remained to be solved, which was destroying the orbs. Then shortly after, a fiery attack hit its target. Now with this orb out of commission, the elemental mage had taken down a total of 3, but as she began to pray that her shoulder would last until the end of the quest, she was suddenly spotted by cultists, who in order to stop the elemental mage, immediately grabbed her by the injured shoulder, and this left the girl in a tough spot, as less than 90 seconds remained. Just then, the flying mace came in at high speed, immediately destroying the 4th orb, to the henchman's horror, so Siegfried then immediately took care of the 2 of them, with a single blow each. Then Gosran was happy to see Taesung Han, who claimed that she was struggling, due to her wounded shoulder, and so she apologized for weighing him down. Yet the hero affirmed that she didn't need to feel guilt, before claiming that she was the only one able to complete the quest, which shocked her, as he had a flying mace. Then Siegfried explained that his skill needed some time to reset, and that only spells could work against the fifth orb, as it was immune to regular attacks. Yet the girl had her doubts. But just then, she was snapped back from her train of thought, as the hero claimed that they didn't have the luxury of taking the time to think about it, and so Gosren chose to attack, claiming that she shouldn't be blamed if the target isn't hit. Then 15 seconds remained until the end of the mission, but the elemental mage had a hard time aiming her spell due to her injured shoulder, when suddenly a hand came on at the top of her own. Now the protagonist was trying to help her aim, and so after that, the shocked girl exchanged looks with the debuff master. She was now left confident, as she unleashed her fire spell. Then only 1 second remained, as the attack was about to hit the orb, when suddenly the high priest threw himself in its way, now shielding the last orb using his body. Then both of them were left shocked by what they'd seen, and in the end, Romulus asked the creature to rain its disasters on the entire world. Just like that, the party of two failed to destroy all of the orbs in time, meaning that its arrival was now near and inevitable. With that being said, the egg began to crack as great light energy came out of it. Seeing this made the hero regret not making sure of the high priest's death earlier. But just then, the young one noticed that they were now in front of a giant white serpent, and with that, the party of two were inflicted with the hidden quest that consisted of taking down the reincarnated python, the lightning serpent. The monster was enormous and filled with light energy. Its presence and roar were enough to overwhelm the humans. Now Siegfried just realized how crazy the cultists really were, seeing how they had reincarnated the disaster's lightning serpent. But just then, he noticed that it isn't as big as expected. For the python is rumored to be as big as a mountain, according to the old myths. Only this one, despite having a colossal size, was much smaller than that. And this monster of an unknown race was the reincarnation of the great serpent that destroyed Sohoka 30 years ago. Wasn't level 500 like the first one, but level 70. Then the elemental mage assumed that since they had destroyed 4 orbs, it wasn't able to gain its full strength. But even so, its power was still terrifying, meaning that they should run. So very well the hero wanted to face it, as he claimed that it was a rare chance, and affirmed that he will save her a part of the rewards that he will get alone if she flees. But to his shock, the girl began to chug a potion. Then she gave him a bottle of the same low-grade light attribute resistance potion, claiming that it was the best she could do. Now the hero was intrigued by her actions, so the elemental mage explained that they should face it like he said, as this would be a unique experience. And the girl then affirmed that she will protect the young man, claiming that they should see this fight to the end. So the protagonist accepted her help, but warned her that he wouldn't be to blame if she is slain by the great serpent. With that being said, the giant reptile charged at our hero, who escaped at the last moment as he kept on consuming his potion. Then the young man turned around, and as his resistance to light power had been increased, he warned his partner to keep an eye open for the giant, quick monster. With that being said, the giant monster redirected itself, before trying to attack the protagonist once again, only for him to escape. Then he jumped from the top of a pillar in order to gain the high ground. So the debuff master decided to see how powerful the monster truly is, by placing it in the zone of mortality that decreases its overall defense. And Siegfried then imbued his mace with the heavy strike skill, before proceeding to deal 3 successive blows to the giant reptile. But the monster was quick to counterattack, as it swung its giant tail and almost hit our hero, who escaped by jumping into the air at the last second. Yet while in the air, he was left startled, for according to the system, the great calamity was about to unleash its chargeable breath with him being right in front of it. So the elemental mage had no choice but to intervene, as she struck the monster's jaw with a fire spell just as it unleashed its chargeable breath, which caused the giant reptile to miss-aim and miss our hero by a hair. Just like that, the protagonist was spared annihilation by the powerful attack of the white serpent. Then, as he fell to the ground, his partner quickly came to check on him, and Taesung Han explained that he had escaped the skill but simply hit his head while falling, leaving the girl worried about him. Now upon laying his eyes on the destruction, the protagonist realized that the incomplete monster was still a hidden boss with great offensive power. Then Gosren theorized that they should slay the python before its breath resets, as another attack like this one will certainly cause the building to fall. Yet the giant reptile decided to not make their task any easier by activating electric barrier around itself, which was a skill that increases its resistance by 200, and that would stun anyone who comes in contact with the barrier. Upon seeing how the monster was putting all of its mana into destructive attacks, and then fleeing into its shield in order to recharge its strength, the hero couldn't help but find it cowardly due to its gigantic size, as his partner asked him about their next action, as magic was pointless and physical attacks were dangerous. But Siegfried affirmed that there existed a solution, and so he deployed his zone of frailty that targets endurance and mana, claiming that it was time for his nerfing skills to shine. Now that it was in the nerfing domain, the python felt alerted, Then the great agony inflicted by the zone of frailty made it go into a bloodlusted rage as it destroyed its shield in the process. Yet the debuff master knew that despite the monster having reinforced its defense, it would still feel pain due to the fixed damage of his skill, and Siegfried noticed that due to the forced cancellation of electric barrier, the monster didn't restore enough magic power, and with its health bar being almost empty, so the protagonist realized that victory was at hand as he charged ahead. To his partner's shock, now the bloodlusted beast resorted to its light powers in order to rain lightning upon the battlefield. Yet Siegfried managed to evade all of the ground-shattering attacks before launching himself into the air and slamming the monster as hard as he could using his mace. Then Tae Song Han noticed that the monster was trying to take him from behind with a quick tail sneak attack, leaving him no choice but to resort to his speed regulation that slows down every aspect of the monster's stats. With the python now being binded, the hero firmly affirmed that he won't be falling for the same trick twice. Then Supreme Contempt was activated, allowing our hero to deal even more damage to those of a higher level. And with that being said, the final blow was quickly delivered, thus allowing the protagonist to slay the reincarnation of the Great Calamity with his own two hands, and completing the main quest. Since the python had been slain, the young warrior completed the quest to stop the Ozrak cult's evil plan, earning him level 46 as well as some rewards, which however left him disappointed, seeing how he was hoping to jump 2 levels, meaning that it will take him a very long time to reach level 200. So he began hoping that he would find comfort in the rewards of the quest, just as the girl approached. But the elemental mage expressed how baffled she was to see him achieve victory, so he pointed out how he wouldn't have done it if it weren't for her. In truth, the sorceress knew that this wasn't the case, as the boy could have completed the quest all by himself. Still, she also knew that her level 45 companion was astonishing, as despite having weakened the monster, it would take a party of level 70 to slay a python. Then the hero snapped her back to reality, and Gosrin explained that she had spaced out and that they should go check the rewards, but the boy affirmed that they had to take care of an urgent matter first, which startled the lady who assumed he had more hidden abilities. Yet to her surprise the protagonist demanded rubber gloves, so the annoyed Siegfried explained how they should dissect the monster in order to get the rewards, which Gosrin recognized as an urgent matter. Hence the pair looted different parts of the python, such as his blood, his scales, his flesh, and bones, along with his fangs, making the elemental mage point out how great giant bosses were, as they provided many rewards. But she quickly realized that her ally wasn't pleased by the treasure, upon seeing him complain, and Siegfried was left disappointed upon receiving a standard reward from a heading dungeon boss. Just one item caught his eye, which was the monster's core, a consumable type item that contains a great amount of light energy, and upon seeing that either he or his ally would have the privilege of taking it, then he politely pointed out to the elemental mage how he was the one who had mostly contributed to the defeat of the python. She was then left intrigued upon hearing him declare that he will only take a part of the reward, before stating that he shall hand her the entire treasure but just keep the monster's core, which he claimed to be deprived of value. After a small awkward silence, the spellcaster tried to hide her laughter, which creeped out the hero demanding an explanation, so she explained how he was getting more and more interesting, and to his shock, she claimed that he could have all the loot for himself, recalling their first mission together when they gave him the entire treasure, as their only goal was to farm EXP, claiming this was a similar scenario. Then the lady pointed out that the experience she had obtained from this very challenging adventure was the greatest of rewards. Thus she claimed that she will treasure this memory for the rest of her life, and so the intrigued hero decided to accept, which was a surprise for the protagonist, who was okay with taking all the loot for himself. Yet the problem was that the treasure was too immense for his inventory, and just as he began to think of sharing with his party member, Ham popped up, affirming that it was his chance to showcase his abilities. This made the master assume that the pet wanted the loot all for himself, making him more of a fool in the eyes of the spirit, who affirmed that this wasn't the case. So after joining its hands, the hamster made a piece of cloth appear. While Siegfried remained watching unimpressed, the great spirit proudly presented his new skill, known as Infinity Bundle. Then suddenly, the hamster was snatched, by none other than his master, who pointed out how repulsing his new skill looked. But just then, the protagonist noticed something rather intriguing, as the piece of cloth revealed a starry night sky. This was the effect of Hamsam's skill, Infinity Bundle made from the elemental world of nothingness, giving infinite storage that it can carry and resort to. Upon seeing this, the master was left baffled, for Heavenly Bundle was a heavenly solution to the major problem of limited storage that annoyed every player. Thus the hero began to praise Ham, only for it to recall how the young man was mocking him earlier, so he proposed to make it up by offering him all the treats he desires. And then a serious presence approached the party of two, pointing out how surprised he was by their achievement, leaving both debuff master and elemental mage startled. And so Siegfried, who couldn't detect the one in front of him, immediately pulled out his weapon and demanded him to introduce himself. But the man began to approach them, pointing out that he was not here to cause any harm. Yet upon seeing his face, the hero was left shocked, though he quickly calmed himself, upon realizing this was the wounded guard they had rescued earlier on. Then the guard bursted out in laughter, upon realizing that his great entrance was ruined by forgetting to revert to his original form. With that, the man pointed out that he was pleased to meet the debuff master. However, he soon corrected himself, and called the protagonist by his real-life name. So the hero charged at the stranger, and asked him once again about his identity. So he introduced himself as Wu Jingchon, which should be revealed by the system. Yet the protagonist grew more and more angry, as this wasn't what he was asking for, making Wu Jingchon point out how he was acting hastily. Then the shapeshifter decided to remind the boy of the only reason behind the system not unveiling his name to him, as he unleashed a powerful aura that pushed the debuff master back. Just then he remembered that players like the shapeshifter could hide their identity from anyone who was of a lower level. So with that being said, Tianxing Han asked the over-leveled one the reason behind approaching him with a fake name and face, since it was pointless to showcase such abilities in front of an under-leveled player like him, and so Wu Jinchan apologized, stating that his own acts were too hastened. Then the shapeshifter pointed out that he only did it due to the intrigue sparked towards our hero, who claims to be an average low-level player. Yet Wu Jinchan affirmed that he was an extraordinary individual, as he was none other than the sole student of Master Deus. Then the shapeshifter affirmed that the hero shouldn't lie, leaving him totally baffled, seeing how he was uncovered. Still, Wu Jinchan quickly assured the lad by saying that he was the only one who was aware of his secret, and that he will call him later, before claiming that the hero should come to Sinsadong if he wishes to uncover more. With that, the shapeshifter looked at the elemental mage and apologized for ruining the atmosphere, though she didn't respond and kept a silent blank face. Hence, Wu Jinchan practiced a smile, before going on his way and wishing both of them a good date, leaving the protagonist in great fury. Then frustration began to build upon thinking of how he was now under the eyes of a powerful player, and frustration soon became anxiety, as the debuff master couldn't fully trust the man's word, implying that he was the only one aware of his secret. Thus this opened up the possibility of him being under the eyes of Genesis, and just as he was about to completely succumb to panic, thinking that his demise was near, he was suddenly slapped by his party member, leaving him utterly intrigued by the elemental mage, who pointed out that she had no idea about his situation. So Ghostran then affirmed that she didn't pay any mind to the shapeshifter's words, and that she hadn't filmed him or taken pictures of him. Then she reassured the protagonist by gently claiming that his worst fear shall not come to life, and Ham decided to butt in, reassuring his master by claiming that if the worst happens, he will be here to help. Upon hearing this, the hero was at last eased from stress, and after drawing a relieved smile on his face, he expressed his gratitude toward both of his allies. After that, our hero exited the hidden dungeon and parted ways with his party member, who would stay in the ruins in order to farm some EXP, whereas our hero stopped playing BNW, as despite the emotional support he had received, he was still terrified of the idea that his personal contacts would be uncovered. So with that, the tired Taesung Han was left with no idea on how to act, and 3 days after this incident, Wu Jin Chen contacted him, explaining that he should ask for him in Club Heaven at midnight in Sinsadong. Later that night, at Sinsadong in the Gangnam district, the protagonist began to think of how crazy the high-leveled player must be, wanting to hold a capital conversation at a nightclub. Thus the hero realized that it had been a long time since he was out that late, as while others attended parties he was stuck gaming. Then Taesung Han arrived at the location chosen by the higher-level player. The young man was a little worried, thinking that the doorman might drive him away, as he hadn't been in a nightclub before, and his fear soon came true, as he was prohibited access due to his poor outfit. So Taesung Han tried to stay positive and explained that he was here to meet up with someone, and that he would be quick about it. Yet this only left the doorman even more annoyed. Then a man passing by pointed out how it was his first time seeing a sweatshirt in heaven, making the one with him mention how the hero could hear them, though the young one affirmed that he didn't care, as he raised his middle finger and mockingly shooed the protagonist away. But just as rage began to build up, the young adventurer was approached by an acquaintance, which turned out to be none other than the over-leveled player himself, who quickly called out the lad for his poor outfit, assuming that it was the best he could do. Then the man apologized to Chin, stating that he was unaware that the hero was here to meet him, so he pointed out how his friend had never been to a club before, and even added that he would have beaten him up if he were in his place, leaving the youth annoyed. So the one who mocked the protagonist was left shocked, as he had been unaware that the one flipping him off was acquainted with Wu Jinchin, and from a single glance of the famous young man, the bully realized that they had just been permanently banished from Sinsadong. Meanwhile, loud music was blasting, and everyone was having a great time dancing and partying in Heaven Club, yet silence reigned over the VIP room. So Wu Jinchin offered the hero some Harment and Dom Perignon, or anything other than champagne, though the low-level player affirmed that he was unfamiliar with these drinks and that he wasn't here for them, which made the shapeshifter jokingly claim that the young one was there for the dance floor, leaving him quite annoyed as he urged him to cut straight to the chase. Then Wu Jinchin apologized for playfully making fun of him, as Taesung Han demanded he introduce himself and state the reason behind their meeting. Thus the over-leveled one accepted, stating that it was only natural to give the hero what he wanted, seeing how he had ruined his date, and so he explained how he was a guardian, and that the face he took during their first meeting belonged to a colleague who perished while escaping the lab. After the hero pointed out how Woojin Chain had masked himself with the identity of a dead guardian, the young one affirmed that what he did was unforgivable. Still, the shapeshifter affirmed he had no remorse, as his actions led to their meeting, making Taesung assume that it was due to him being Deus's student. Then Woojin Chain affirmed that he also wanted to measure the strength of another hidden class, and upon processing the information, the hero was left baffled, as the overleveled one also possessed a job of similar rank. With that, the protagonist assumed that the one who had exceeded his expectations used his hidden class to find out about him. However, Woojin Chain affirmed that this wasn't the case, and that he just used money to reach his private information, which caught our baffled protagonist. So the young one then affirmed that he won't reveal his info to anyone, as he was the only one aware of them, and that he only got them due to his power in real life. While Taesung Han listened, the overleveled one claimed that he was scared of Genesis, as he affirmed that they weren't aware of him and Deus. Thus the debuff master asked the shapeshifter about his class, seeing how he knew everything about him, but Woojin Chain explained that he still was too weak to know, leaving our hero even more irritated, as the rich one explained that he wanted him to gain in strength, in order to reveal everything to him, the one who will be worthy of being called student of Deus. Then later on the great forest spirit greeted his master after a long time, so Taesung Han asked his pet if he had caused any trouble during his absence, which she affirmed that he didn't, seeing how he wasn't like him. And the servant then asked the man if he had settled his matter in the real world, yet he couldn't give a proper response, as the shapeshifter left without giving him any trivial information, making him wonder about his ulterior motives. And just as he began to wonder about the real purpose of the overleveled one, the spirit asked him for the reason behind his presence here, since this place seemed so indecent for someone as simple as him, and just as the protagonist was about to answer the pet, it claimed that he had flashy desires, which she quickly denied, stating that this place was more than it seemed. For Dondegri, which is known as the City of Pleasures, offered every gambling and adult service in BNW, yet the debuff master was only here for its black market. So Taesung Han affirmed that they were only doing a quick stop, as he only wanted to buy and sell gear on the black market, leaving the spirit disappointed. But just then, the debuff master noticed two men in uniforms, which he quickly recognized as the Genesis Guild, and the young man realized that the two of them were abusing the power of their guild in order to harass a man passing by, which was their typical behavior. Though our hero deeply wanted to confront them, he quickly ditched the idea, and as Ham was treating him as a coward, the player explained that it was better to avoid a fight than engage in it. So the protagonist affirmed that he would take them down another day, and that they should focus on their business for the time being. Meanwhile, the Genesis bully explained to the old one how they had heard about his great loot, and how they only wanted to take a peek, but upon being met with silence, he grew annoyed. Then his friend stated that the old man must be concealing his power, seeing how the Rune of Insight didn't reveal anything about him, yet he found it ridiculous. But the bully affirmed that his friend was always annoying Chulugi due to his cowardice, as despite the old man being overleveled, any problem of their own would be considered a problem of the guild. Then the bully pointed out how the ones passing by wouldn't even dare to intervene, as their power was absolute, before poking the old man, and claiming that his silence was due to the fact that he was terrified of them, when suddenly he was brutally punched in the face, by none other than the protagonist, who sent him flying. So Taesung Han affirmed that they should stop mocking others, before angrily claiming that they didn't strike fear in anyone. Then his friend tried to butt in, stating that they were from the Genesis Guild, which only pissed off our hero more, stating that it was an additional reason for taking them down. And the protagonist then affirmed that these two were worthless without Genesis, making Ham tease him for not escaping the fight, as he said he would. Thus Taesung Han affirmed that he let go of his emotions due to the hamster instigating him, so it claimed that it only wanted to help him by letting him express his anger. Then the needle turned to the old man and asked him not to worry about the Genesis Guild, yet upon being met with silence he assumed that he was really mute, but Ham asked if he wasn't worried about the giant Genesis Guild targeting him, yet he affirmed that they were fine, as they were too ashamed to report him. With that being said, the satisfied hero decided to trade his gear and resume his way. So with that, the silent old man was left interested in him. Then shortly after, at the local intervention hotel, our hero entered the private training lounge, and the amazed hamster immediately pointed out how immense this place was, despite seeming small from the outside. So the hero explained how this was a location for adventurers to sharpen their skills and refine their gear, despite being pricey. With that being said, it was now time for the great forest spirit to act, as he immediately jumped off his master's shoulder, before quickly deploying his infinite bundle. Then the debuff master called him out for taking out this piece of cloth so flashily, so he claimed that he should let him, seeing how this was his only skill. Yet Hamhwam was intrigued, as his master had bought many weapons when his main was a blunt one, so he stated that it wasn't, as he only used them for their convenience. Now came the time to pick a main weapon, as the system urged him to do it, as he drew near to level 50, out of the 5 types allowed to his hidden class. Though wanting to remain a blunt user, seeing how he had experience with them, our hero opened himself to the possibility of the other types. So with that he made a shadow boxer appear, which was a training dummy with infinite stamina and a good defense, and Taesung Han decided to test the shield first, so he charged at the shadow boxer with it, before punching it with his hand, and the shield itself. Then the hero was pleased by the delivered amount of damage, yet he was left unsatisfied by how slow it was, and so, he decided to put the giant sword to the test. But after some time, the hamster began to complain that his master had been trying weapons for the past 2 hours. Meanwhile, our protagonist was left exhausted and unsatisfied, as he couldn't find comfort in any of the weapons, since all of them had pros and cons that made them around the same level. But just as he decided to keep the blunt weapon as his main one, someone approached him stating that all of this was pointless. So the debuff master recognized him as the one he saved from Genesis earlier. Then he quickly assumed that the shapeshifter was the one who allowed him to access this expensive training space, and so he asked the old man if he was a guardian or someone sent by Woojin Chaer. But the old one demanded to know the reason behind the young man rescuing him, despite knowing that he wouldn't gain anything from it. Still, Taesung Han stated that he should be answered first, but was quickly left shocked by the old man screaming for an answer. After a small silence, the protagonist claimed that he didn't do it out of pity, and that the old man reminded him of his past powerless self, in front of those with power. Then the young fighter affirmed that he now wanted to face the past, which was then quickly followed by intrigue from the old one, who was left satisfied by this simple explanation. So he unveiled himself as Shakurio, a level 354 NPC well known as the Weaponmeister from Stellar 5, claiming that he shall make the debuff master even stronger, for Shakurio was a master warrior, and part of Stellar 5 just like Wethel Goose, and the old man earned his title of Weaponmeister for having mastered 18 weapons. Then Taesung Han quickly realized that the straw hat the man was wearing was hiding his famous identity from Rune of Insight. Now our hero was left overexcited, seeing how 2 of the Stellar 5 were trying to make him their disciple. Even so, he had to decline the offer. Just as he was about to do it, the old man pointed out how it was only natural for a talented one like him to already have a master, before offering to lend a helping hand to the protagonist in picking his weapon, as teaching wasn't always between master and student. And Shakuro then pointed out that he only wanted to help him, not make him his disciple, which left the young one amazed by the silver tongue on the Weaponmeister, before realizing that he was speaking the truth. Since Taesung Han knew that Deus, if asked to help, would surely claim that he himself was the weapon, and that regulars like a student were the ones needing it. And so the hero assumed that the member of Stellar 5 would guide him to his one true weapon, and upon hearing this, then the Weaponmeister pulled out something that left our hero shocked, as he explained how one weapon couldn't please a man. But Shakuro affirmed that from here on forth, the hero would be able to use all the weapons available to his class at will, since the item he had in hand was the mythic Meganjord, a copy of the Belt of Balak, the war god from the creation myth, who had many special abilities, and the items in the game were reported into 8 ranks, ranging from normal to world, that players were unsure of its existence, thus making the one before him mythic, the highest rank known to gamers. Yet the hero couldn't believe that he was about to get such an item, but Shakiro explained that this wasn't the case, and once equipped, it would be forever his. So with that, the debuff master recalled how he was already the disciple of another. Even so, he decided to bow in respect to the man, seeing how he was his senior warrior, which amused the old man, as this hadn't been done by a non-disciple before. With that being said, then the hero tried to grab the belt while thanking the old man, only for him to miss each and every time. This left him quite angry, as the member of Stellar 5 compared him to a pet he used to have, and upon seeing how he was being bursted out at, Shakiro explained that there was a difference between using an item and surviving on it. After being snapped back to reality by realizing that mythical weapons had prices, the hero was asked to follow the old man. Later on we see a warrior knocking down another, and the commentator was left excited. This was the battling Colosseum of Dondegree, making the protagonist realize that the old man wanted him to become a gladiator. Then Shakiro explained that the Colosseum was still a decent arena, making it ideal for facing many fighters. So the old man then explained that fighting humans and humanoids was much more efficient than fighting monsters when mastering a weapon. And despite agreeing with the logic of the weapon master, our hero still had his doubts, as the champion of the arena was a level 65 NPC that he could surely beat in no time. Still, the old man then gave our hero a gift that quickly unfolded and wrapped itself around him, leaving our hero and his hamster startled. Then Taesung Han quickly realized that this was just a revealing armor, making the old man point out how those were the best kind. So with that, the old man urged him to go to his match, before explaining how only basic attacks were allowed in the arena, and Taesung Han affirmed that he would take the promised belt upon defeating the level 65 NPC, leaving the old one amused by his confidence. Then, as he made his way to the arena, the hero began to think of how the old one underestimated him for sending him in with no skills and an alien weapon. For the protagonist had used many weapons during his war against the Genesis, and had acquired great stats for his level due to his rough training with Dois, which would surely render this trial of little challenge. With that being said, the excited hero decided to quickly beat the champion in order to put his hand on the mythical belt, while cheers filled the arena. Then the commentator decided to introduce the contestants, presenting our hero as Wimpy Man, which nickname left him utterly embarrassed, and so he quickly realized that the member of Stellar 5 was the one who gave it to him. Just then, a voice pointed out that the protagonist's vulnerable looks matched his name, and the humanoid asked him if he would like to be taken down in the blink of an eye, or slowly, with pain, as it was none other than the level 37 mimic NPC Maki, also known as the Slaughtering Scythe. Yet our hero, who far surpassed him, affirmed that he should be the one asking this question. With that being said, Maki quickly launched himself at our hero, but he quickly blocked him before asking about the blood of his race, wondering if the monster would show red when bleeding, or another color. But just as our hero was about to give the final strike, then the debuff armor scanned the mimic's stats, and upon being complete, proceeded with the nerve striking our hero with a great electric shock. As our hero fell to the ground, the commentator assumed that his opponent's attack was the reason behind it, though Taesung Han was left stunned, as the sudden feeling of electrocution couldn't have been the result of the Slaughtering Scythe's attack. But just then, he realized that this was the shocking effect of the debuff armor that pains its wearer while making him weaker than the opponent he faces, which left Maki very pleased, stating that his opponent got what he deserved. And so the insect decided to ask the human a question, which was the same one the human had asked him before, the only difference being that the humanoid was well aware of the human's blood color. But just as the monster was about to go for the final blow, then our hero managed to evade it at the last moment, though the monster affirmed that this was but mere fortune, stating that the young one wouldn't evade his next attack, and Taesung Han affirmed that he had many problems to solve, so he asked the monster to keep silence as he charged at him, only for the humanoid to block his strike, and affirm that it shall not be harmed by weak attacks such as these, as it blasted the protagonist away. Due to the effects of the armor, the annoyance of the young man overshadowed his agony, seeing how he became slow enough to be hit by the mimic, leaving him to wonder about the reason behind the famous NPC giving him this armor, as he surely meant more than to nerve him. With that being said, our hero decided to change his approach, then planted his foot deep in the ground, and stated that he would use the basics once again. So the hamster pointed out how his master was doing poorly today, seeing how he would normally evade such a level of attacks, making Shakuro assume that he was worried about him. Yet as the spirit pointed out how he wanted to see his master suffer in combat, the Weaponmeister realized that they had a complicated relationship, since according to the Great Warrior, the handicap that is the debuff armor was the best way for one to understand a weapon, meaning that the protagonist would have to dive deep into his weapon's nature upon being stripped of his great physique. Then Shakuro was eager to see how the one who was always an advantage would deal with the situation, now that he was on the other side of the blade. Just then, the man was left baffled as blood splattered all over the arena, as the debuff master had used his sword in order to cut off the left arm of the monster, and the mimic was left baffled, while it expressed its great pain with a terrifying scream. Yet while the humanoid was reorganizing, the human pointed out how the giant sword was much harder to master than expected. Then Taesung Han affirmed to the creature that he would soon cut off its other arm. With that being said, Maki became engulfed with a great rage, and it was then pointed out how the hero has now gained the upper hand by dismembering his opponent, and how the man this was annoying relentless attacks. But the old Fujing master was so impressed that he forgot himself, upon seeing how the young man had mastered but the secrets of the giant sword in such a short time, as this devastating weapon failed to hit its target, because a slowing handicap to its wielder, and it was even harder for him as he was nerfed against a swift opponent. Yet the swordsman found the solution by using the great blade as a shield, and adjusting his position behind it in order to reveal the weak points of the mimic, although such technique wouldn't be acquired from the lessons of a teacher, but from innate instincts and the burning determination to win. Thus the Weaponmeister realized that the young man possessed the potential to one day surpass him. While Maki was annoyed by this technique, the upstart finally understood it all, because the old man must have done all of this in order to make him understand the true potential of the weapon. Indeed, he was certain that one detail escaped him, which was the fact that he was always on the losing side of the fights. Hence he developed an instinct of always using what's around him in order to achieve victory. Until just as the mantis was about to finish him off, he dodged at the last moment, leaving its claw stuck. Then, the debuff master began to recall his own words regarding how he will take the mimic's other arm, and just like that he slashed it off. Thus the slaughtering side let out one final scream of pain, before falling defeated on the ground, and just like that the commentator announced that the victor was Wimpy Man, which earned our hero the cheers of the crowd. Meanwhile, someone asked his henchman if the protagonist was the individual who beated them up, so the member of Genesis confirmed, and their boss asked them if the fight was truly one-sided. Although the bully tried to defend himself only to be kicked in the stomach, then his boss angrily began to beat him up, stating that he was always ashamed of them. But right then, the VIP member of the City of Pleasure Cholgi Choi, who belonged to the Genesis Guild, realized that he had seen the protagonist before, and so he asked about his name, which was revealed to be Siegfried, since the boss said that he was acquainted with someone who looked like him, as the goon revealed that he was with the man that he saved before asking for a plan. Thus Cholgi Choi affirmed that they should just beat them up, both, yet the one wearing a red coat affirmed that this would be hard, seeing how the old man was none other than the weapon Meister. So when asked if this was truly him, the red one confirmed, stating that he hid in the crowd, which left the boss intrigued by his presence in the Colosseum. Then he explained how this man is always treasure hunting, and that a great loot has always present where he roams the longest. Therefore this left the VIP member overexcited, as it meant that a great treasure was inside the Colosseum. Now Cholgi Choi recalled the red one's words, pointing out how the task of eliminating the old man was challenging but possible, for the man explained that no one could defeat a healthy Shakiro. However, things wouldn't be the same when facing the man that he is now. Soon the crowd began to scream in excitement as the fight kept going on. Then Hochul, the champion of the arena, pointed out how fortunate his opponent was, as he had the privilege of facing him after a week, yet it will also cause his demise, as he affirmed that he wouldn't get out of the arena alive, and so he tried to hit the challenger, who managed to dodge every head. As Taesung Han explained that he thrived at one thing, as he did boxing back in the day, and that one thing was to counterattack fighters like the NPC, as he punched him in the head. Thus the brain of the champion began shaking in his skull, therefore making him fall into the ground. And just like that, Hochul suffered his first defeat, making our hero the new champion of the arena. Soon the crowd began to talk about how entertaining the hero's fights were, as he always turned the tide of the battles, and used many different weapons. Thus the commentator approached the new champion, raising him for becoming the champion of the arena within a week. So he asked him about his opinion regarding his new title. Then Siegfried revealed that he would be quitting the Colosseum. Eventually at the Intervention Hotel, the young man was putting on a belt, which was none other than the promised mythical item, and just like that, Meganjord was now attached to the protagonist, and adjusted itself to his waist. This made the young man understand why people buy expensive clothes, as he felt good about himself upon wearing a mythical item. Then the old man pointed out how happy he seemed upon putting on the belt, although the weapon master apologized for missing him being crowned champion, before pointing out his quick retirement. So our hero explained how easy the task was. Thus this made the old man burst out of laughter, stating that he had a much harder time becoming champion of the Colosseum back in the day. He even confirmed the young one's doubts, explaining how he debuted on the warrior path a century ago at the local Colosseum, and it was pointed out how the elder used to be a gladiator. So the man explained how he had other motives, as he only wanted to use his skills to make himself a profit, before claiming that the fights were much harder in his time, making the hero realize that this old man was just like the ones he had back in the real world. Yet when asked if he stayed in the City of Pleasures due to the arena, the Weaponmeister denied, stating that his return was caused by something else. With that being said, he offered the young one to take a walk with him. Soon after, outside the city, both heroes reached the destination, which were the Forgotten Mines of Dondagiri, a location that the warrior was unaware of. Then the protagonist asked for the reason behind their presence here, making the old man ask him if he was acquainted with the three great atelier. Naturally, the debuff master confirmed, stating that everyone knew about them. So the old one asked him if he knew of the special department of Beamerlian, and Taesung Han quickly realized that he meant the member of Stellar 5, by talking about the birthplace of death, a department in the great atelier that forged immensely powerful weapons, and that most of the finest weapons in the continent were crafted there. So the old man explained that in the birthplace of death, one creator surpassed the rest, a blacksmith named Herbert. For Harvard, a great obsession towards the weapons, to the point where he was rumored to have learned painting in order to paint the moment. His craftings takes lives, which surprised the youth. Herbert, who created many dangerous weapons, went on a journey in order to give birth to his strongest and final creation. And Shakiro explained that a piece of the map leading to the masterpiece in question was buried in the Forgotten Mines. But according to his intel, the real map was split into two parts, and each sent to a different location, leaving the whereabouts of the other piece unknown. Thus Siegfried realized that the old one must have remained in the black market of the Pleasure City in order to gather this intel. Then it was explained that this was in the same circumstances that they had met, making the younger one a little bit embarrassed, as he had showcased his little power in front of him. Now the messenger of weaponry then explained that while our hero was fighting as a gladiator, he obtained intel regarding the location of the map and the mines. Just then the tunnel in front of them expanded. Upon seeing this, the younger one realized what that meant, as a monster's claw appeared from beneath the ground. Then, with monsters beginning to spawn, both fighters were now in a dungeon, and so the veteran claimed that there were only a few monsters, yet the young one affirmed that they were many, and asked him why he didn't tell that they were going to a dungeon, since the challenger explained that he could only take one level 150 monster on his own, like the monster Chimera 0154, which was a cyborg created from different monsters. Still, the old one reassured him, stating that he would drive him to his limits despite knowing of his potential. As the young man warned him of the monster charging an attack, then the elder explained how he will assume his duty, seeing how he delayed the youth's growth by a week, by making him fight in the arena. And just like that, Chimera 0154 was named with one swing of a sword. Upon gaining EXP, the protagonist realized that he was brought here by the genius fighter, in order to be carried by him throughout the dungeon. And so the old one explained that he will lead the charge before asking the protagonist if he could follow. Now the elder began to slash Chimera after other how do we use the longer, then making his way through the cybernetical monsters, which left the youth amazed as he jumped 2 levels at once, who was particularly pleased as this kind of XP income wouldn't be possible even with professional piggyback service. And so Siegfried began regretting not taking his hamster with him, seeing how that monster offered a great loot. So with that being said, our hero reached level 50, unlocked a new skill, which was known as Proof of Existence, that increased the damage to nerfed enemies, and this made the young man realize that this new skill could allow him the edge over foes of a higher level. Then just as he began wishing for elaborate for his new skill, he assumed that Tico tested out on the small monster nearby, only for it to start changing appearance to the hero's shock, as it was none other than Chimera 007, a rare monster that had the ability to morph, and uses it to turn into a vulnerable creature in order to attract enemies. But just then the old one drew his blades and cut down the monsters to pieces, since the weapon meister explained that the one who only relies on his eyes will surely regret it, which the rookie agreed with, stating that he had much to learn. Then the veteran stated that the monsters had almost been wiped out before asking the hero about his progress, so he revealed having gained a skill and great XP. With that being said, the old man stated that they should go look for the treasure. Yet the young man seemed to have a question to ask first, because despite the elder being rumored to use 18 mythical weapons, he was only resorting to an ordinary sword. Now the youth was left baffled upon learning that the old one had disciples and he gave them his mythical weapons, so it was explained that he had no idea about his students' whereabouts, and that he took them in as he was getting lonely in his travels. Then the youth looked at the belt, as the man stated that he only gives the finest to his students, which made the young man even more confused, as despite having lost interest in weapons, the old one was still looking for the legendary weapon. Hence he quickly assumed that the swordsman wanted to gift it to him, which left him baffled, as it seemed that the youth wasn't satisfied with the mythical belt. Although the elder explained that he only goes on treasure hunting quests for his amusement, and that he enjoyed the journey more than the prize, and as the hero rephrased what the old man just said, the veteran affirmed that this was the satisfaction of the hunt. Then after walking for some time, both heroes finally stopped, as they were now in front of a giant door, because the symbol M on it marks the birthplace of death, meaning that they were sure to find a clue, to find the mad blacksmith's final weapon. Yet the protagonist couldn't help but find it odd, seeing how there were no apparent defenses in front of the giant door, making him assume that a trap awaits inside. And just as he asked the old man for advice, this one suddenly coughed blood, thus ultimately starting our hero. So the young one rushed to check on the mentor, who affirmed that everything was alright, and he was only coughing due to an illness he had for years, making our hero recall how the old man was coughing all the time in real life. But just then, the both of them were approached by someone who was amazed that the rumors about the legendary NPC dying were true, which startled our hero, for the man thanked the party of 2 for killing all the monsters, as it made their path easy. This was none other than the devious hunter from the Genesis Guild, known as Cholgi Choi. Now the brute recognized the elder as the member of Stellar 5, and his companion as the champion of the Colosseum, who presented himself as Siegfried. Then Cholgi Choi said that the hero retired after becoming the champion, and how he had bullied his men, making him assume that he was here on their behalf, though the Genesis member affirmed that he didn't care about them, before asking the protagonist if they were acquainted. So the debuff master explained that this was the first encounter, making the bully point out how he shared the same phase as Tai Sung Han. In truth, the hero knew very well about this individual, since he was a traitor who had stolen Beamer's fortune before burning its safe house down, while running away. And the youth was certain that the devious hunter, who asked the mercenary to kill his foes, forced others to be corrupt like him, seeing how despicable he was. Still, Tai Sung Han knew very well that the one in front of him wasn't the real problem, and that the one he should be worthy of is the one in red. Then Siegfried realized that the faceless mercenary was extremely strong and that he was responsible for him and the old man not detecting them, so he had no choice but to admit that he was outclassed by this one. Thus he decided to gain some time until the old man gets back on his feet, and so he addressed Cholgi Choi and asked him if his guild was aware of his actions. Yet he didn't give a proper response, so Siegfried claimed that Genesis would only send someone who had lost his rank to such a trib location, and then the guild didn't care about him living or dying. Thus upon hearing this, the devious hunter grew furious. Just then a fast projectile passed right by our hero, snashing his ear, and just as he realized what had happened, the devious hunter had already closed the distance, then delivered a powerful punch, thus sending our hero flying into the wall and making the old man fear the worst. but the mercenary affirmed that the protagonist was only trying to anger him in order to gain some time. Yet Chulgi Choi seriously didn't listen, since he was determined to slay the protagonist by using his own hands. So upon seeing this, the mercenary stated that his employer wouldn't require his assistance, so the man tasked him with surveying the old man, while he takes care of the protagonist personally, which left our hero relieved as he had avoided the worst scenario due to the devious hunter's short temper, and he also assumed that the red-cloaked one was tied to the mercenary by money alone. Then after killing the employer, the hero would negotiate with the one in red, using a reward greater than the promised in order to buy time in the worst-case scenario. But just then, our hero snapped back to reality, by his enemy charging up at him with a mana-filled punch, only for him to dodge at the last minute, and just then the brute grabbed his spear, then swung it at our hero, who evaded the head once again, as Chulgi Choi declared that the hero was worthy of his title as champion of the Colosseum, seeing how he was able to evade his hits. Now the hero began to think of how his opponent had mastered the lands, and how he excelled at wide-range attacks, by filling the tip of his spear with mana. Even so, the protagonist was certain that he would beat him, and after summoning a weapon that seemed very becoming, then the hero used the item provided by Quickdraw in order to attack his opponent, which left the man stunned as the debuff master drew his weapon from thin air, and was dealing damage far superior to the average level 50. Yet, as he firmly planted his feet into the ground and twisted himself, the attacker struck again with his spear, only for the young man to block it using a shield, thus leaving him more and more baffled. So with that being said, the hero resorted to the power of the belt in order to exchange the protective shield for a blunt weapon. And just like that, the hero kept on using Quickdraw in order to cycle between his weapons and gain the edge over his opponent, who was rendered too slow to counter the many weapons that were popping up at the speed of light. Hence this made Chulgi Choi assume that the one now holding a great sword was concealing his power from the start. Then with that, the youth gave him the final slash, rendering him unable to move, which left the old man blown away, seeing the belt being used skillfully despite it being his first time in order to overwhelm his opponent with speed. So just like that, both the member of Stellar 5 and the one in red were now certain that they would one day be surpassed by the young man. Then the mercenary turned to the mentor stating that his new disciple was capable, and that training him was surely a pleasure. Still the veteran threatened the man, assuming that he was going to go after him. Yet the one in red affirmed that his threats were empty, seeing how people sensed his ability to terminate them on the spot. Then the shadowed one asked the old man if he knew the reason behind his lack of killing intent toward Herbert's legendary weapon. With that being said, the version that is to come went straight to the chase, and asked about the second piece of the map. Thus the elder had no choice but to reveal its location to him, yet decided to impose a term of his own. Meanwhile, our hero sheathed his great sword, and began to reflect on the abilities of the mythical belt, which despite feeling alien now, would surely one day multiply his strength. But just as the young man began to walk away thinking that his opponent was down, he was suddenly insulted, since the devious hunter accused the debuff master of being a cheater, seeing how he had overwhelmed him, despite the huge gap in level between them. So the protagonist was left shocked upon seeing that the man still had fight in him, as he remembered him weaker than this. And with that being said, Chulgi Choi ordered the mercenary to terminate the champion, and the old man, which made the one in red call him out for resorting to him after suffering defeat, and all were left baffled upon seeing the mercenary deny the order. But the spearman was having none of it, as he demanded the man to obey, while giving the general spay he had received from him. So the mercenary explained how he was after the final weapon of Herbert rather than profit, since he claimed that he only took the job in order to abuse the name of Genesis, for his own sake. Then Chulgi Choi affirmed that Genesis will become his enemy, though the one in red stated that this was little important, seeing how he will flee right after getting the map, before pointing out how his employer had been abandoned by Genesis, thus leaving Chulgi Choi in a state of panic and unable to reply. Back then the man tried to throw a tantrum, seeing how he was going to be sent to the City of Pleasures, while stating that there was no point in going to this place, yet the one in the chair affirmed that this was the command of the guildmaster, also claiming that they will give him enough money to enjoy himself there. Yet Chulgi Choi affirmed that he deserved respect, seeing the huge sum he paid to join the guild. But the man recalled how he was using money that he stole from Beamer, and the bully tried to defend himself, yet it was no use. So in the end the man stated that he should have remained with his original guild instead of betraying them, if he doesn't like their way of doing things. Then back to the present, rage began to build itself in the devious hunter's heart, as he claimed that he wasn't abandoned, and that the City of Pleasures wasn't worthy of him. Thus he thrusted his spear deep into the ground, channeling his mana into it, leaving our hero startled, having realized that the brute had lost his mind and was trying to take the cave down on them all. So the hunter tried to deliver a powerful strike to none other than the protagonist, who evaded it at the last moment. And with that being said, Siegfried quickly launched himself, then charged at the bully, before smacking him into the face and making his weapon fall out of his hand. For according to our hero, the one in front of him was a despicable traitor, regardless of what he had endured, and so he decided to inflict upon the traitor what he had once done to him, by giving him a taste of his own treachery, and finishing him using his own weapon. Just like that, the protagonist used Flying Spur in order to throw the spear and impale the one in front of him, ultimately sending him flying into the giant door. So just like that, the one who once betrayed the protagonist had finally met his demise, and with the door having been destroyed, something appeared from behind it. Then the protagonist received a system notice for conquering the dungeon, asking him to take his prize, with the final room being unveiled, and the treasure chest now being in reach. Now Tae-sung-han realized that the map leading to the final masterpiece was inside this chest, yet the mercenary affirmed that he will be the one taking the map, making the protagonist realize that they were all after the same thing. Still, the old man asked him to calmly surrender, seeing how he had the rights to the map, and Shakiro then recognized the red one from his appearance, and his red mono, as the Crimson Cardinal, which honored the Red Hood, seeing how a member of the Stellar Five knew who he was. So according to the old man, this one was an inquisitor of the office cult, and someone who just became a master. Then just as the swordsman pointed out how our hero couldn't win against him, he was left shocked by his cult, since it also harbored the mad scientist who tried to bring the python back to life. Thus the Crimson Cardinal stated that the debuff master was lucky, as he was spared due to the deal he had made with the old man. But Siegfried demanded an explanation, so Shakiro explained how he had given up the treasure in exchange for their lives. Though despite hating it, the young man had no choice but to comply with that, seeing how they couldn't take on such a powerful foe as an ill old man and the weak rookie, and this left the protagonist to cry over his own weakness. Then the Crimson Cardinal pointed out how despite how ridiculous it sounds, life was truly the most precious treasure, before asking the old man about the second part of the map, to which he responded by claiming that he didn't know either. Yet he affirmed that he knew of a way to try and get its position, leaving the red one intrigued, because according to the old man, Herbert casted a spell upon the map that will make the two pieces pinpoint the locations of the second piece, once deciphered, and with that the Red Cardinal asked if he was able to do so, before presenting him with the first piece of the map, while stating that he had a thin patience. Then the Crimson Cardinal affirmed to the old man that he shouldn't try to dupe him. So with that being said, the member of Stellar 5 began deciphering the spell, thus leaving the protagonist baffled, as it was none other than the spell of pursuit, which made the one in red point out how bizarre the blacksmiths must have been for casting such a great spell on a small map. Then with that being said, the location of the second piece was about to be uncovered. The first part of the map resonated with our hero, revealing that he was the one holding the second piece of the map, as the system urged him to rejoin the two pieces. Just like that, everyone was left blown away, and back a year and a half ago, others were left unsatisfied, since Chulji Choi began to complain about how all their efforts were for some puny rewards, making his guildmate affirm that this had already happened. With that being said, the short-tempered gamer affirmed to the guildmaster that they should avoid small raids such as these, making the protagonist apologize. Just then, our hero stumbled upon a part of a torn-up map. Then the protagonist asked Jin Woo if she had any knowledge about it, to which she responded by stating that they should quickly dispose of it, as it was pointless. Yet upon feeling the small mana coming from it, the hero decided to keep it with him. Now back to the present, our hero remembered how he had forgotten the second piece of the legendary map in his inventory all these months ago, and the old man demanded an explanation, so the young one explained how he had taken it from robbers, but had no idea about its real value. Upon seeing this, the Crimson Cardinal fell into a red rage, thinking that he was being deceived, ultimately attacking the both of them, and despite the old man blocking it, still our hero felt great pain as he wasn't so lucky. Just like that, the debuff master was sent flying into the wall. Then Shakiro asked the one in red to calm himself, as he had misread the situation, yet the Crimson Cardinal didn't want to hear any of it, thinking that the old man was just trying to save himself, before pointing out how he regrets ever trying to negotiate with him. And just then the one in red activated his skill, Barrier of Blood, thus making the old man realize that they were never meant to leave this mine alive. So the Cardinal explained how this was only natural, as he had to do what he must, seeing how Shakiro was still a member of the Stellar Five, despite being past his prime, before bringing up the protagonist who had enough potential to threaten his cult. First, it was better to end him in his early beginning. Yet the swordsman affirmed that it was the one in red who would meet his demise, as he cut off his spell in order to freeze the protagonist, which shocked the Crimson Cardinal, as the old man had easily cut his solidified blood. Just then the same old man closed up the distance between them, before delivering powerful slashes, thus making the one in red realize that he would have been a goner if it weren't for his armor, seeing how the ill Shakiro was still one of Stellar 5. Then the old man explained that the Crimson Cardinal still had a chance, and that he shall let him escape with his life if he takes down the barrier, leaving him utterly annoyed. The man then affirmed to the old one that he shouldn't get on his high horse due to his surprise attack, since he hadn't shown his true strength yet. Upon hearing this, the old man made the box of weapons appear, before drawing them all at the same time, using his magic, and affirming that he too still had strength to show. Now the Crimson Cardinal, who praised the man for his adequate mana-wielding technique, affirmed that the standard weapons couldn't bring him victory. Even so, the Weapon Meister firmly affirmed that they would be enough to cause his demise. Then with that, the old man charged at the blood attack, and with a swift move of his blades he easily cut it down, while Shakiro kept on trying to close the distance as the man bombarded him with heavy attacks. Just then the Crimson Cardinal formed himself as a sphere of blood in order to defend himself from the axe of the Sword Master, and their clash was so powerful that it resulted in the ground shattering, from seeing the perfection residing in each of his moves, as well as the immense power harbored in the simplest of attacks. So our hero was left blown away by the power of the weapon Meister, yet he was fully aware that, while the fight kept going on, he would surely become a disadvantage due to his regular weapons. Then the Crimson Cardinal began to pity him, stating that the outcome of the fight would have been long decided if the old man hadn't given his true weapons to his students. But Shakiro couldn't understand what the Red One was trying to say, so he explained that the man was sure to meet his demise because of his loving nature, as he used bloody guillotine on him, and the old man tried to block it using his weapons, only for them to crack under the spell. Just like that, the bloody guillotine connected with the ground, yet its caster didn't sense anything being hit, and just as he began to think that the old man evaded it at the last second, he was suddenly attacked, then hit in the face by yet another regular weapon. Still, the old man claimed that even if he had a loving nature, it is this very nature that can transform the world, and as he pointed his weapons to the Crimson Cardinal, he affirmed that he had many weapons that he still had not used, which amused the Crimson Cardinal, who firmly claimed that he'd make every weapon crumble along with their master. So the two men powered their heart into the battle, each trying to take the edge over the other, while the one in red kept on destroying Shakiro's weapons one by one, until finally one never-drawing weapon remained along with the two he was holding. Then once the sword in the old man's hand was destroyed, the Crimson Cardinal launched himself at him, stating that he was now defenseless and at his mercy, yet Shakiro affirmed that the man must have miscalculated, claiming that he had more than 18 weapons, thus leaving him utterly shocked. Then the old man explained that he kept a few spare weapons with him, for urgent cases, before pointing out how the blood magic of the Crimson Cardinal wasn't as strong as it was, meaning that he was tired. With that being said, the weapon Meister decided to give him the final blow using his spear art, and the Red One was left defenseless, as he was struck with the third form of the art known as Lightning Flash. So with that being said, the Crimson Cardinal was left baffled, as the old man hadn't revealed all of his techniques, and yet this old man wasn't done yet, as he struck the blood magic user with the second form, then as well as the first form. So the man then decided to go for the final attack, by unleashing Form 0 upon the Crimson Cardinal, and the impact resulted in a great shock that the protagonist couldn't help but compare to the real world's heavy military weaponry. Just like that, the hero witnessed the prowess of a member of the Stellar Five. Meanwhile, the old man began to think of how this technique was too powerful for this regular spear, and how it had been long since he had such a fierce fight. And just as he began to think of how powerful his opponent was, he suddenly pointed out how the master had now run out of weapons, before letting out a sinister grin, then followed by a great spur of blood magic. And just as the hero began to fear the worst, his quest master's grudge had been triggered, the one that implied that he had to defeat the other 7 successors of the Mighty Eight, who ruled the continent 5 centuries ago, with one of them being the successor of the blood demon Berserk. So upon seeing that the epic quest that Deus gave him had been triggered, the protagonist realized that the level 301 NPC who was an inquisitor in the Osric cult, Vladimir, also known as the Blood Cardinal, was in fact the successor of Berserk the blood demon, who was a spawn of hell, who tainted the entire continent with blood. Since Deus failed to defeat 7 mighty warriors, due to them dying before their fights, which is why he tasked his student to take on their successors, and upon recalling this, the protagonist realized that the one in front of him was one of the so-called successors, and was the man endangering the old one. Yet the debuff master failed to see what he should do, seeing how he was far weaker than him. Then the Red One explained how he didn't want to resort to this form, as it was ugly and tiring, and how he didn't expect a sick old man to push him into this form, making Shakiro ask him if he obtained it from his cult, but the monster denied, stating that the power he would use to terminate the old man was given to him by another powerful being, while explaining that their simple deaths wouldn't satisfy him, as he shall terrify the Colosseum by hanging both their heads at the entry of the arena. And just as he began to picture the sight that left him pleased, the old man charged at him, then attacked him using his palm, but the demon remained unfazed, as it pointed out how ridiculous it was for Shakiro to attack without using any weapon. So Vladimir then began stomping on the elder's head, claiming that he was angry at him, as he had murderous intent for his student. Yet the swordsman explained that this wasn't the case, since he was never the master of the prodigy, and that the youth is the student of someone who outclassed him by far. As he tried to get up, but seeing the sick old man hold on to life, left the demon irritated. Just then, the elder asked Vladimir to lay his eyes upon a spell that he could have never taught to the young man, and the Clemson continent was left uneasy, but quickly realized that this was in fact skills from the hero known as Zone of Mortality, that nerfs the target's overall defenses, and Zone of Frailty, the target's stamina and mana. Then the old man pointed out how the successor of the blood demon had lost his focus, before reminding him that they were originally facing each other. And the Crimson Cardinal was left shocked upon seeing Shakiro levitate the destroyed weapons, as the weapons had been gathered. Then the Weapon Meister decided to unleash his finishing attack, his ultimate arcane technique, known as 10,000 Heavenly Flower Rain. With that, Vladimir let out a scream, before the occurrence of a great explosion. Since Shakiro's ultimate arcane technique is a hidden art that the old man found in an ancient ruin, and mastered a long time ago, the dancing weapons attacking all at once could be compared to gentle petals in the wind, thus earning it the name of the Lotus of the battlefield. And just like that, Vladimir admitted that the old man was the victor, while explaining that the situation would have been much worse if Shakiro had used intact weapons before turning to the protagonist and explaining how he had recalled his skill. According to the Crimson Cardinal, it was mentioned as debuff skills in a report regarding the failed ritual in the ruins, making him realize that he was the culprit. And so the blood user explained that for ruining the ritual and his fight, he shall end his life one day. This left Siegfried utterly irritated, seeing how the man had enough power to escape. Then he ran to the old man, who fell to the ground, while Shakiro affirmed that he would have lost if it wasn't for the protagonist. Yet he must gain in power, seeing how he was now targeted by Vladimir and his cult. Though the hero urged the man to get treated, yet the Weapon Meister affirmed that this is pointless. Seeing how he was now facing the death his body had always avoided, before giving our hero books that left him intrigued. Then Shakiro explained that he was going to give him his secret techniques that will surely come in handy despite being inferior to the ones taught by Deus. So the young man begged the old one to stay alive, stating that he had always considered him as a teacher, and in his last moment, the great warrior began to recall the day he had become champion of the arena. Just then, a man congratulated him for his new title, though Shakiro didn't recognize him. So the man clarified that they had been fighting in the same arena for over a decade. Later on, the bald one asked him about his next course of action, upon earning his freedom by becoming champion. Then the young man explained that he would partake on a journey, in order to travel the world, for the sake of new experiences and treasure, while explaining how he would take students under his wing, which surprised the man, who assumed that he liked being alone, and asked him for the reason behind this motive. So Shakiro explained that he was well aware that he would never become the greatest warrior, but according to him, if he took on many students, one of them would surely become someone big enough to change the world, and the prodigy was determined to bet everything on this one student. Back to the present, the man explained to the protagonist how he always saw him as a student of his, how he would be betting everything on him, before finally disappearing, making the youth think of how BNW was worthy of its name, as it was a world of its own, created by Hive. So our hero's master as well as the great warrior were both fabricated characters, just like the rest of the non-player characters. Even so, the protagonist couldn't deny the fact that he got acquainted with Shakiro, who shared with him knowledge, and the virtual old man even allowed our hero to gain in power, because according to Mortem Sung Han, the little time he had spent with the Weapon Meister wasn't virtual at all, and despite not knowing what he meant when he implied that he batted everything on him, the young man was determined to make the old one proud. Just like that, the great mentor passed away. Later, the hero received a message from Gosran, asking if he was going to partake in a special event of the Empire, as it was something he would do, so they said to use this opportunity to claim that she must be missing him. Thus he related these events to her name that comes from Gosran, which means clear, while his master wondered if she was still farming Expan in the ruins. Then the Korean assumed that the event in question must be battle survival, an event that is yet to come, and yet the center of attention, as it was a survival game given by the Marokian Empire, the strongest country on the continent. Only players could partake in it, and it takes place on a burning island in the middle of the White Archipelago. There, the contestants will have to fight each other in order to stay alive and win the competition, making it one of the hardest games. The winner will become king of a small domain, which would be a first in this game, but it had been criticized for the punishment of eliminated players, as it will bring back their power and levels to level 1, and seal the rune of transcendence for a decade, meaning that they wouldn't be able to level up for 10 years, making it a hot topic for the gamers. Therefore, the strategist realized that this must not be the work of the company in control, but of the emperor instead, and when asked if he will partake in it, the protagonist immediately denied, stating that he was sure to suffer the penalty, as 10,000 other contestants who would be more powerful than him will surely attend, which explains the message of the elemental mage asking him to not partake in the competition. And so, upon looking at the items that he got from his late master, as well as the map, he decided to mind his own business away from the competition. The hamster was amazed by his holder carrying a treasure map, and assumed that they were going to follow it, but the young man was only checking if he had the required level, as according to him he could take all of his time, seeing how he was the only one who knew about this map. With that being said, the hero decided to search for an airship, going for the seas of the south, but he was quickly left disappointed after stumbling upon a wrecked vessel. Just like that, Spirit and Master began to fear the worst, seeing how poor the state of the ship was. Meanwhile, at the headquarters of Hive in the United States of America, an employee was looking at the bad reviews coming from the gamers regarding the survival battle. so she began to complain to the vice chairman, Oppenheimer, who is the Hexagon team, on how they were being blamed for an event they didn't even craft. Then Oppenheimer explained to Deputy GM Hayami Cha, who was worried about their stocks going down, that the position of the company remained intact. He explained how they can only come in contact with boxes and the network, leaving events to those inside BNW, making her worried as the penalty was too great, but he affirmed that every problem within the game should be settled in it, meaning that they should just have faith in the users and give them a healthy environment. Yet the deputy explained how despite having been in Hive for 3 years, she still couldn't fully comprehend the game, as similar incidents previously occurred. Still, the vice chairman explained that this was the reason behind its beauty, as no one, not even the CEO of the company, knows about the outcome of the story. Even the divinities will have no idea about the upcoming events. Meanwhile, on the airship of our hero, the hamster happily claimed that he was flying, and while in his delusion, the hero asked him to keep quiet for the sake of not disturbing others, before realizing that they were the only 2 passengers on the ship. Then the young man felt reassured upon seeing that this old vessel could still fly, when suddenly, he was startled by a man affirming that it only looked as such due to his liking for the antique appearance. So the traveler realized that he was talking with the drunken captain, and claimed that he should be maneuvering the ship, making him state that the youngs are always worried, before explaining how he is using a broom to block the wheel, as their traveling course was a straight line, making the youth doubt the man having a license. Then the captain affirmed to the young one that their trip will be easy and smooth due to the beautiful weather, yet our hero was left anxious and annoyed. So Siegfried decided to do some preparation during his short stay on the ship, and he chose to firstly absorb the Python score that he obtained in the ruins. Then upon using one of his skills, he successfully imbued the Python score into his body, increasing his light energy and light resistance by 60. Since he learned that he could use this new light energy in order to perfect skills, he used it on Flying Spur to make it lightning, Flying Spur which creates bouncing current between the target and its surroundings, as well as Divine Attribution, the evolution of Heavy Strike, that would deliver 3 powerful electric currents in cone shapes to the surroundings upon impact. So the warrior was left pleased, seeing how the skills gained lightning powers, and he longed for the possibility of taking down multiple enemies at once as well. With that being said, he decided to take a look at the box given to him by the fallen warrior, regarding Lightning Flash and the 10,000 Heavenly Flower Rain. Lightning Flash is modeled after the 4 spirit beasts that protect the 4 directions, and has 3 forms ranging from 0 to 3. As for the second technique, it had to do with the perfect synchronization of many weapons. Then after some time, the youth found himself drowsy, eyes open on the ground. He, who was awakened by an annoying noise, had succumbed to slumber while studying. Just then the captain arrived, ordering everyone to get on the deck as a cyclone was near. This intrigued the traveler, as the drunk had stated that they would have enjoyable weather. Yet once on the top deck of the ship, he witnessed a giant storm ahead, leaving him completely baffled. Thus Ham had lost all hope of surviving, while the adventurer urged the captain to change the direction of the ship, as they were heading for the eye of the storm. Yet just as the drunk explained how he was an experienced captain, and that he could take on the cyclone, his hat flew off his head, and stuck itself in the engine, ultimately destroying it, and after seeing the captain's reaction, the youth realized that he was drunk. With that being said, the protagonist, along with his pet and the drunken man, found themselves in a lethal situation. Then the system alerted the adventurer that due to poor maintenance, the engine was now out of commission, leaving him baffled. So the old man stated that they could still survive the fall, yet the young one couldn't bring himself to believe him, for Siegfried would only be able to respond after his death. Yeah, this would be the end of his great spirit. With that being said, our hero was only left with one option, and so he precisely positioned himself, before using the drunk as a stepping stone, and made a safe landing. Tizong Han was left even more stunned upon seeing that the broom had still been maneuvering the ship. The old man angrily questioned the young one about his actions, so the boy explained how he would be driving, seeing how the other was a drunk who couldn't maintain the engine, and then he explained that he didn't have the money to fix it, as the owner of the salon used his wife to pressure him into paying what he owed, leaving Siegfried angry, and so the both of them began to fight over the wheel. Then Ham noticed something while in the middle of the fight, and so he turned their attentions to the view in front of them. Now the party was right in front of the cyclone, and with the glass being shattered, everyone was left terrified for his life. Just like that, the old vessel found itself devoured by the cyclone. Then the system implied that our hero who'd reached the barrier was now a part of the game, raising the 10,000 contestants by 1. Shortly after, at the foot of a waterfall, the adventurer felt relieved to have survived before cursing the drunken captain and affirming that he would never travel by airship again. With that, he decided to look for his pets, who according to the rune of the pact, were still unharmed. Now Taesung grew curious about his whereabouts, as he was in an unknown location known as Erangel Zone 9, and so he decided to gain some altitude in order to have a better view, hoping to find a village or a gateway. With that being said, our hero made his way up, going as fast as he could, dashing through the mountains, and finally in the end, he reached the top of the cliff. Then the protagonist immediately began to search for the closest village, and upon finding it and seeing how big it was, the youth assumed that it must have a gateway. Yet just as he was about to go look for his hamster, something else attracted his attention. For many annual vehicles were heading this way, so upon seeing that they were all airships, the hero assumed that a war was going on over this small island. Yet upon being informed of what was really happening by the system, he grew very annoyed, as he was now part of Battle Survivor, which was soon to commence. With that being said, our hero was left baffled. Then suddenly, 4 giant pillars emerged from the ocean, emitting red beams, and with everything being complete, the island found itself sealed within a suppression barrier, while the order of self-destruction had been triggered, leaving our hero utterly annoyed. Yet just as he was about to head to the village in order to save himself, something appeared behind him, and quickly introduced itself as Receptional 9, an event operation assistant for this event. So the entity wanted to give the protagonist a summary of the rules before the start of Survivor's battle. The first being that only the most crucial item of that contestant will remain, while the others will dissipate. Secondly, contestants could rest in the no-fighting zones that are villages, but will instantly be eliminated once the village gets annihilated. The third rule being that, after some time, all zones except the last one will be randomly destroyed and closed one by one, and with the summary having ended, the creature quickly excused itself before wishing the contestant good luck, as he tried to stop it while it made its exit. Then Tian's Fanghan began to fear the worst, as the rules described by the golem were too extreme for him. Just then, ships began to enter the barrier, and each airship was filled with contestants. Then with a swift move, many of them jumped into the island, and safely landed on the ground. With the battle commencing in 5 seconds, everyone was left on edge, and as the event officially began, a bloodbath broke down on the beach. The first contestant died, followed by the second and the third. Meanwhile, the protagonist watched from afar, thinking of how savage this butchery was. After thinking of how at least 5,000 contestants would lose their lives on the beach, the hero decided to head toward Zone 13, in order to better his odds. Yet just as he began to think of how others would surely have the same idea, an arrow was fired his way. So our hero quickly noticed and used Quick Draw, in order to counter it with a shield, making him realize that he had already been discovered. Then the ambusher was left shocked upon seeing the protagonist block his sneak attack, so Siegfried immediately retaliated and eliminated his first contestant, while thinking of how his arrival meant that others were already present in the woods. Just then he noticed a faint sound of chatter approaching his way, so the debuff master reacted quickly and hid in a nearby bush, as it was none other than the members of the GT Guild, the 8th strongest in the entire game. Now the hero began to think of how the big guilds must also be here, and how the low-level players that had just arrived must not be the only GT members present. Just then, the corpse of the player he had just slain began to dissipate, leaving behind the mythical item known as the Soul Division device, which was a necklace that allowed the wielder to acquire an additional class. Upon seeing this, the protagonist was left baffled and amazed, since dual classes far surpassed the hybrid ones, as it allowed one to gain 2 opposite professions at the same time. Yet Siegfried watched in pain as this great item was being picked up from the ground, as he began to think of how the weakling he killed possessed a mythical item, and the GT members, now in possession of the necklace, began to talk about how amazing its abilities were. As the girl explained how selling this could make them rich, her guildmate stated that she should keep it with her, as it could put her in danger. Then while the first two began to argue, the third member summoned his weapon, claiming that the item was marvelous, leaving them intrigued. Suddenly, the one with the glasses instantly cut down his teammates and snatched the necklace from them. Now the swordsman called him out for his betrayal, before the attacker explained that he wasn't a backstabber, and that they were about to kill each other for it. With that being said, the skill Metamorphic Mask had been turned off, and with both of them being eliminated, the level 198 Asura, known as BJ Raptor, who was the 99th strongest player, explained that he wasn't from GT, so this left the protagonist utterly baffled, as a ranker shouldn't partake in such a competition, seeing how high the stakes were for them. Yet BJ Raptor's actions left our hero intrigued. Just then, the ranker thanked the viewers for the many donations that he had received, stating that his plan to humiliate GT was an amusing success. So before cheerfully explaining to them how he will keep the mythical item in order to get himself a dual class, and upon looking at the comments, the young man finds it reasonable to go for a magic class, making our hero realize that he was streaming all along. Then the swordsman realizes that he had a large fan base, seeing how donations were raining upon him, making him curse his luck as his presence crushed his chances. Yet just as the protagonist decided to remain hidden until the streamer passed by, the other suddenly claimed to have recently picked up something interesting, and the ranker pulled out the young man's hamster, explaining to his viewers how he wanted to make it his, but the little beast already had a master. Even as a Triviant expressed its intention to become its new master by slaying the previous owner, Ham rudely affirmed that the hero would surely defeat him. Now the one known as BJ Raptor explained how he should be the strongest on the island, before asking the pet if it truly believed that its owner could defeat him, to which it firmly confirmed. Just then the great forest spirit spat in the young man's face, explaining how it would never allow someone like him to become its master. With that, the ranker's expression darkened, and as he began to squeeze the little hamster, then the angry streamer wanted to see if the hamster's owner would arrive before he managed to crush it to death. But just then BJ Raptor noticed a hostile presence behind him, which was none other than the warrior here to rescue Ham Ham. Yet upon taking a look at him, the ranker affirmed that he wasn't but a weakling, so the determined fighter charged at the streamer, and launched an attack only for it to be easily dodged while the other looked disappointed. Even though the ranker assumed that Tian Song-han had some bite to back up his bark, he quickly discovered an immense gap in level between them. Still, as he kept on easily evading his opponent's attack, he affirmed that such a weak presence would be bad for the views, and that he didn't need a pet like Ham Ham. With that being said, then the young man prepared himself, and he threw the little spirit away. Meanwhile, while the protagonist was focused on his friend, the overleveled Asura closed the distance, ready to attack. Yet the warrior quickly noticed, and he reacted just in time. That surprised the ranker, as he didn't expect the level 53 to survive his attack. Even so, the young man's arm found itself trembling from the shock, and he was knocked back a few steps away. Thus the swordsman quickly realized that he was powerless in front of the ranker, seeing how he easily pushed him away. However, he decided to keep his calm and planned to go to the nearest safe zone, where he would invoke the hamster and move to another part of the island. But just then, the streamer asked him if he was planning on ascending. Then he ironically proposed to help, as he destroyed the structure with his powerful slashes, leaving our hero to fall. Now the streamer claimed to his viewers that the hero was merely awakening, before jumping behind him in order to create a scene for them. That act made the protagonist realize how mentally unstable his opponent was, and with that, a great explosion occurred. As a result, a member of the 9th strongest guild, known as Premier, decided to stay ready at all times. At the same time, another gamer with a stone arm successfully slayed 2 adventurers, leaving his tired self relieved by his victory. Soon explosions began to occur all around the forest. Meanwhile, the protagonist was fleeing for his life, while the streamer closely followed him in order to hunt him down, urging him to fight fair and square, and BJ Raptor was very well aware that the hero was planning on getting into a village and shaking him off by using teleportation. Originally, the streamer prolonged the chase in order to get more views, and just as he was about to get serious, chains suddenly appeared out of nowhere, and quickly bound him, which was the warrior's skill, speed restriction, that slowed down all of the ranker's attributes, making him realize the meaning of debuff master. Then a flying weapon appeared out of nowhere, heading toward the streamer's back, only for him to quickly notice it and kick it away. Now the Asura once more found himself annoyed by the electric shock caused by the light attribute of the attack, but he quickly noticed how the protagonist's weapon was ricocheting from one tree to another. And just then the challenger himself appeared behind the streamer, explaining the full length of these 2 skills, before using supreme content, and just as he was about to stun the target, before dealing the final blow, he was left surprised by the crazed smiling ranker, who firmly stated that he was happy to have confronted him. Then the streamer summoned another blade, and he sliced off the vines restraining him, as well as their caster. With that, a great explosion occurred, thus leaving our hero's weapons destroyed. When he was rendered armless and missing a leg, then the swordsman began regretting not running away, as he quickly realized that he would have met the same end regardless. Just then, the ranker explained how strong he must be, seeing how he had survived his attack, and the streamer then apologized for calling him a weakling, seeing how he was more powerful than the GT members, before firmly affirming that there was no way of him winning due to the immense gap of level between them. With that, he asked the viewers about the fate that he shall inflict upon the protagonist while asking for donations, when suddenly, he received a notification explaining that the zone they were in would be bombed in less than 60 seconds. So with that being said, BJ Raptor asked for donations in order to quickly decide the fate of the hero, which didn't please the viewers. Just then, one of them named 1000 Wu Jin donated an immense sum, asking him to flee and let the bombing finish him off. Upon seeing the huge amount of money that he had just received and thanking the generous viewer on air, he decided to quickly accept his request. And as he pointed out to the fallen fighter how fortunate he was that someone paid for him to be spared, the little blue began to think of his savior. Just like that, the ranker left the protagonist paralyzed and alone on the ground. The outclassed young man began to curse his fortune, seeing how he had stumbled upon someone who greatly overpowered him, and the hero couldn't even resort to potions, seeing how BJ Raptor rendered him armless. He then began to worry about his path, before letting the dark thoughts end, as panic installed itself along with great regrets. In the end, the hero apologized to his mother, seeing how he had reached the end of his road, and the desperate soul began to fear the worst, as a few seconds only remained, but quickly lost hope upon seeing the counter hit 0, and just like that, the protagonist had met his end. Almost a week had passed since, as the broken player found himself depressed and alone in his room, scrolling on his phone while being surrounded with bottles. Then he began to complain about the immense loan that he had to pay, that even surpassed his debt. Now the regretful adventurer lamented not selling items before, as he wondered about the events that led to his current situation, seeing how big the debt seemed. Now, in the end, he blamed it all on the drunken captain that led him to this island, and so he promised himself to beat him up the next time they meet. This left the downcast gamer to cry in his misery, seeing how he had returned to being someone at the mercy of the debts. Just then, our hero received a message from Woojin Chain, and despite not wanting to answer, he was left baffled upon reading it, as it stated that he was still alive within the game. With that being said, the protagonist logged into BNW, and found himself in an intervention hotel inside Zone 12. The young man decided to check his stats, and was left overjoyed by them, as he had only suffered a normal death. Just then, someone quickly rushed at him, which was none other than his summon, and upon seeing the bandages, the hero quickly checked on the little beast, who was crying, thinking that his master died by his fault. Yet the warrior explained that the sin was his for failing to shield him. Just then, someone recalled his own words to the hero, stating that he was very much alive. This was none other than Woojin Chen, whom our protagonist assumed to be a GM due to his presence on the island, yet the man denied. Now the overleveled one explained how the protagonist had suffered a normal death, making Siegfried assume that it was due to a glitch in the system. Then the man explained that the fighter must not have been under the effect of the self-destructing aura, which left him intrigued, as the term seemed familiar. Woojin Chen claimed that it was the barrier that nerves the players upon crossing it in order to enter the island, and our hero had crashed into the island before the skill was activated, meaning that it went on with him already being on the island. With that, the young man formed a theory that his friend had escaped the debuff, allowing him to have a normal death. Upon hearing this, the protagonist was left relieved, seeing how terrified and anxious he was. Then the confused gamer asked Woojin Chen for the reason behind his presence on the island, assuming that he was partaking in the event, only for the man to laugh and explain that it would be like an adult fighting children, which weirded out our hero, and Woojin Chen explained that he also didn't pre-register for the game, leaving him more intrigued about how he got into the island. So the overleveled one explained how he wouldn't be able to fight for a small period of time, as he looked at his twitching hand, as he had forced his entrance. Yet he then affirmed that this matter was of no importance, because they needed to discuss the occurring event, and the older gamer explained that the players in the island were divided into 4 major groups, with the first being the poor solo players like the protagonist, who was left annoyed by this claim, then the second and third group being the ranking guilds, Premier and GT, while the last one would be the influencer, who was a young man named Guangjin Li, sent by Genesis, and who had almost slain our hero. Now the swordsman expressed how shocked he was to see that the ranker belonged to Genesis, yet his friend explained that it wasn't actually the case. Thus our hero's worst fears were brought to life, as the big guilds who made him look powerless were on the island. Still, the mentor tried to reassure him that only 3 of the 10 strongest guilds were present, so the boy asked if others like Seraphim were involved, but the other leveled one denied it, explaining that they didn't have the guts to enter such a risky gambit. As for them, it was not worth it. On the other hand, the 3 present guilds had authority and power, which is why they entered this risky competition. Even so, the big guilds decided to take their precautions, like GT and Premier, who sent many low-level players, having planned to achieve victory by favoring quantity over quality, making our hero understand why the GT members he saw were of a low level. Genesis, on the other hand, came up with a tactic to counter this plan by hiring the ranker, who could take on the entire island alone. Eventually, Tien Sung Han was forced to admit that Genesis came up with a genius plan, as they didn't put themselves directly at risk, making him wonder what the streamer was after. Yet upon learning that he was promised to become the Vice Guild Master of Genesis, he was left astonished, for BJ Raptor had been known as a genius gamer since childhood. Yet he was corrupted by fame, which led him to commit many devious acts, including bad behavior as well as hiring others to perfect his accounts in other games, which led him to remain without guild and sponsor, despite being the youngest player, as all were trying to avoid him. Now the hero put on a gloomy expression, explaining how he quit watching streams, and that the boy must be greedy, seeing how much donations he was getting. Though the mentor tried to claim that the young man was just worried, wasting his own potential, making the protagonist think that he was implying that success is lonely. Then Desire, the master of Genesis, who is rumored to become the chairman of the Pro Gamer Association, promised the boy to make him his number 2 if he wins. If the streamer actually wins and gives his kingship to Hyungsok Chae, who is known as Desire, he will use it to make his own kingdom, where he will rule over all NPCs, making him the first king player. Yet just as he continued explaining, the hero cut him short, as it was too painful to hear. So the younger one began to criticize Desire, seeing how he wanted to become king on top of the position of chairman, before asking the guide for the reason behind giving him so much information. And so he stated that the protagonist should strive to become the victor of Survivor Battle, seeing how he was already taking part in it. But according to the swordsman, the task will be difficult, seeing how powerless he was in front of Raptor. Yet just then, he remembered the generous donation that saved them, and the username, and he tried to ask the other one if he was the one who saved him. Yet the man got too embarrassed, and explained that he had an advice that could help our hero win, which picked up the protagonist's curiosity, and so the boy revealed that there was a cheating code that only the debuff master could use. Then the protagonist left the hotel happy, seeing how he had returned to the game, while Ham apologized, as he was the reason behind his death. Yet the master explained that it was no big deal and that he shall avenge him. But as the hamster had his doubts, the overleveled player reassured our hero, claiming that he will guard his pet while he's gone. And Siegfried claimed that he shall express his gratitude by offering Wu Jinchon dinner, which surprised him, seeing how stingy he was about money. Yet as the hero was clarifying that he wouldn't be able to treat him to a fancy meal, his friend stated that they shall resume their conversation after his victory, even before wishing him luck. Yet the protagonist rested at ease as he was now certain of his survival. Shortly after, as the debuff master began to make his way through the map, then he began to look around, and quickly realized that, except for safe zones, the map was completely empty, meaning that the remaining fighters must be going to Zone 13. Yet seeing how the final zone hadn't been activated yet, it meant that every other player was now residing in Zone 8, waiting to enter it. But just then, the young man was startled by a sudden explosion, for two adventurers ganged up on a single one, and had almost beaten him to death. However, the one with the gauntlets asked their victim to just surrender, while the other with a sword stated that they should be quick, seeing how the zone was on the brink of bombing, and the boy became filled with fury, as his two aggressors had betrayed her. Even so, just as the one with the knuckles explained that it was his fault for getting injured, and that they must do what they can to survive, his ally was hit in the back. Then before he could even realize what had just happened, he found himself getting slammed into the wall by a flying blunt weapon, as the owner of the hammer recalled it to his side, for it was none other than our hero. Thus, this left the boy impressed, seeing how his aggressors had been terminated with one attack by someone under his level. Nevertheless, just as he was about to express his gratitude, he found the weapon already pointed at his face, and Siegfried clarified to the young man that all contestants were enemies, which is why he was obligated to eliminate him. Although upon taking a look at his profile, the hero was left impressed, as the boy was from a non-fighting class like Golem Maker, and yet managed to survive this long. Still, he decided to slay the level 81 Golem Maker named Si Shanggu, in order to spare him death by someone else. And the Golem creator began to beg for his life to be spared in order to let his mother remain alive, but the protagonist affirmed that he didn't care about his backstory. Even so, upon seeing how he was crying and begging from the bottom of his heart, the hero hesitated, then finally declared that he took pity on the boy, and declared that he should flee the zone immediately, in order to avoid the bombing. Additionally, the debuff master even handed him a stamina recovery potion. With that, Shanggu was once again left deeply grateful to the one who couldn't help but show compassion to anyone who mentions his mother. And with the end of the event about to come to an end, the hero began to hope that the advice of the over-leveled one would be as practical as expected. For the survival battle had now been going for days, with the zones 8 and 12 about to be bombed in under 60 seconds, as the final zone began to open. Then the tired streamer explained to his viewers how the game will soon be coming to an end. Yet while he was streaming and talking to his audience, someone who had seen him from the bush was left annoyed, as by seeing the loot on his feet, the hunter realized that he had killed many, yet they had to bypass him in order to access the final zone. While one of the hunters assumed they could take him on, seeing how tired he seemed, his friend agreed, as even prodigies were not invincible. And with that being said, the old man explained to the stream that they would attack all at once in order to get to safety. After witnessing the circle appearing in the sky, and the other players teaming up on him, the streamer pointed out to his audience how they must have no honor. Well, that being said, the boy decided to make his move, and rushed through the tunnel leading to Zone 13. Just like that, the players decided to chase him down while running for their lives, yet only 3 seconds remained before the bombing. So all rushed to safety, but when the counter hit 0, the players found themselves the victims of the powerful beam, such that only 2 of them managed to get to safety. However, just as one of them expressed how overjoyed he was to have survived, they were suddenly spotted by Raptor, who immediately killed them both, and after eliminating the 2 of them, the young man made his way into the final zone, thinking of how miserable those sent by GT and Premier were. Just then, he entered the portal, and was left blown away, as the last zone of the island was a snowy biome. So BJ Raptor tried to recomfort himself, claiming that the view was magnificent, and that the others hadn't arrived yet. But just as he began talking to the organizers, thinking that he has won the game, so this notified him that 2 other contestants were still alive, and just as he was about to complain about how annoying this was, then the boy was suddenly ran over by a vehicle, since the impact was so strong that it made him cough blood and crash into the snow. Therefore this greatly angered the streamer, seeing how it had almost taken his life, as it made him wonder about the one who just hit him. To his surprise, he was in front of her car, which was the level 81 thank you golem, known as Rangewagon, because the driver Shanggu was amazed that Taranker hadn't been eliminated by his strike, and the ranker realized that the man had used his vehicle in order to survive the zone annihilation. Yet just as the golem maker began to brag about how indestructible his car was, then it suddenly crumbled to pieces and disappeared, and even before he could realize what had just happened, he was grabbed by the neck and slammed into the ground by the ranker. Now the streamer explained that the golem maker was the second gamer on the island to grab his attention, having survived a bombing and harmed him, before pointing out how the first became a corpse just like him. So with that being said, the golem maker met his end, leaving something behind that intrigued the streamer, since upon dying, the player left a ring created by an artisan and the memory of his mother, which the streamer found corny. Then the ranker began to wonder about the identity of the only opponent remaining, only to suddenly notice him at his back. Thus the starting player quickly backed out, as the ranker was amazed that he wasn't able to detect his last opponent, only to realize that he and the one picking the ring had already met. Upon seeing the piece of jewelry, the protagonist realized that the boy he had saved wasn't lying regarding his mother, so Siegfried thanked the ranker for tearing him apart, before pointing out how tiring fighting for 5 days must have been while he was absent. And with that being said, the hero claimed that he shall eliminate the boy in order to let him rest. Just as the hero said those words, then tension began to rise in the snowy zone, since the voice stated that the one in front of him was Wax, that weakening that he had demolished, which was a claim that greatly angered the debuff master, and the ranker had no choice but admit that his opponent was greatly durable, seeing how he survived after being left armless with a single leg in a zone that is exploding. Thus the boy then realized why he hadn't detected him, as it wasn't due to him being awake for 5 days straight, but due to the magic given to him by the poncho that he was wearing, before also noticing that the protagonist had a brand new equipment on him. This left him intrigued about what happened. Earlier that day at the Intervention Hotel, our hero was staying in. He asked the other one about his life-changing advice. Then Wu Jin-chan recalled how the hero was unaffected by the self-destruction on the island, meaning that he wasn't forced to follow the rules of the game, so making the protagonist finally realize that he has complete free will on the island, as well as the ability to enter the forbidden zones, meaning that he could cheat the map. And Siegfried feared elimination upon entering the forbidden zones, yet his friend affirmed that it wouldn't be the case, seeing how he put it to the test himself. That left the protagonist baffled, like the guard's intellect and attention to detail, just as Wu Jin-chon tried to warn our hero that his advantage will be revealed once he dies again. Still the protagonist affirmed that he could only lose once. Shortly after, the young man made his way into the second zone where access was restricted. Since Taesung Han was surprised to see that his friend had been right all along, and he decided to use these forbidden zones to save himself from the players killing each other, before thinking of the great advantages this freedom offered him, as he now had the ability to loot all the items left behind by the eliminated players. Meanwhile, Taesung Han began to think that he will be acquiring new equipment, while his opponent would be tiring himself on the island, as he picked up a blunt weapon and a poncho. Even so, he was very well aware that he needed to gain in power, as equipment alone couldn't bring him the win. Just then he recalled having a secret weapon, obviously. So back to the present, as the debuff master and the Asura were now face to face, because all the viewers were on the side of the streamer. Only one commented that he had a gut feeling about the victory of his opponent, and this comment angered the ranker, who was now more determined than ever to win the game in order to start his pro journey, as he couldn't tolerate his fans anymore. And as you think of how this would free him from making videos, he reassured his audience, because he claimed that despite being exhausted, still he won't be defeated by a level 50, as he charged at him, only for our hero to evade at the last minute. Then the boy was left alerted, as his underleveled opponent managed to land a strike, which he blocked at the last moment, and yet he was left irritated, since he could feel the pain in his body. Even the ranker couldn't be more intrigued, as good equipment shouldn't make this opponent this powerful. But Siegfried claimed that it was too early for the boy to panic, seeing how he hadn't demonstrated his full power yet. At that moment, the streamer noticed that some of his viewers were expressing how impressed they were by his opponent in the comments, thus leaving him filled with rage, seeing how they were on his side, when the opponent in question suddenly addressed them. Then the viewers were left confused, seeing how they didn't expect him to directly interact with them, as he apologized to those who liked his foe. Just then, the protagonist firmly claimed that he will be putting the young genius back in his place, thereby making the number of his own fans grow more and more, as some even wanted him to start his own stream. Meanwhile, the pet asked his caretaker if his master was doing well, which made the guard believe that it was concerned, as it had asked this question many times. Even as the tsundere hamster definitely tried to deny it, the hidden class reassured him that everything was going well, which fed the great forest spirit with joy. And Wu Jinchan had already predicted that the hero wouldn't be selecting any gear he found on the ground, since the blunt weapon he uses was slow despite its high amount of damage. But this quirk was quickly fixed by the quicksilver gloves that enhanced the attacking speed. Then the protagonist even equipped himself with the piercing of greed that enhances his lifesteal, and he realized that his friend was more knowledgeable than the ranker regarding the game, as regardless of the rank, all items were picked to take him on. Even so, the streamer made his way through the ranks due to his astonishing reaction time, meaning that even if tired, he still had the edge over the protagonist. Meanwhile, the same hero was left intrigued, since the young genius burst out laughing upon hitting him, claiming that he was going to put him back in his place, before stating that he was just holding back against him, and upon seeing his fanbase call him out on his anger and claim that he will lose, he burst out at them. And while all of them became confused by the sudden reaction, the streamer affirmed that just because it didn't end nicely, they had no value. Then confusion was replaced with anger, as he treated them as jobless nobodies who wasted their time on streams, who should just remain silent. Thus the protagonist became baffled, as his opponent was crazier than expected, and hastily insulted his fanbase. Just then, the ranker explained that the protagonist should have entered him when he was still invisible, and that he will make him wish that he had gone for it, while the hero affirmed that he had more secret tricks to show him. So with that being said, they began their final clash, and so the two of them charged at each other, and began to go blow for blow. Yet the ranker felt uneasy despite being the strongest of the two. Still he was unable to shake off the feeling that he had little odds of winning the fight, despite it being that the protagonist was struggling to dodge his slashes. Even the boy was particularly intrigued by the gaze of his opponent, as it was deprived of fear, to the point where it began to annoy him. Now the streamer disliked the protagonist's audacity, and as well as the overconfident eyes of his, before throwing his dagger at him. Then quick draw was quickly resorted to, thus allowing our hero to save himself from the blade by using a shield. Yet to his surprise, the dagger had penetrated his defense. Just then, the boy dashed forward and charged at our hero, leaving him startled. So the streamer then proceeded to kick the protagonist away, only for him to firmly plant his hand into the snow, in order to slap his flight mid-course, before dashing the other way. Upon seeing this, the opponent quickly began to tail him down, and claimed that the debuff master wasn't so confident after all, as he was running with his tail between his legs. Then the streamer theorized that he was being lured into the forest by his target, who planned to restrain him once again using nerfing skills, which he found ridiculous, seeing how he had already adapted to this trick. Just then, the boy made his way to the very front of his enemy, and struck with a slash so powerful that it easily cut down trees, only for the hero to dodge at the last instant. Then the protagonist grabbed one of the flying trees, and gathered all of his strength, before throwing it at his opponent. So the ranker was blown away by the madness that his foe was demonstrating. Even so, he easily parried it without any fear, slashing it using his blade as he was determined to slay the hero in front of him. Only then did he notice something intriguing, since a flying spear imbued with the light attribute was heading toward him. This left him amazed by the speed of his opponent, upon realizing that he used the tree as a distraction in order to throw his spear behind it. Still, the warrior didn't panic, as he managed to block it using his swords. And with that being said, the protagonist dashed forward, then grabbed the spear that he had launched at his opponent. Seeing how focused and calm the debuff master was, the boy began to fear the worst. Only then did our hero resort to the third form of the spirit art of Shakiro, which was also known as Lightning Flash. Thus this allowed the debuff master to destroy his enemy's blade as well as deal great damage to him. Even so, the ranker managed to stand his ground, before expressing how painful this last move was. Now the streamer was filled with anger, seeing how he had almost met his end at the hands of a level 50, who realized that he had missed his target. Even so, our hero did try to learn the technique quickly by simply reading it in a manual. Just then he felt a pain coursing through his shoulder, and upon seeing this, his enemy realized that he had surpassed his limits, claiming that it was his fate for using a technique above his skills, and that it was pointless in the hands of someone like him. Then the protagonist felt alert upon seeing his enemy repair his sword using mana. So the boy decided to end the fight quickly, by using a technique that he was certain would ultimately cause his opponent's demise. Just like that, Asura had been unleashed. Upon seeing this, the protagonist was left baffled, as he witnessed the powerful skill coming his way. And due to its destructive power, he began to remember how one day he claimed to the master that his training would cause his demise, which the old man found pitiful as he was still going easy on him. So Dagus explained that one who had no potential needed to make great efforts, before urging our hero to get up in order to get stronger once and for all. With that being said, then the student asked his master if he was truly deprived of potential. Yet the old man couldn't understand what he was trying to say, and Siegfried explained that he wasn't sure if this training could reach the peak, seeing how he didn't have great talent, clarifying that he had full faith in the lessons, but he doubted himself due to his inability to complete regular training, and that a better candidate for Deus was out there. So upon hearing this, the old man asked the young one to take a look at him, when suddenly he directed his fist into his face, and the punch was so powerful that its shockwave was enough to destroy the giant rock behind him. This left the protagonist baffled, as this killer move had missed him by an inch. Just as Taesung Han was bursting out at his master for trying to end his life, the man claimed that he had chosen him for his gaze. Then Deus explained to a student who couldn't understand that, despite being but a regular fighter, his gaze had value. So the protagonist assumed what he was saying was that he had a good perception. Yet the man poked him in the eye, and affirmed that this wasn't what he was trying to say. And while the disciple began to roll and paint on the ground, the master explained how he liked how his eyes were always filled with courage, even in the face of the strong. Deus pointed out that even in front of his punch the young man didn't counter, yet in reality, he didn't have enough time to process it. Then the old man affirmed that the young man would forever remain a weakling, if the rest of his body isn't worthy of his courageous gaze, and so he angrily ordered him to restart the training, as the rock had been destroyed, which baffled the protagonist, as it was the master who destroyed it. Upon recalling the past conversation he had with his master, then the young man realized that the Asura skill would never catch up to the speed of Deus Punch, and so he decided to pour his complete focus into his perception. In order to make the old man proud by dodging the first of the many slashes as he evaded the second, the protagonist dashed forward, jumping into the air and dodging slash after slash. With that being said, he made his way into a blank point in the attack, in order to reach his enemy, and finally get a hold of him. BJ Raptor was left stunned, as his opponent showcased an inhuman reaction speed, by avoiding all of his slashes, yet the protagonist affirmed that it was he who lacked speed, as he summoned his blunt weapon, before giving his opponent the final blow. And just like that, he bid farewell to the fake prodigy. With that being said, the ranker met his end, making our hero the big winner of the event. Upon being eliminated, baffled comments began to fill his stream. Frustration began to build up and erupted as rage as the boy threw away his VR glasses. The young man couldn't believe that despite all of his hard work he had been slain by a regular player, and so the devastated one was now more determined than ever to end the hero's life. All of this happened while the sun was setting on the real world. Meanwhile, back in the game, our hero was left as the winner of Battle Survival. The protagonist knew very well that the match could have gone either way, and that his opponent would have won if he was well rested. Just then the anchor dropped the rarest item he had on him, which was none other than the necklace from before, a mythical item known as Soul Division Device. Taesung Han was surprised to see something so precious in his possession. The young man began to wonder whether he should sell it for a fortune, or just use it for another end, when suddenly a flying ship appeared in the sky, and landed near our hero. As the ship opened and revealed the red carpet, many guards came down. With that, a man began to approach our hero and saluted him as Siegfried, the only survivor of the big event. The man presented himself as Baron Nidalberg, and someone sent by the Emperor Schutkart von Posterior, before congratulating the young one on his victory, making our hero bow in respect and thankfulness. With that being said, the Baron decided to transmit to the protagonist the very words of the ruler. Yeah, just as the noble began, the adventurer became lost in his thoughts, thinking of how incredible it was of him to be the victor of a big event he had joined by accident. He then gave many credits for his victory to Wu Jinchon, while wondering about the reason behind his great assistance. This slipped out our hero, which didn't escape the Baron, and yet when asked about it, the hero claimed that he was just cold, so the Baron affirmed that he would be quick. With that being said, the Emperor gave the winner of the competition the right to rule the region of Proserpine, and just like that, our hero was bestowed the name Siegfried van Verdwassa. With that, his username had been changed to the one given to him by the Emperor, and he earned 3 new titles for winning the event and becoming a king. Taesung Han was left baffled, as his new title meant that he was now from the Proserpine region. The Baron congratulated the young man for being a crowned king, which the flattered one couldn't help but feel awkward about. Yet the man explained that he just needed time to adapt to his new title before asking him to get close. The new king was surprised to see the Baron asking while whispering to keep the reason behind his victory a secret for the sake of the Emperor's credibility, making him realize that the organizers knew that he had landed on the island by mistake, and while the prize was being brought to him, he felt grateful that they weren't too strict about it. Then the noble presented to the protagonist an elixir gifted to the winner by the Emperor, known as the Elixir of Validation, that cancels the effects of Order of Self-Destruction. Yet our hero knew very well that this would be pointless to him, as he wasn't under the effect of the skill, making him wonder if he should sell it. But he quickly shook this idea off and decided to keep it, as it could demonstrate itself useful. One day, 3 days had passed since our hero's victory, and a shovel was being used at a construction site by none other than the golem maker from the event, Sheng Gu. His boss urged him to get faster, a command that the boy tried to obey. The man then asked him to get softer, as he was working to pay off his mother's surgery, but he claimed that his work was poor and that everyone had problems. Just then, the phone of the golem maker began to buzz. His boss then criticized him for picking it up in the middle of work, stating that no reason could explain such behavior. Yet just as he began to scream at him, the other side of the call confirmed to the young Seung-gu that an anonymous individual had agreed to give his mother a bone marrow. And even when it turned out that he couldn't know the identity of the benefactor, the thankful one couldn't help but break down in tears out of happiness. The boy was then asked if he could go to the hospital to fill in some papers, and so he left everything and rushed there. Upon seeing him running out of the construction site, his boss and his colleague assumed that he was fleeing work, and as he passed by a fancy car, the driver asked the one beside him if he was now happy. Wu Jinchon called out our hero for showing such generosity despite living in a miserable apartment, which he found ironic, seeing how much Chon had helped. The protagonist then proudly explained that he will be moving out soon, making his friend realize that his social status was getting higher. Siegfried confirms, claiming that he found treasures in the destroyed zones, and that he would have opted for a house better than a studio apartment if he had time. Wu Jinchon then called him out for not gifting him anything despite suffering damage that will take a long time to recover for his sake. He then grew intrigued upon hearing the protagonist claim that he bought him the drink he was sipping as a token of gratitude, Yet, Taesung Han affirmed that he was only joking and that he will be sure to properly repay his friend for his life-changing support, before thanking him. Hearing this left the overleveled one pleased. Wu Jinchon decided to ask our hero something, making him grow curious. The guard asked the debuff master the reason behind him not using his nerving skills against the streamer. Taesung Han explained the debuff only works in the range and that his opponent wouldn't have fallen for the same trick twice. Even so, it would have weighed on his consciousness to use debuffs on someone who was already tired. With that being said, he began to wonder about the reaction of the Genesis Guild that hired the ranker, especially their leader. Meanwhile, at the said guild's headquarters, a tense meeting was being held. The guildmaster decided to speak, recalling the words of his subordinates, claiming that the ranker had been defeated by a level 50 gamer. One of them apologized, claiming that it was just a small mistake, yet Desire affirmed that it wasn't small as there was a 150 level gap between them. Desire then placed his hand on the man's shoulder, asking him if he was the one behind this operation, and just as he confirmed, he found himself being decapitated by the guildmaster. The man in charge then asked his terrified subordinates to bring him everything about Siegfried. He demanded to know about the one who had killed the ranker and who had troubled his plan. The guildmaster of Genesis, known as Desire, had been angered. Sometime later, the protagonist asked the workers to be gentle with his super expensive stuff. One of the men asked the protagonist about his secret behind being able to afford such a big apartment while being so young, assuming him to be a business owner or a trader. But Taesung Han clarified that he had been making money by playing video games. The man quickly realized that the game in question was BNW, which his son also plays, and upon hearing this decided to encourage him to play it as a pro. Shortly after, the young man affirmed to the workers that he had transferred the rest of the money before bidding them farewell. Just as the three men left, our hero was left relieved. He then cracked a pleased smile, as he was now filled with joy, seeing how he had accomplished his dream of moving out. As early this year, he wouldn't even dare to desire owning such a fancy apartment, even if pure coincidence led him to participate in the big event. It turned out to be a happy accident, as the profit he had made from it allowed him to become debt-free as well as get a fancy apartment. This almost made him thankful towards the drunken captain who caused all of this. With that being said, our hero could now resume his search, as he sought to find Herbert's ultimate weapon. A little later, on a deserted island, located south of the continent, Ham was delighted by the weather, as it offered him a chance for vacation. Just then, someone told him to quickly follow, threatening to abandon him behind. The pet claimed that they should just enjoy their days off, yet the master affirmed that they weren't here for the pleasure of it. And while the hamster called the protagonist out for being too serious, the hero is left intrigued as it had found an outfit to its size. After the unplanned events of Survivor's Battle, the hero had finally set foot on the treasure island, where the ultimate weapon of the mad blacksmith resides. Even so, the island itself feels odd as it was deprived of mana and monsters. Truth be told, the serenity of this island was almost terrifying. Siegfried was once again surprised as the inventory window appeared on its own, and suddenly the map came out as a piece of paper that the Great Forest for it recognized as the map of the lost treasure, and upon seeing it flying away at quick speed, the protagonist realized that he was supposed to tail it down, and so he asked his pet to hold on. Well, before launching himself at lightning speed, this kind of quick trip always annoyed the Great Forest spirit. After closely following the map and seeing it go inside the cave, Siegfried realized that it must be where the final weapon was hidden. He could detect a faint and mysterious scent of mana coming out of it. With that being said, he decided to leave the hamster at the entrance for his safety, yet Ham claimed that he will guard the entrance. Shortly after, the hero was left baffled, upon finally laying his eyes on Herbert's ultimate weapon. As the torches were suddenly lit, he realized that the small mana he had sensed was coming from the weapon. The masterpiece was a mythical type of necklace with infinite durability known as Staff of God, which was modeled after the fabled weapon of the Lord of Chaos. Its power amazed the hero as it could be launched outside the atmosphere and directed towards a target chosen by the owner, causing damage to a very wide area. But just then he realized that this power could be used once a year, which didn't sound right, seeing how it didn't resemble the blacksmith's creative genius. Even so, he decided to take it with him. Just like that, the mythical item analyzed the protagonist, and upon judging him, accepted to bond with him. Suddenly, upon grabbing the staff, the hero's surroundings suddenly changed. The baffled young man assumed that he was now inside a dungeon, when suddenly a sudden presence behind him claimed that he was the one that would take on his incomplete work. This left the debuff master alerted as he took a defensive stance and asked the Great Spirit to introduce itself. The creature claimed that the protagonist was now seeing a mirage of his creation as he had implanted a memory into the mythical weapon. Hearing this made the hero realize that he was now face to face with the blacksmith of death, Herbert. Seeing him surprised our hero as he had expected him to be a dwarf rather than an orc, which annoyed Herbert, claiming that his skills far surpassed the short dwarves, which the hero found ironic, as he himself was rather short for an orc. Herbert explained that he was happy to meet the one that would take on his incomplete work, which intrigued the hero, as he was only here for the weapon. The orc left claiming that the Staff of God was yet to be finished, and that he had passed away a long time ago. In other words, our hero was now responsible for completing the mythological weapon, yet upon hearing this, The hero burst out at the monster, affirming that he had gone through hell just to get an unfinished weapon. He had a hard time believing that the great weapon that Shakiro had been searching for all his life had never been completed. After taking some time to think, the angry Taesung-han threw the powerful staff of God on the ground. To the orc's horror, the angered blacksmith claimed that he didn't give his unfinished staff to the protagonist for him to treat it as such. But the furious young man claimed that since he was now the owner of the weapon, the orc had no right to judge the way he treats it, leaving him baffled. He then popped out the system window, claiming that even the mythological weapon recognizes him as the owner. Taesung-han claimed that he wanted to abandon it in a place far from here, leaving the orc mad, yet the creature quickly submitted, upon hearing that the new owner threatened to throw his pretty away. Just like that, the protagonist forced a mutual respect between him and the blacksmith. The debuff master claimed that they were now ready to converse, before asking the orc how to finish the staff. Herbert claimed that in order to finish the weapon, the protagonist had to listen to the story he had to tell. Yet just as the blessed quest began to tell the tale of how he wanted to create the ultimate weapon, the irritated protagonist ordered him to cut straight to the chase and tell him what he wants to know, and so he accepted. With that being said, the debuff master had acquired an item, which left him intrigued, as it was Herbert's blueprint, which was a world rank recipe for creating the greatest weapon. The orc explained that only a grandmaster level blacksmith could use the blueprint in order to make him the final weapon. Yet as he claimed that he was lucky that every age had at least one grandmaster, he realized that this wasn't the biggest problem. So the orc asked him to look at the next page, and upon seeing it, the hero was left stunned, as he was supposed to collect a particular set of materials. The blacksmith knew very well that they weren't easy to find, yet the hero claimed that it was in fact impossible. Particularly the heart of a demon lord, Taesung-han apologized to the blacksmith of death, stating that he wouldn't be able to finish his weapon, leaving him with a sad expression. Herbert, who now looked defeated, regretted not beginning work on the staff earlier in order to complete it in his lifetime. Yet after seeing how unfazed the hero was, he called him out for not even pretending to show some compassion. Siegfried asked him to lighten up, as he understood him very well, before pointing out how he was a mythical blacksmith, making the orc realize that the young man didn't deny his request. So the hero clarified, claiming that he will need a lot of time in order to gather the materials. Yet he affirmed that he needed to gain power first, which could potentially better his odds at getting the necessary materials, and so he asked Herbert to wait for him and do something to pass the time. Meanwhile, upon hearing this, the blacksmith claimed that there was still much he hadn't learned before, expressing his gratitude towards the owner of the weapon. He then decided to give him another gift that would aid him in gaining more power and advancing quicker on his journey, which was the Mega Rush Elixir that increases EXP by 70% for 7 days. Yet good records have to be infused without progress. He also offered him his name template that would allow him to buy any item for half its value at the Beamerlian head store, which pleased our hero. With that being said, the legendary blacksmith wished for the young man to grow more powerful quickly in order to realize his dream. Taesung-han thanked him, claiming that he will do his best. Meanwhile, outside the cave, the bored spirit waited for his master to come back. Yet just as he got out of the cave, the hamster began to complain about the long wait. Dahinhim then asked him if he had gotten the legendary weapon. The hero confirmed, explaining that it needed to be completed. With that matter being settled, our hero was now free to farm the EXP he had lost once again, which annoyed the hamster as it wasn't amusing. But just then the hero received a notification, which left him annoyed as it made him remember a certain problem. Siegfried was tasked with going to his new kingdom, where his new subjects awaited his arrival in order to become their first king. After some time, our hero was now on the forest path leading to the Proa kingdom that he was to rule in the Proatine region. Hamhim quickly called out the place for being miserable, as it didn't even possess a gateway. Taesung-han was greatly annoyed, as he was supposed to govern the people of such a backward region instead of freely farming EXP, and so he began to angrily complain, which Hamhim asked him to stop as it began to even disturb him. Yet the debuff master affirmed that he had every right to do so, seeing how much time he had lost with the great event and the treasure hunt. Hamhim tried to calm him down by claiming that becoming king was something great, and that he might be rewarded for being a good sovereign. Yet the adventurer affirmed that he didn't want the heavy burden of the crown, as no rewards for ruling well were guaranteed. And just as he began to complain about how annoying everything related to kingdoms was in the game, which is why he only wanted to take the resources. Yet upon seeing the window urging him to get to Proa once again, the hero rushed in anger, ordering it to disappear. Taesung-han couldn't help but feel that something wasn't right in the matter, as he began to wonder about the reason behind the emperor giving an entire kingdom to a simple adventurer as a reward. The pet was then left confused, as his master began to eye him in another way, was then offended as his master called him out for getting heavier, making him claim that he worked out regularly. Since the hamster is only seen eating, he claimed that it was big enough to walk on its own, yet the pet refused to leave the comfy shoulder. When suddenly they heard a scream, the great forest spirit recognized it to be the voice of a nearby magnificent girl in danger, and as it urged its master to go check the matter, the boy began to think of how it must be a bad sign for such a problem to occur at the entrance of his domain. At the same time, One of the goons told the girl that she should have just complied, while the other estimated that she would fetch them 1,000 gold coins. The terrified blonde girl with the pointy ears begged to be spared, so the kidnappers stated that they won't eliminate a fine product like her. The pointy ears began to cry as they grabbed her by her hair, trying to take her away. Just then, as the man enjoyed her suffering, our hero resorted to quick draw in order to summon the fist of the golem and smack the aggressor away. Just like that, the player known as Darmindong, Iron Axe, had been eliminated. His friend was astonished upon seeing his ally getting defeated with one single strike, and so he tried to resort to his magic in order to defend themselves, before asking his opponent if he had any idea about their identities. Siegfried claimed that they were but mere scum, who wanted to play the bad guys in the game, and that they were in desperate need of a beatdown. Upon seeing how powerful his new opponent was, he asked him about his name and the guild he belonged to. Well, before he could even respond, Hammond popped out claiming that his master was the landowner, which pleased our hero as it was not scary or odd. Hearing this shocked the blonde girl. With that being said, the goon recognized the protagonist as the one who had battled survivors. When suddenly he was hit in the head by a helmet, the protagonist claimed that the villain didn't recognize him in time, before punching him in the face, ultimately slaying him while being annoyed as even regular players now recognized him. The new king then checked on the elf, who affirmed she was unharmed, while the hamster reassured her that they had taken care of the villains. Yet the protagonist affirmed that he was the one that had done all the fighting, but the pet claimed that he was the one protecting the blonde elf. The girl then introduced herself as Natasha, a resident of the woods, before asking our hero for his name. With that being said, the new king, using his new title and his pet, introduced themselves to the grateful elf. Upon hearing the true name of the hero, she realized that he wasn't lying when he claimed to be the new king, leaving him a little bit embarrassed. The protagonist was then left baffled, upon learning from the elf that this kingdom hadn't had a human ruler in 2 centuries. Natasha explained that Protein had many problems, and that many humans tried to kidnap her before, and that some even had taken her elven friends and family. Upon hearing this, the hero thought for a while and took pity, and so he decided to escort the girl safely to her house. And while she tried to humbly deny his kindness, he insisted, claiming that he wanted to hear her story. The king wanted to know more about his new domain. Shortly after, the girl thanked the new ruler for going this far with her, claiming that from here on she can walk alone, yet he wanted to escort her further, and she affirmed that there was no need as her village was nearby. The boy was then left confused as the elf asked him to give her his hand. With that being said, he received a gift that left him intrigued, as this was something given to Natasha by her late mother. This was the unique rank ring, known as Floral Ring of Maternal Love, that disappears after restoring the low health bar of the wielder to the fullest. Upon seeing this, the hero immediately refused, claiming that he didn't need it, as he can come back to life seeing how he was from the other world. Yet the elf claimed that things were different for the NPCs, and that this was a gift from her late mother. The girl explained that on her deathbed, her mother asked her to generously repay any kindness, and seeing how the man had saved her life, she gave him this keepsake as a token of thankfulness, leaving him no choice but to accept it. With that being said, Natasha decided to go on her way, before wishing the king glorious days after thanking him for coming to save Proa. Just like that, they bid each other farewell. Tai Sung Han was left uncomfortable by these rewards, as he had first gotten a ring from the golem maker who tried to save his mother, and now a new one from the elven girl, meaning that he had 2 rings with ridiculously long names from 2 characters that love their mothers. The path asked the master about his next course of action, so Siegfried explained how, according to the elf, this kingdom was miserable, as it was home to dangerous monsters, dungeons, as well as alpha hunters and barbarian tribes in the northwest. The hamster then added that there resides an empire lord who demands human sacrifices, and after realizing that the empire was fully aware of these problems, he realized that his position wasn't a reward but a way for them to get rid of problems. The hero finally understood why no human had ruled this land in 2 centuries, while his pet claimed that it would be difficult in their new domain. Even so, the protagonist recalled how the elf had given him her most precious possession, meaning that any problems he solves here could lead him to a great reward, and as the hamster agreed, the master finally made up his mind. The protagonist was now determined to try becoming the best ruler there is, which was a mentality that pleased the great forest spirit. A little later, at the gates of the Kasin castle inside our hero's new kingdom, one of the guards pointed out how boring this day was, and so he asked his friend if he had anything to tell him, yet he stated that he didn't, as he was placed here as well. Yet just as the both of them decided to take a nap, not a soul was coming from the outside. One of them suddenly spotted an outsider approaching, which was none other than our hero, who was feeling uncomfortable. The 2 of them readied their weapons and asked him to state his name. The protagonist shyly thanked the 2 guards for their work, before revealing himself as the new king of this domain. The 2 men assumed that they didn't hear him well, so our hero affirmed once again that he was their new king, before introducing himself as Siegfried von Proa. Upon hearing this, the 2 men were left speechless, and after some time they burst out laughing, claiming that the one in front of them must be a crazy one, seeing how a ruler would never wear such poor outfits. Hum Hum tried to defend his master, claiming that he was truly their new king, despite looking like a homeless beggar, which sounded more like an insult to him. The two guards immediately began to mock the hamster, calling it a fat mouse that thinks itself to be adorable. With that, the hero affirmed once again his position, explaining that he had won an event where the reward was to be appointed king by the emperor, and just as he presented the imperial letter to them as proof, it was suddenly stabbed. One of the guards decided to insult the young man by using his spear to fetch the document. The two men began reading it, and were left shocked, claiming that it was truly a letter from the emperor, but just as he seemed to be apologizing, the guard rudely tore up the letter, claiming that he was only messing with him. The man then explained that's why the hero tried to track them. He had made a grave mistake, as the person despised most by the subjects of this kingdom was none other than the ruler of the empire himself. The two men then pointed their spears at him, explaining that the superiors did notify them of his arrival, and even if he was the true king, they would never accept him. Upon hearing this, the hamster quickly got off his master's shoulder, knowing what was about to happen, as he had realized that words were of no use, and so he ordered and threatened the soldiers to bring him their higher-ups at once. With that being said, the triggered guards charged at our hero in order to drive him away, yet the new king quickly dodged the spear, before punching the first of the two men, and just as the second was about to attack him, he quickly grabbed the spear after the fallen one, and used it to channel his lightning spur. The attack was so strong that it shattered the gate the two men were guarding. The guard was left baffled as the hero explained that despite not wanting to harm his subjects, he had no choice but to do so, as he had been attacked first. With that being said, the new ruler decided to establish order in his new kingdom. Chaos began to rise inside the walls of the castle. The guards charged ahead in order to arrest the outsider. As the debuff master attacked anyone close to him, the guards were doing their best in order to take him down. The hero then called them out for their weakness, claiming that it was the reason behind all the problems of this country. The red-headed man couldn't believe his eyes, assuming that the adventurer in front of him must be attacking the castle due to them wronging him in the past. One of the subordinates of the man named Roran claimed that the intruder could wipe them out before they could become able to neutralize him, and so the red-haired man asked for the protagonist to be eliminated, using any means necessary. No matter what. With that being said, all guards charged at the new king at once. Upon seeing that they were now motivated, the hero assumed that he should just use a debuff skill in order to eliminate them all at once. When suddenly a knight rushed in, and delivered a powerful slash that separated the charging guards from the protagonist. Taesung Han was left baffled as this attack would have been enough to eliminate him, and so he quickly assumed that the lady who was angry at him for attacking the vessel was a captain. This was the level 101 NPC, known as Oscar Deputy Commander-in-Chief of the Army, as well as commander of the 1st Mountain and 2nd Artillery Battalions. Oscar claimed that the intruder shall be punished for attacking their nation. Before asking him to brace himself, Taesung Han realized that this opponent was far stronger than any other guard, which piqued the hero's curiosity and made him wonder whether he should reveal himself or let it be. When suddenly the hamster decided to speak up, screaming that they had no right to judge them for their actions. As they were attacked first, the lady felt shocked by seeing the cute creature. Even so, Roran affirmed to the lady that they shouldn't trust them, seeing how they were clearly the ones who destroyed the gate and attacked the soldiers. Upon hearing that the man considered them as outsiders, the protagonist began to think that he should eliminate him first. Taesung Han explained that the emperor made him king of these lands, yet the guards at the entrance didn't believe a word he said and made fun of him, thus he was just acting in self-defense, which the pet confirmed. Lady Oscar didn't believe him, stating that he should have a letter from the emperor with him if he was telling the truth. So the hero revealed how the official document had been destroyed by the guards, leaving the one who had torn it apart afraid for his life. With that being said, the lady decided to check the protagonist's words by using a communication spell which her colleague was supposed to answer. But then she added that the protagonist would be greatly punished if he was uttering lies. The unfazed king accepted these conditions. Just then, someone from inside the castle asked about the reason behind all the noise outside. The servant confirmed to the noble that someone was fighting the guards claiming to be the new king, which surprised the man as he had truly arrived, and when asked if he knew about the new king's arrival, the fat man confirmed, claiming that the capital told him weeks ago. The noble claimed that the commotion wasn't worth such a pointless matter, yet the servant affirmed that it had importance if it concerned the new king. The aristocrat then claimed that he will sweet-talk the new ruler and have him either banished or eliminated, though the servant affirmed it to be pointless as he was a player. This angered the noble and made him ask the servant Batista about the one he pledged loyalty to, and when he was asked if he was now servant of the new king, the man got scared and affirmed with the noble that he would only serve him the fat one, then had a hard time climbing the stairs, as he affirmed to Batista that this country didn't need any new king, as its rightful ruler was none other than him, Count Bourbon, a lord of Proa. With that, the count asked for the presence of the hunters that same night, as he had a new target for them. Shortly after, Lady Oscar bowed before her new king. Her and the rest of the guards were on their knees in front of the protagonist Roran, quickly asked his new majesty to overlook his insolence, while the lady claimed that she will accept any punishment he deems right. With that being said, the hero affirmed that they should have trusted his words from the start, while the angry hamster called them out for bowing. now after trying to kill him, and while he affirmed that and they disgusted him, the hero realized that the pet had been losing cuteness, yet to the hamster's shock, the master decided to forgive the guards for their insolence. Thus the man thanked him. Ronan was particularly thankful for this mercy, yet the hero had his terms. He wanted the two guys who made fun of him to ask for his forgiveness in public. By dancing naked in the middle of the city, Ham decided to add to this punishment by stating that Ronan should also partake in it as well, by dancing naked between the two of them, leaving him baffled. With that being said, the hero decided to make his way into the castle, so the deputy commander decided to escort him inside. His Majesty asked about the one currently leading his domain, so Lady Oscar revealed him to be the current lord of this land, Count Bourbon. The king asked about the count's whereabouts, so the lady claimed that he was in his bedroom, where she shall guide our hero. He was surprised to see that the count didn't show himself outside, despite the chaos he had caused. Yet he realized the reason behind this hate towards him, as he had been appointed as the rightful ruler when the count had been ruling it as its practical king. Just then, the lady stopped and decided to talk to the hero. But before she could say anything, the fat noble made his entrance, cheerfully declaring that the rightful ruler of the country had arrived before claiming that he was honored by his presence. The hero whispered to Oscar if they kept their monsters inside, which offended the count, who heard his Majesty realizing that he was referring to him. With that being said, the fat man and his servant introduced themselves to the new king, who introduced himself as well. The count then brought up how he punished his soldiers for making fun of the new ruler, yet the debuff master affirmed that there was no need for it, seeing how it was but a misunderstanding. And while the pet wondered about the identity of the man he assumed to be a pig, the hero asked him to rest, reassured regarding that matter, and so the fat man praised his new ruler for his great kindness. The count then invited the king to enjoy the feast made in his honor, and when the pet demanded nuts from the pig, he clarified that he was Bourbon. As she watched them walk away, the deputy commander put on a concerned expression. Later that same night, the hamster affirmed that it had been a long time since he ate his fill like this. The hero began to think of how unexpected it was from the count, a comfortable guest bedroom until his own had been prepared. Ham asked his master to relax, yet the protagonist wanted to take a look at something first, and when asked about it, he claimed that it was the report he asked for on the present situation of his new kingdom. Upon reading it, he realized that the domain had many problems, as it had many areas deprived of greenery. He also had very few subjects in his kingdom who suffered from miserable infrastructure, and possessed very few potentials such as Lady Oscar, meaning that Proa was dying from the inside. With that, the protagonist finally understood why his subjects despised the emperor, as he didn't help with their problems despite knowing about them. Even so, the protagonist possessed the Proa Protection Act that would shield him from invading guilds like Genesis for 3 years, yet he knew very well that there was much work to be done, making him wonder if he should clear the nearby dungeon as a start. But just then, he felt alerted and used Quick Draw, before throwing his weapon at the sudden presence that appeared on his balcony. The startled pet assumed that they were under attack, yet to their shock, the intruder was none other than Lady Oscar. Upon seeing this, the king was left startled, as the female knight had made her way into his balcony, and while the hamster assumed that the lady was here for him, which is why she kept on eyeing him, the hero asked her for the reason behind her presence, so she quickly went on her knee and apologized to the ruler for her sudden visit, claiming that she had an important matter to discuss in secret with him. Just then, the hero realized that the lady was bleeding from the hand. The spirit claimed that they should heal it quickly in order to not let it get infected. With that being said, he decided to give the necessary medical equipment by using his skill Infinity Bundle. The lady then thanked the cute creature, who proudly affirmed that he would supply as many healing items as she needed. Taesung Han claimed that the lady must be in great pain, but as she explained how knights were used to such wounds, she was stung by pain, so the hero affirmed that everyone suffers, even the mightiest of humans. As he arrived with a bandage, he asked her about the important matter that she only judged twice to bring up this late at night. After some hesitation, Oscar asked Siegfried if he truly wanted to become their ruler, which she didn't quite understand, and so she humbly explained how one needs the determination to rule this land, which is why it had been deprived of a king for 2 centuries. Oscar then advised the man to rid himself of his title, if he wasn't serious about it. After some time, the hero apologized for breaking up the seriousness, and asked the knight for the reason why she was holding his hamster, which she couldn't explain, so the pet claimed that she had fallen for his cuteness. With that being said, despite knowing that her next comment would be rude, she claimed that the ruler must be aware of how serious the situation is. With that, the debuff master affirmed to the knight that he understands the reason behind her worries, and so he reassured her that he will do everything in his power in order to rule his new domain. Well, before formally swearing it, the lady asked if she could really have faith in his words, which he confirmed, and when she asked if he was truly telling her the truth, he confirmed once again. Yet when she asked for a third time, he expressed that her behavior annoyed him, and so she excused herself while the pet claimed that his master's appearance made him hard to trust. With that being said, the lady decided to cut straight to the chase, as the hero, as it meant that he had finally earned her trust. Yet to his surprise, she began to warn him about the lord of this land. Siegfried explained that he disliked the man, but couldn't find a reason for her to tell him this, as she was serving the man, and he was a new ignorant ruler. Just then Oscar's expression darkened, and so she affirmed that she is only loyal to the kingdom itself and its people, not the count, and actually explained that the fat noble didn't deserve any kind of trust, as he exploits people and imposes heavy taxes upon them. Yet the protagonist was particularly shocked upon hearing that the count manipulates adventurers in order to force elves into slavery. The count was originally a capable and corrupt official at the central government, who was bounced from it as his misdeeds had surpassed his good actions. With that, he was appointed as the lord of this land, and sought to strengthen his power and authority by working with the elf hunters, with the terms being simple as the hunters would slay any elf near the castle in exchange for the count's blind eye regarding their crimes. Recently, the man even began to give the hunters a share of the tax, claiming it to be for the sake of maintaining order. The fat noble would even regularly send 10 of the kingdom's subjects as a sacrifice to the vampire lord, claiming it to be necessary to avoid its wrath. And while the hero realized that the lord of his kingdom is more corrupted than he had anticipated, the hamster was left angered by his malice. Oscar was then left shocked as the hero affirmed that he will eliminate the evil count in order to rid himself of the root of many problems. So the lady explained that despite being a despicable ruler, he had somewhat of a good reputation, claiming that taking him out would greatly anger the courtiers and the populace. So the hero asked her if she truly believed that someone who offers his own as tributes to vampires was really the one holding the kingdom from falling apart. The lady tried to clarify herself, while the hero knew very well that she wanted him to start slowly, yet he affirmed that he usually attacks first, then reflects on his actions. The protagonist then explained that he had promised a particular individual to cure this kingdom. With that being said, the king decided to go on his way to the night shock. The hero claimed that they had a traitor to slaughter. Later on, someone having a fancy dinner was baffled by the price the others demanded. A man from the Elf Hunters Guild demanded 5,000 additional gold coins. This greatly annoyed the count, who claimed that the hunters were trying to abuse the kindness he was showing them. Yet the man explained that the original task was to take down monsters, meaning that what the count asked was another side job. The thug claimed 5,000 was the least he could do if he was asking them to take down a monarch. With that being said, the annoyed fat noble had no choice but to agree. But just as he did, a loud sound was heard. All were left intrigued, so the startled count asked Batista about the cause of the loud bang. Just then, the door had almost been shattered, making the noble terrified. And just then, as the sound echoed once again, someone claimed that the door in front of him was strong. Just like that, the hero destroyed it and barged into the room. Siegfried called out the lord of his land for eating after having been to a feast. The count was shocked to see his king arrive. Taesung Han claimed that the man's servant who asked him to flee was very loyal, seeing how he tried to forbid him from entering by giving many excuses, before stating how funny it was to catch the man in the middle of his deal to take his life. Yet as the man claimed that this was a misunderstanding, the hero took a menacing tone, claiming that he just wanted to converse with the traitor. He then dropped the servant on the ground, in order to have his supposed conversation with the noble. The man wanted to clarify himself, which greatly amused the protagonist, as he was going to try to explain himself meeting the Elf Hunter Guild in the middle of his own castle. The count claimed that they were all friends, but the hunter asked him to drop the act as they had been discovered. He then asked his business partner if the protagonist was truly their target in a mocking tone, claiming that he wasn't but a kid. This greatly angered the hero, who ordered him to stay silent, claiming that the adults were having a conversation. The criminal tried to burst out at him, only to be met by a golem fist in the face. Upon seeing this, his henchmen were left baffled. The king then asked the traitor to approach him. He demanded it be done at once, as he took on a menacing tone, but the coward claimed that there was no need, as they were close enough, didn't think that they were far away. The noble tried his best to keep that distance between the two of them, and so upon seeing this, the king charged at him, and slammed his head into the ground. With that being said, the monarch claimed that he will now formally execute the count, for all of his sins towards Probe, as well as offering his subjects as tributes to the vampire lord. The noble laughed at the angry king, claiming that he was but a simple child, and called him out for trying to be righteous despite being ignorant. The count firmly claimed that all he did were but necessary sacrifices in order to bring peace to the kingdom, claiming that he knew nothing about Brave New World, seeing how he was a newcomer there. Just then, the fat man grabbed a plate, and suddenly smashed it on the ruler's head. The angered monarch, who was now bleeding, recalled how the noble claimed that he had sinned for the sake of peace, and so he reassured him, declared that from now on he will bring prosperity to the kingdom without tributing anyone. And so he asked the fat man to witness his prowess from the depths of the fiery pits, before finally smashing his head. Just then, Lady Oscar arrived, and was left shocked, as the king had truly executed the corrupt noble. The pet reassured her that despite his master being a hothead, he always had a strategy in mind, yet even so, he himself wasn't certain of those words. Ham then claimed that the protagonist always keeps his promises, which made him sound even less trustworthy to the lady. He actually decided to shake off any doubts, thinking that she must showcase her loyalty to the new king who killed the count due to his faith in her. Yet as she began to think of her duty, a spear was launched at her, and so she dashed forward and broke it with a single kick. But as the knight apologized for arriving late, her face began to blush upon hearing the master praise her for her magnificent kick, so she explained how she had forgotten her weapon. So the protagonist decided to give her his greatsword, claiming that she must have the ability to wield it. The hero then reminded her that he shall only be doing daring steps from now on. Oscar knew very well what he meant. Siegfried explained that they should take care of the hunters first, as he despised having such disgusting creatures in his home. And so the lady grabbed the greatsword, in order to obey her king. With that being said, the deputy commander had been ordered to execute the intruders. Oscar concentrated her mana before, finally lanced with her spoiler and unleashing her power, and showering her 2 targets with slashes at a devastating speed. The hunter henchmen were left baffled, as their blood splattered everywhere. Upon seeing how quick the lady was, even with a heavy greatsword, the hero decided to ask her for help as her skills surpassed his. But just then he felt alerted, and warned the lady of an attack coming from her back. Suddenly a giant creature of stone punched the knight, who parried at the last moment using the hero's greatsword. Creature had great destructive power. Its summoner explained how his superior Cheng Yong will be angered seeing how his 2 men and the count had been slain. With that being said, the 3rd strongest of his guild, Masion, the summoner of level 85, decided to eliminate the ruler and his knight. Oscar realized that the summoner's power was far greater than his 2 henchmen, which is why she asked the ruler to let her handle him. Yet the protagonist was determined to slay him himself. The lady tried to defeat, but the king ordered her to stay out of it. The level 85 called out the level 50 for being weaker than his servant, so the hero pointed out how he made him bleed from the nose despite being of a lower level. Upon hearing this, the summoner promised to repay the pain our hero inflicted upon him with one much greater, and so he asked his creature forearms to kill the protagonist at once. But as the golem charged at him, our hero raised his hand and activated his skill Supreme Contempt that allowed him to inflict more damage upon stronger opponents. With this skill being activated, the hero took advantage of the fact that he was 35 levels lower than the monster, in order to demolish him with a single punch. Upon seeing this, the summoner was left astonished, as his powerful creature had fallen in front of one attack, delivered by a mere level 50 beginner. Siegfried affirmed that the summoner will receive the same fate as the summoned, filling him with fear. And just like that, atrocious screams of pain were heard from inside the castle. Non-playable characters were different from players, as they didn't possess the rune of transcendence that allowed them to comprehend or see levels, yet they could still grasp one's power by feeling the amount of mana he possesses, which explained why the lady looked baffled. Oscar couldn't believe her eyes as her king had taken down an adventurer far stronger than him in a single blow, making her assume that there was a problem with her senses. The power of the protagonist was so great that she couldn't even sense it right. Suddenly she found herself blushing as her liege came in to check on her, and while she affirmed that she was unharmed, the man explained that it doesn't seem to be the case. The flustered lady demanded an explanation, so he showed her her bleeding hand, claiming that her injury had reopened upon parrying the attack of the golem. And while the embarrassed knight demanded the hamster's bandages, the pet called out his master for failing to protect her, which surprised the hero. The knight explained that it was her job to protect the king, before pointing out how she was only causing him to worry now, and just as she checked if any other enemy was outside, the hero decided to give her another task. To her shock, she was ordered to bring all the members of the council to the throne room for a meeting. The protagonist was too deep into this matter, and decided to see it through to the end. Later on, as a crowd formed itself into the throne room, the members began to discuss how it was that they were summoned for a conference this deep into the night, as it hadn't been a day since the ruler arrived. The man claimed that the hero, who was overjoyed by becoming king, must be doing this in order to assert dominance, seeing how he was a young adventurer, and while his colleagues stated that they should go along with it, he began to wonder about the whereabouts of the count. Just then the door had been opened. New ruler of the kingdom had made his entrance. All were surprised, as the young king was injured and covered in blood. This caused him to be the subject of the quiet whispers of the crowd, wishing him to not be a bad ruler. With that, the hero began to remember how his master had taught him the very basics on how to recognize someone powerful from their appearance, claiming that he would walk with courage and straight shoulders and tight abdomen with burning eyes and relaxed face, told his student to always remember to walk with certainty and strength. Suddenly the system window popped up. Has acquired a new quest known as Sit on the Throne, which was exclusive to rulers and that consisted of taking seat on the throne in order to give a skill to the royal title. Upon seeing this, the hero realized that it had something to do with his status as the new king of Protein, which was a legendary title with no special effect. The protagonist assumed that the best thing about the title was just its name, hoping that the powers the title would get would be somewhat decent, and so he sat on the throne, allowing him to complete the quest. When suddenly Force of the Lord had been triggered, and his title of ruler had gained new powers that only worked in his domain, that increased his EXP farming, as well as giving him 10 levels, as well as additional levels depending on his own. Upon seeing this, the hero was left amazed as he had gained the ability to jump levels without doing anything. Just then, The system alerted him of effects of force of the Lord that could cause a power excess, yet the hero was quite understanding, hoping that it wouldn't be some kind of burden that comes with the crown. Suddenly, he felt a great pain coursing through his body as his level began to increase. As he kept on leveling up, Tae-sung Han cursed the company responsible for the game for making things so difficult. Even so, he decided to take on the pain, as in front of the lake of purification that he had bathed in during his training. This pain was nothing. Just then, the protagonist reached level 60, and as everyone was astonished, looking in disbelief except the pet, who admired the show, the king emerged. All-powerful Siegfried felt stronger than ever before, to the point where he assumed that such power would make his body explode. This allowed him to gain a new skill, but just as he was about to unveil it, thinking that it had something to do with nothing once again, someone was left amazed upon witnessing the force of the Lord. All were left baffled, thinking that this power wasn't but a fable. Tae-sung Han was surprised as he didn't expect the force of the Lord to be something so extraordinary. Ham asked the lady for an explanation, that it is a spell cast by the ancient mages, and that according to legend, it would strengthen anyone with a harsh land to rule, meaning that the domain of the kingdom had accepted the hero as its first rightful king. The hero was a little bit embarrassed as Oscar congratulated him for becoming the true lord, and his faithful companion proposed to throw in a party. Meanwhile, upon watching from afar, the royal historiographer was amazed by the fact that Promin had finally gained a true ruler, and so he decided to write it down in history. With that, the blonde man began to write a poem about Siegfried, the true ruler of this kingdom, who had been crowned by the force of the Lord. A little later, the hero, who had regained his clothes, stated that he was happy to meet them all before introducing himself, and explaining how he was designated as the new king of this kingdom, before presenting his excuses for summoning them at this hour. Yet the members of the council were happy to claim that they were all at his service, and that there was no need for apologies. Upon seeing their reactions, the hero realized that force of the Lord had given him great influence as he made his first announcement regarding the former lord, who had been sentenced to death, which shocked everyone. The king explained how the count had used his power for evil, cutting deals with criminals, committing atrocities in the name of justice, and sacrificing to the vampire, as he claimed that he doesn't negotiate with criminals, and that order couldn't last if it's built on the misery of others. A noble claimed that this was out of proportion. The ruler explained that it might be the case, but also affirmed that he will choose death over criminals, roaming freely in his kingdom, and so he declared that no one shall oppose him from reconstructing and keeping the public order on his own. That was the will of the new king. He then turned to the female knight, and promoted her to commander-in-chief of his army, which she gladly accepted. For that, he ordered his new commander to assemble all the forces and get ready for battle, as they will make their way to somewhere 3 hours away from the castle, in order to wipe out criminals. Later on, at the mountain fort of the Elf Hunters Guild, elves were crying in fear as a man grew furious at the death of the count. The servant explained to his superior that those they had sent had been slain as well, making the boss affirm that the only propon able to do so was Oscar. The level 100 guildmaster of the Elf Hunter Guild, Chonrong, realized that the female knight must have pledged loyalty to the new king and eliminated the count. With that being said, the subordinate asked his boss for orders, as the demand had been increasing, so he ordered him to tell the merchants to sell all the slaves, as well as hire some hitmen, seeing how they now needed to invade the kingdom, as the count had been slain. When suddenly a great explosion occurred, the guildmaster quickly rushed out to see what was happening, and couldn't believe his own 2 eyes. As the Propon army was assaulting his fort, the soldiers were doing their best in order to kill the elf hunters. Meanwhile, the king watched from afar with the commander, who affirmed that the surprise attack was successful. The ruler explained in terms the NPC could understand that most players were currently offline, and that they must have terrified them all, before pointing out the soldiers' good fighting skills. So the lady explained how training in the barren lands had helped those who fight barbarians regularly, as Oscar affirmed that their forces were much stronger than other domains. The hero had a hard time believing her, seeing how easily he took them on. Just then, the elf hunters decided to fight, seeing how they could respond while their opponents couldn't, and seeing how they had better equipment. The players were now more motivated than ever to slay the non-playable characters. The hero then pointed out how the commander had jinxed the army, so she had no choice but to confess that they lacked gear and skill, and so she drew out her sword, claiming that she shall descend on the battlefield in order to assist them. Yet the hero asked her to let the man handle this problem alone. Oscar was shocked, seeing how even if they won the battle, they would suffer great losses. So the protagonist explained that even if his army was still too weak, he could assist them in winning the battle, by using Zone of Mortality and Zone of Reality in order to reduce the enemy's defenses and nerf their stamina and mana. The players were left astonished as they had suddenly lost their strength. The hunters realized that they should evade instead of parrying, as one hit was enough to take them out. One of the men quickly realized that they were in the range of a debuff skill, and so he asked the others to flee as soon as possible. This left the ruler disappointed, as he could have gotten experience if the hunters were monsters, while Oscar asked him about the mechanism of his skill. According to the protagonist, this was something that his master taught him in order to deprive the enemy of his strength. He then explained that their forces could now easily win without losing anyone, seeing how they had become stronger than the enemy army. Oscar expressed how amazed she was by the genius of the king, who claimed that this was the reason for him stopping her from entering the battle. Just then, the leader of the enemy entered the battle, which was none other than the guild master himself. Swinging his giant attacks with each strike, many of the guards were blown away. This left the forces terrified by this monster's feat. Just then, the two guards who were terrified were grabbed by the face, and their skulls were brutally slammed into the ground by the guildmaster. The hunters were now relieved. Mango and Chanrung entered the battle, making their allies certain of their victory. The leader of the thugs took a deep breath and screamed for the new king of Proa to cancel his nerfing skill and face him in a one-on-one combat. The commander presented the red-headed man as the guildmaster of the elf hunters and asked the king permission to take him on, yet the hero refused as he had decided to take on his challenge. Even so, the knight affirmed that it was her job to shield her master, but he interrupted her, stating that he had the power to respond, and claiming that he had a duty of his own just like her, as a true king must protect his subjects. This left the lady speechless, when suddenly the hero threw his cloak at her, claiming that he didn't want it to be torn off once again. The knight tried to argue, yet the protagonist had already summoned his weapon and decided to descend, and so he asked the people to stay alive for his sake, as he descended upon the battlefield, claiming that he didn't want to lose any one of his new people. Even so, Oscar was still concerned for her king's safety. Afterward, we see the leader of the hunters annoyed that the king and the commander had fled without the army, but just then the subordinate alerted him of something approaching. This shocked the guildmaster, as they quickly realized the identity of this new attacker, seeing how it wasn't the knight commander. With that, the king decided to use his lightning spear, making it bounce between the hunters in order to target their boss, as the subordinates warned him about it. But the leader of the hunters affirmed that he had nothing to be afraid of, as he reflected the blunt weapon using his giant axe. The protagonist quickly grabbed it, before using divine attributions, in order to deliver a powerful strike that the criminal blocked using his giant weapon once again. The king praised the man for standing strong, yet the bandit boss had lost control of his limbs due to the electrical power. Just like that, he was hit and smacked into the ground, to a subordinate's horror. The hero then recalled how the guildmaster wanted to see who was the true leader between the two of them. This startled the hunter, as the protagonist declared with an amazing tone that he shall inflict upon him a great beatdown. With that, all eyes were laid upon the fight of the leaders. The king asked his troops to stand back, as this was his fight alone. This angered the subordinate of the guildmaster, who charged at our hero in order to avenge his boss. But just then, his fist charged with magic was blocked by the commander-in-chief. With that being said, the girl declared that the hunter was unfit to talk with her king, and that she would be his opponent. The man was left terrified as he was now in front of the great commander. Just like that, the protagonist tasked the lady with taking care of the powerful hunter, before turning to his own opponent and calling him out for resting too much, and claiming that he had given him more time than he needed in order to recover. The guildmaster was left ashamed by the situation. He then pressed the hero for his strength despite being a beginner, making him realize that fortune wasn't the only reason he won battle survival, which the hero found ironic. Seeing how he had almost killed the guildmaster with a single attack, the man then explained how BJ Raptor was rumored to have been defeated by someone using nerfing skills, before pointing out the one just used by our hero, yet the protagonist couldn't quite understand him, so the man unleashed his hidden power, before claiming that the hero managed to hit him with a lucky shot. Seeing how he had caught him off guard, the guildmaster, who had used the skill going berserk, affirmed that he would be fighting seriously from now on. Our hero was left amused upon seeing that his opponent was using a physical buff skill in order to counter his debuffs. With that being said, both leaders were now face to face. The axe wielder charged at the shield holder, only for the protagonist to quickly block his attack, before imbuing his blunt weapon with divine attribution, and delivering an upper strike to the guildmaster's chin. The man pointed out how the hero had used this skill on him before, which is why it wouldn't affect him any longer, as his skill enhances his physique and gives him total protection from attribute skills. With that being said, he delivered a powerful axe swing that our hero evaded at the last moment. Siegfried realized that his opponent's arrogance was coming from his immunity, and so he began to think of how he needed to use a non-attribute nerfing skill, and how Supreme Contempt still had entry set. With that being said, he decided to try another power, as the axe wielder was about to hit him from behind. The guildmaster grew angry upon seeing how unfazed his opponent seemed, and so he decided to make things a little more challenging, by reinforcing his axe using bloody hack slash and daring his opponent to tank his attack. The man claimed that this was his strongest skill, and that its power would keep on increasing each time the hero bleeds, as he bombarded him with attacks, before finally cutting his shield in half and blasting him away. The knight, who was in the middle of the fighting, became distracted by the situation of her king. Even so, she managed to block a punch from her opponent at the last second, yet with great difficulty, the hunter affirmed that it would be their guildmaster who triumphed over the ruler. Leaving the commander worried, the wielder of the axe began to drag his weapon on the ground, as he approached the young man who he decided to enlighten, seeing how inexperienced he seemed. According to the guildmaster, the kingdom of the protagonist was cursed, swarmed by inside and outside enemies, corrupt officials, barbarians, and vampires. before affirming that the hero had no chance of taking care of those problems, even if the emperor made him king. With that being said, the boss of the hunters demanded to be handed over the domain, as it should be handled by an adult, not a child. He then burst out in laughter, claiming that he would still allow the hero to live in Proa under his mercy, yet the protagonist remained unimpressed. With that being said, the king affirmed that the hunter had an annoying big mouth as he summoned a new weapon, and now, with a spear in hand, he revealed that he was well aware of the problems of his domain, affirming that they were many, which is why someone had to deal with them all by taking on this burden. The guildmaster affirmed that he was taking it easy on his opponent, seeing how young he was, but upon seeing how his threats and words didn't reach the protagonist, he charged at him in order to eliminate him. But to the criminal's shock, he was unable to turn on his skill. Just then, he was kicked in the face and blasted away by our hero. Even then, he managed to regain footing on the ground, still wondering about the reason behind his inability to resort to his skills, and just as he began assuming that it was a glitch, seeing how he had enough mana, he suddenly noticed that he was in the middle of a magic circle. The protagonist claimed that his skill must have great efficiency upon seeing the reaction on the man's face. With that, the criminal was filled with fury, as it was none other than the debuff master using his new skill, Wave of Oppression, in order to cancel his skills using electromagnetic interferences. And so the middle-aged man burst out at our hero, calling him a hacker, which the king took as a compliment, before deciding to give him a word of advice. Tai Sung Han then threatened the man, regarding him enslaving elves and entering his domain, while pointing his spear at his face. The protagonist affirmed that the criminal would be tracked down, and just as the guildmaster began to insult the hero, claiming that he could kill him without using skills, he was left shocked, as he was now being targeted by the spear art of Shakuro. Like that, the guildmaster had been the victim of the first form, Lightning Flash, leaving him to die topless. Tai Sung Han was annoyed by the fact that his opponent didn't stop blabbering, even at the moment of his death,